There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a meadow just before the weather turns, a stillness so deep it feels like the earth itself is holding its breath. In the early months of that year, across the rolling hills and quiet valleys of France, this same stillness settled over everything. The winter had been long, carrying with it a profound and heavy chill, but now the frost was finally receding. The soil was softening. The pale, fragile green of new life was beginning to push its way through the dark earth. It was springtime, a season that has always belonged to hope, to rebirth, to the simple, rhythmic turning of the world. But this spring carried a shadow. It was a gentle shadow, subtle and unassuming, yet it rested quietly at the edge of every waking thought. The history books often speak of the grand declarations, the shifting of borders, and the heavy, immovable lines drawn on maps. But the true story of this time was not written in ink on official documents. It was written in the quiet glances shared over morning coffee. It was written in the slow, deliberate way a mother folded her son's civilian clothes and placed them into a wooden chest. It was written in the hollow quiet of the village squares, where the voices of the young men had suddenly gone missing, replaced by the soft whistling of the wind through the eaves. They called it the strange war. A war of waiting. A war where the battlefields remained empty, blanketed not by smoke, but by the sweet, heavy scent of blooming apple orchards and damp soil. Imagine a small farming village, tucked away in the deep countryside. The morning mist clings to the cobblestones, glowing softly in the pale light of dawn. An older man, his hands withered and lined with the deep maps of a lifetime of labor, steps out of his stone cottage. He pulls his wool cap down against the morning chill. He does not look toward the east, toward the borders where the world feels so uncertain. Instead, he looks down at the earth. He knows that regardless of what men in distant capitals are whispering about, the wheat still needs to be sown. The cows still need to be milked. The rhythm of life insists upon moving forward. He walks to his fields, the scent of crushed grass rising beneath his boots. There is a quiet heroism in his steady, solitary labor. In the absence of his sons, who have gone to wear uniforms of khaki and blue, he tends to the land alone. Every seed he drops into the furrows is an act of defiance against the uncertainty. It is a quiet promise that there will be a tomorrow, and that tomorrow will need bread. Far away from those familiar fields, along the meandering rivers and the fortified borders, the young men of the village were also awake. They stood in the damp, lingering fog of the early morning. They were soldiers now, but beneath the heavy wool of their coats, they were still just bakers, and teachers, and older brothers. They stood watch over a quiet world. The forests before them were ancient and deep, the branches swaying gently in the spring breeze. They listened, straining their ears, but the only sounds were the familiar, comforting noises of the woods, the rustle of a startled deer, the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker, the soft murmuring of a nearby stream. It felt surreal. It felt like a dream from which they might wake at any moment. To pass the long, stretching hours of the day, they leaned into the small, ordinary comforts that make us human. They gathered around small, smokeless stoves, blowing into their cupped hands, waiting for the water to boil. The sharing of a tin cup of bitter, warm coffee became a sacred ritual. They traded worn, dog-eared paperback novels, reading the same chapters over and over until the words lost their meaning. They played cards on overturned wooden crates, the pasteboard corners soft and frayed from 1,000 shuffles. And in the quietest moments, usually in the fading light of the late afternoon, they wrote letters. Picture a young man sitting on a canvas cot, a stub of a pencil held awkwardly in his cold fingers. He uses his knee as a desk. The paper is thin, easily torn, but to him, it is the most valuable thing in the world. It is a bridge across the miles. He bites his lip, searching for the right words. He does not write about the grand scope of the conflict or the towering concrete walls of the fortresses. Those things feel distant and unreal. Instead, he writes about the things that matter. He asks his wife if the leak in the kitchen roof has been mended. He asks if their old dog still sleeps in the patch of sunlight by the back door. He tells her that he misses the smell of her lavender soap and the way the kitchen feels warm when she is baking. He writes, "Do not worry about me. It is quiet here. The birds are singing. We are just waiting." He folds the paper carefully, sealing inside it a piece of his heart, a whisper of his longing. He drops it into the outgoing sack, trusting that this fragile piece of paper will somehow find its way through the labyrinth of a nation on pause, straight to the kitchen table of the home he loves. And days later, it does. Imagine the woman receiving that letter. She is standing by the garden gate, the spring sunshine warming her shoulders. The postman hands her the envelope, his eyes offering a silent, shared understanding. There is a fleeting moment of pure, breathless anxiety before she recognizes the familiar slant of the handwriting. Her shoulders drop. A long, trembling sigh escapes her lips. She does not open it immediately. She holds it against her chest, right over her heart, closing her eyes and just feeling the weight of it. It feels like a tether, a lifeline. When she finally sits on the wooden bench beneath the blooming apricot tree to read his words, the world around her fades away. She traces his name with her fingertips. She smiles at his questions about the dog. For a few brief minutes, the distance between them collapses. He is there, sitting beside her in the garden, and the world is whole again. She carries that letter in the pocket of her apron for the rest of the week. Whenever the quiet of the house grows too loud, whenever the shadow of worry begins to creep into her thoughts, she slips her hand into her pocket and touches the crinkled paper. It is a small, hidden talisman of hope. This was the rhythm of the strange war. A delicate, fragile balance between deep anxiety and profound boredom. It was a time of suspended animation.
Again, its inhabitants.
The newspapers arrived in the towns, but the headlines felt hollow. People went to the cafes, ordering their drinks and sitting at the small round tables on the sidewalks, but the conversations were hushed. They spoke of the weather, of the local gossip, of the price of flour. They built a fortress of mundane normalcy to keep the encroaching dread at bay. And yet, there were moments of profound, quiet beauty in this waiting. When a crisis pauses, when a great storm hovers just over the horizon but refuses to break, people tend to draw closer together. In the cities, neighbors who had only ever exchanged polite nods on the stairwell began to linger in the hallways, asking after each other's families. In the bakeries, a few extra sweet rolls might quietly find their way into the bags of women whose husbands were stationed far away. An unspoken gesture of solidarity passed across the counter with a warm, knowing smile. Strangers shared umbrellas in the sudden spring showers, walking shoulder to shoulder through the glistening streets, finding comfort in the simple presence of another human being traversing the same uncertain path. Even at the borders, amidst the miles of wire and concrete, humanity insisted on softening the hard edges of the world.
This was Antwerp.
Soldiers fed scraps of bread to stray cats that wandered into their camps. They planted small, irregular gardens in the patches of dirt near their bunkers, watching with quiet pride as the tiny green shoots of radishes and onions broke through the surface. They found beauty in the morning dew clinging to the steel wire, turning it into a string of glittering diamonds under the early sun. They were holding on to their gentleness. They were actively choosing to remain soft in a world that was slowly turning to iron. As the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, the strange war became a familiar companion. The tension never truly vanished, but it became something they learned to carry, like a heavy coat worn for too long. The human heart is remarkably resilient. It cannot sustain a state of pure panic indefinitely. Eventually, the heart settles. It finds a new, uneasy baseline. It learns to sleep, even with one eye open. When twilight fell over the country, bringing an end to another day of nothing happening, a profound peace would settle over the landscape. The shadows in the springtime grew long, stretching softly across the quiet fields, creeping up the stone walls of ancient cathedrals, and blanketing the winding rivers in a deep, velvety dusk. The stars would begin to emerge, one by one, piercing the fading purple of the sky.
They
They were
couldn't
the
take their
same stars
weapons,
that had
trucks,
watched over
tanks,
these
or
lands for
guns.
millennia, and different to
men
the
were
arbitrary
saved to
lines
fight
drawn
again.
on the earth beneath them. The farmer, bone-tired from a day in the
Having
fields,
slashed
would
through
sit on his
Luxembourg,
porch, smoking
Belgium,
a
and
pipe,
Holland,
watching the smoke
5
curl
German
upward into the
armies
cooling
fanned out
air.
across France.
The young wife in the city would
Treachery
turn
and
off her
incompetence
bedside
had
lamp,
doomed the
her
nation
husband's letter
that
resting
only a
safely
decade
on her
ago
nightstand.
had been leader of
And the
Europe.
young soldier at the border
Now
would
the
pull the
campaign
collar of his
mounted
coat
in
up
fury
against the evening chill,
as France
leaning his head
crumbled.
back to gaze up at the vast, glittering canopy above. Underneath that shared blanket of stars, the entire nation lay in a fragile, shimmering slumber. They dreamed of ordinary things. They dreamed of Sunday dinners, of bicycle rides through country lanes, of laughter echoing in crowded rooms. They held onto the beautiful, fragile illusion of the peace they had known, breathing softly in the dark, waiting for the morning, and hoping, with every quiet beat of their hearts, that the springtime would last just a little bit longer. There are forests so old and so deep that they seem to hold their own breath, keeping secrets in the damp, quiet spaces between the roots. If you were to walk into the Ardennes in the early days of that spring, you would feel the ancient, settling calm of a place that has belonged only to nature for thousands of years. The trees here stood tall and close together, a vast and silent brotherhood of oak and boar, of thick pine and
On
heavy
June
beech.
10th, 4 days before
Their branches
France fell,
intertwined high
Mussolini
above,
entered
creating
the
a
war.
dense,
He
protective
had
canopy
waited
that
until
filtered
that
the
moment to
sunlight
make
into
his
soft,
decision.
shifting beams of pale gold. The forest floor was a
And
thick,
now the
fragrant
Nazis
carpet of
entered
fallen
Paris.
leaves and damp
This
green
had been the
moss,
dream of the
softening
Kaiser
every
in the last
footstep
war.
into a gentle whisper.
Hitler achieved it.
To the people of France, this forest was more than just a landscape. It was a promise. It was a natural wall, thick and untamed, woven together by the earth itself. They looked at
And
the
the
steep
Maginot Line
ravines,
was still
the twisting,
there.
narrow
The
dirt
Nazis
paths,
had merely
and the deep,
outflanked it.
shadowy valleys,
Now
and they felt a
tried
profound
direct
sense of
attack,
comfort.
and the Maginot
They
Line
believed
fell.
that no danger could ever push its way through such a tangled, ancient wilderness. The forest, they whispered to one another, would protect them. It was a comforting lullaby,
The First
sung to
World
a
War
nation
had
that
ended
so
officially
desperately
in this
wanted to
railroad
remain
car,
asleep in the
where
quiet
Marshal
peace of the
Foch had
springtime.
received the delegates of the
And
vanquished
just south
Germans.
of these deep woods,
Hitler
humanity had
commandeered
built
the
a
car for
protective
what he
wall of its
believed was
own.
the end of the Second
They called
World
it the
War.
Maginot Line, a name that echoed with a sense of unbreakable strength. But to the men who lived inside it, it did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a strange, subterranean sanctuary. Deep beneath the rolling green hills and the blossoming meadows, a hidden world had been carved into the earth. Miles and miles of tunnels stretched out in the dark, bathed in the soft, steady glow of electric lights. It was a world entirely insulated from the changing of the seasons and the anxieties of the surface. Down in the deep earth, the air was
Here at
always the same
Compiègne,
temperature.
Vichy was
There was a
born.
gentle, rhythmic hum from the massive generators that provided a constant, soothing white
Hitler
noise, like
was
the
happy.
heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The men who were stationed there lived a life that was strangely domestic, profoundly disconnected from the whispering winds above. Imagine walking down one of
Britain
those
alone
long,
remained as
curved
Hitler's
concrete
sole barrier
corridors.
to a total victory.
The walls are thick, designed to withstand
Nazi
the end of the world,
submarines
but the
now
men
burst
have
on the
tried to make
conquered
them
coast.
feel like home.
Set out to starve
Someone
the
has
British
brought in
people
a
into
gramophone.
submission.
The
Nazi
scratchy,
planes,
warm melody of a
now
Parisian
only a
waltz
few minutes
drifts
flight
down the
from the
hallway,
English coast,
mixing with the hum of
set
the
out to
ventilation
bomb the British
fans.
people into submission.
In a small alcove, a soldier with a steady hand and a
Britain
piece
hung
of
up.
charcoal has drawn a picture of a window on the blank concrete. And inside that drawn window, he has sketched a view of his family's farm, a little cottage, a
They
smoking
bombed
chimney,
railroads and
a fence,
factories to
and a
disrupt
dog waiting by the
transportation
gate.
and war production.
Further down the
They
tunnel,
bombed by
the scent of
day,
fresh yeast
and when
and
the
warm
Royal Air
flour
Force
fills
bashed
the
more
air.
than 180 of the
Even
bombers
here,
out of the sky
buried
in one
beneath
session,
thousands of tons of earth,
they
the
bombed
bakers
by
are
night.
awake in the early hours. They slide long,
The face
wooden
of
paddles
London
into
changed.
electric ovens, pulling out
Historic
hundreds of
landmarks
golden, crusty
disappeared.
baguettes. The simple, domestic smell of baking bread becomes
Night
a
after
powerful
night,
anchor, a reminder
London
of the
was
soft,
left to
normal
seethe
lives
fire.
they left behind. They sit together at long wooden tables, breaking the warm bread, sharing a tin of jam, and pouring hot coffee from heavy metal thermoses. They felt incredibly safe. They were wrapped in a cocoon of steel and
Air
stone,
armadas
cradled
appeared
in the
over
deep
these
pockets
cities
of the
through
earth.
fall and winter of
In one of the
1940,
small,
and
quiet
well
bunk
into the
rooms,
spring
a
of
young man sits on
1941.
his narrow cot.
Wreckage was cleared.
The blankets
and
are pulled up
production
over his
continued.
knees to ward off the
A
slight
new
dampness
army
that
was
always
created,
lingers in the
equipped
corners.
with new weapons.
He is writing a letter to his
And
mother.
Hitler, frustrated,
The
turned
light from
east.
the small bulb
If
above
this
him
were to be a
casts
long
long,
war,
gentle
he would
shadows
need
across the
Russian oil
paper.
and Russian wheat.
He writes
So he
slowly, his
proclaimed
handwriting
himself
neat
anew
and
the
careful.
arch enemy of communism.
Do not worry for
Despite
me,
his
he
earlier
writes,
plea to the
his pen
German
scratching
people
softly
that
against the
National
page.
Socialism and communism
We are
could
safe
live
here.
side by side.
It is like living
Now he
inside a
told them he
mountain.
didn't mean what he said before.
We have hot food,
but he
and
did
yesterday,
mean what he
someone
said
found a
before
deck
that.
of cards that wasn't missing
Military
the jack of
spokesman
hearts.
Berlin said the Red Army
I have
would
not
be
heard a
encircled
single
and
sound of
destroyed
trouble.
within 6 weeks.
The walls are
Its
so thick,
remnants would
I think we
retreat
could
back of
sleep
the
through a
Euro.
thunderstorm and
There
never
the
know it
Japanese
rained.
could deal with them at the proper
I will be
time.
home before the leaves turn
Joseph
brown.
Stalin rallied the Russian
I
people.
promise.
Soldiers and
He
civilians
seals the envelope,
responding with a
lying back
unanimity
against
that
his
amazed
pillow.
a world that had heard
He
much
closes
and
his
knew little
eyes
of
and
them.
listens to the low
Rose
murmur of
to
his
repel
friends
and
talking
harry
in the
the
next
invader.
room, their voices carrying a relaxed, easy cadence. He feels a deep, heavy peace wash over him, a profound trust in the stone that surrounds him.
Working with whatever tools they could
But while
seize,
the men in the
working
concrete
against
fortresses
time,
slept their
men
dreamless,
and women,
protected
old
sleep,
and young,
a different reality was
carved these
taking
huge
shape
tank
beneath the
tracks.
canopy of the Ardennes. Up on the surface, the nights in the forest were cold. A thick, pale mist would rise from the winding Meuse River, creeping slowly through the trunks of the trees
Weapons
like a
were
living thing,
distributed to
swallowing the
civilian
low
guerrillas
bushes
assigned
and
to
blurring the
operate back
edges of
of
the
enemy
world.
lines.
There were soldiers stationed here,
Anti-aircraft
too,
guns
but they
swung
had
into
no
place
thick
to battle
concrete to
Luftwaffe
protect them.
advance units.
They had only the trees, the damp earth, and the heavy wool of their coats.
Here was
They
the
were
wheat
the
that
sentries,
Hitler wanted.
the young men assigned to
And
watch
Russian
over the
men,
ancient,
women, and children
impenetrable
were determined
woods.
to keep it out of his hands.
They stood in small clearings,
would have
or
neither
leaned against the
food
rough bark of
nor
the old
shelter.
oaks, blowing into their cupped
Factories
hands to
worked
keep the
day and
feeling
night,
in their fingers.
For the Russians knew this
They
was
loved
a
the
war of
forest,
machines.
but in the deep hours of the
Entire
night,
plants
when the
were
darkness
moved
was
deep,
absolute, the woods
complete
took
with
on a
workers.
different feeling.
Weapons of
It
war
was not a violent
poured
feeling.
out of these factories.
It was a
And the
feeling of
Germans, as
profound,
well as the
heavy
rest of the world,
anticipation.
discovered the
Imagine
Russians
a
had
young
tanks
sentry
to
standing
meet
alone
tanks
in the mist.
and planes to
The
meet
damp air
planes.
clings to his eyelashes.
The Russians
He is
retreated,
tired, his
but
muscles
not
aching
without
from the cold,
inflicting
but his
sizable
ears are
casualties.
straining into the dark. The forest is usually full of small, comforting noises, the rustle of a badger in the
German
underbrush,
prisoners
the hoot of an
captured
owl,
seemed shocked
the
at
wind sighing
ruthless
through the pine
opposition they
needles.
encountered.
But
It had been
lately,
different
the
in
forest
France.
has grown unnervingly quiet. The birds seem to have stopped singing in the eastern canopy.
Winter
The
found
deer,
the Russian
usually
army
so
still
abundant,
intact.
have quietly
German
vanished,
casualties
moving
mounted
deeper
until
into
they
the
were counted
interior
in
as if
millions.
pushed by an unseen hand.
Hitler's armies were
The
not
sentry
smashed
peers
in
into
the
the
winter
fog,
campaign,
his eyes
but
playing
the
tricks on
Russians
him in the
gained
gloom.
the initiative and
He
held it.
feels a strange,
As the
primal
snows
flutter in his
melted,
chest.
Hitler was to meet
It is the
new
quiet
Russian
fear of
armies
the
and new
unknown, the
machines.
subtle instinct that
As
tells a
summer
human
came to
being
the
when the atmosphere in a
2,000-mile
room has
front.
changed, even if no one has spoken a word. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, carved wooden pipe. He does not light it. The glow of a match would carry too
We were
far
not
in the dark,
sufficiently
but
on
he
the
holds
alert
it
in
tightly,
Hawaii.
finding
The
comfort in the
Japanese
smooth,
won a
familiar
series of
texture of the wood.
spectacular victories in the Pacific.
It was his grandfather's pipe,
Under
a talisman
General
of safety
Douglas
from a
MacArthur,
man who
American
had
and
survived his
Filipino
own
forces
quiet
fought a
fears long
fabulous
ago.
delaying action in the
The
Philippines.
young sentry rubs his thumb
Manila
over
was
the
bombed,
wood,
although it
breathing
was
in the
declared
faint,
an open
sweet
city.
smell of old tobacco,
Because of
and tries to calm the
distances, it was
uneasy beating of his
impossible to
heart.
send supplies or
He
reinforcements,
tells himself it is
and
just the
Bataan
wind.
fell.
He
Only
tells
when
himself it
Americans
is just the
and Filipinos
shadows.
had eaten
He
their
reminds
youth.
himself of the promises the older men made. The forest is too thick, the paths are too narrow, the earth is too soft. Nothing can come through here. But deep within the shadowed heart of the Ardennes, far
General
beyond where
MacArthur
the young
established his
sentry's eyes can
headquarters in
see,
Australia.
the silence is
And
beginning
as
to fracture.
Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations
It is not a
forces
sudden
in that
shattering.
area, prepared
It
for
is
the
a slow,
offensive that
creeping
would develop
intrusion.
inevitably.
Beneath the ancient,
For despite
protective
setbacks,
canopy,
we
in
have
the places
established
where
a
the mist is
supply
thickest
chain
and the moonlight
6,000 miles
cannot
across
reach,
the Pacific
shadows are
that
shifting.
stretched to New Zealand.
There is the faint,
Like the other
unnatural
democracies,
snapping
we
of
were
thick
not
branches,
prepared for total
muffled by the
war.
fog.
Fortunately, under
There is
a
the smell
Lend-Lease
of crushed
Act of
pine
March
needles,
1941,
mixing heavily with the
we
alien,
had set out to
metallic
become
scent
the
of
arsenal
oil
of
and
the free and
exhaust.
fighting nations.
Something
We were
immense,
determined
something
to
made of
supply
cold
them with our
iron
war
and
goods,
relentless motion,
whether they
is
could
quietly
afford to
gathering
pay
in
or
the
not.
dark.
We were buying
It moves with a
cars.
slow, grinding
Time to
deliberation,
convert the industries
navigating
of
the
peace
narrow,
into war.
winding dirt paths that were
Time
only
to
meant
make
for
ships,
logging carts and wandering
merchant ships
wildlife.
and war ships.
It is a tide of
Time to make
machinery,
planes
inching
and more
forward
planes.
beneath the leaves,
Bombers
holding its breath
and
just as
fighters.
the nation is
Faster,
holding its
more
breath.
powerful than any the
There is a
world had ever
profound,
seen.
aching heartbreak
Time to
in
make
this
guns.
moment of history.
And more guns.
It is the tragedy
Shells.
of a beautiful
And
illusion.
more shells.
All across
Tanks.
the country, millions of
And
people
more
were
tanks.
sleeping peacefully in their beds.
Time to gather the huge
The mothers who
strength
had
which
folded
was
the
ours.
letters into their aprons,
pour
the
the
farmers who
great
had
riches of
planted their
American
spring
earth
wheat, and
into
the
the
soldiers
cauldron of
resting
war.
deep inside the warm,
Iron,
humming concrete of the
steel,
Maginot Line. They were
oil,
all wrapped in a collective,
coal.
hopeful dream.
Time to
They
build a
believed
navy
in the
called upon
invincibility
to
of
fight
their
in
stone
both
walls.
oceans and upon all the seas.
They believed in the
To
ancient,
convoy
tangled
men and
protection of
weapons
their
to
deep
Australia.
forests.
To Britain,
They believed that the quiet of the
Middle
night
East,
was a promise
to
of a
Russia.
peaceful morning.
a navy
They
that
did not
had
know
already
that the shelter
undertaken
they trusted
daring
was
raids
already
upon the
behind
Gilbert
them.
and Marshall Islands.
They did
and
not know
braved
that the
Japanese
forest,
waters,
the very thing
and
they
had taken
believed
a
would
heavy
be their
toll of the
salvation,
invading
was
forces
hiding
in
the
the
storm
Macassar
that was
Strait,
about to break.
and had won the first
For now,
battle in the
the night
Coral
remains
Sea.
still. The mist
Time
continues to roll
expand a
softly over the
miniature
river.
professional army into a
The young
modern
sentry in
war
the woods
machine.
leans his head
Time
back
to
against the
take
rough bark of the oak
civilians gathered in the
tree,
peacetime
closing his eyes for
conscription
just a
while we
moment,
were
listening
still
to his
debating,
own steady
to
breathing.
mold them into soldiers.
And deep
Train
underground,
them in
the
the
baker
use of
pulls
new
another
weapons,
warm, fragrant
new
loaf of
tactics.
bread from the oven,
And we
smiling
were
as the
buying
golden
time
crust
to
crackles
weld
in
the
the
home
quiet,
front and the
artificial
fighting
light.
front into one.
It is the
For
final,
this was
fragile
total war,
hour of a world that
and
is
we
about to
realized
change
victories
forever.
were born in the
A
production
world
line.
resting
We
gently,
needed
beautifully,
more ships,
and tragically
more
on the
planes,
very edge of the
more
morning.
tanks, more guns,
There is a fragile,
more
fleeting
shells.
moment just between sleep and
We
waking,
were not
where the
fighting
world
alone.
is nothing but soft light
9
and the
of
promise
the
of an
Pan-American
ordinary
nobles
day.
severed diplomatic
On
relations
that
with the
particular
Axis.
morning in May,
Colombia,
the dawn
Bolivia,
arrived much
Brazil,
like any
Ecuador,
other.
Mexico,
The sun
Paraguay,
crested the
Peru,
horizon with a
Uruguay,
slow,
and Venezuela.
gentle grace,
At this
painting the
time,
clouds
the
in
issue
quiet
is clearly
shades of
drawn.
lavender and pale gold.
There can be no
The dew
peace
clung to the blades of grass in the
until
meadows,
Hitlerism
and the
its
early spring
monstrous
air carried the
parasite
sweet, familiar
are
scent
utterly
of blooming
obliterated.
lilacs and damp
and
soil.
until
Across the villages and
9 of the
towns, the
Pan-American
rhythmic,
nations declared
comforting
war
sounds of
upon the
daily
aggressors.
life began to stir.
Cuba, Costa Rica, the
Shutters
Dominican
were pushed
Republic,
open
El
to welcome the
Salvador,
breeze.
Guatemala, Haiti,
The smell of
Honduras,
roasted coffee
Nicaragua,
drifted through
and
open
Panama.
kitchen windows.
Mexico joined
It
these
was a
nations
morning
in June
perfectly designed for
1942.
peace.
We were not
But
fighting
sometimes,
alone.
history does not
Even
announce
in the
itself
conquered
with a heavy
countries,
blow.
the will to fight survives.
Sometimes,
Dutch,
it enters quietly,
Belgium,
disguised as a strange vibration in the air.
Greece,
Before the
Czech,
eyes could see anything out of the
Filipino,
ordinary,
Polish,
the body felt it.
Norwegian.
It began as a low, persistent
All
hum,
fought with us
something
on the
felt deep in the
far-flung
chest
battles.
before it was ever recognized by the
Australians,
ears.
New Zealanders,
It was a
South
sound that
Africans,
did not belong to the
Canadians.
natural world.
We were not fighting
It was not the
alone.
rolling rumble of
In
a
this
distant
war, the
spring
people seeking the
thunderstorm,
world
nor was it the
without
familiar
war for
clatter
their
of the
children.
morning train rushing toward the city. Imagine a young mother standing in her small, tiled kitchen.
Britain, growing
Her name
steadily
is
stronger
Juliet.
in its third year of war.
She is wearing a soft,
Sweeping the
worn
skies
cotton
with
robe,
conquered Europe,
holding a ceramic cup
harassing
of
the
hot
enemy
water
with
and
commando
chicory.
raids.
Her 6-year-old
Sending
son
forth
is still
huge
asleep in the
armadas
next
and
room,
bombers over
breathing in the
German
slow,
cities
heavy
Hitler
rhythm of
promised
childhood
would never be
dreams.
attacked.
Juliet
Russia,
is standing at the
fighting with
window,
an
watching a
unparalleled
pair of
tenacity,
sparrows resting on the
drawing
telephone
upon
wire.
inexhaustible reserves,
Then, the
asking
water
no
in her cup
mercy
begins to
and
tremble.
offering none.
Just a
China,
slight, almost
knowing
imperceptible
the patience of an
ripple on the
ancient
surface.
civilization,
The
surmounting
sparrows on the
handicaps
wire
that would have
suddenly take
destroyed
flight,
other nations,
scattering
fighting
into the
on
pale sky
as it
as
had
if
fought
startled by a
alone.
ghost.
And
The low hum
people
grows
of the
steadily,
United States,
stretching into a
an
heavy,
angry
mechanical
people,
drone that
whose
seems to press
resources and
down upon the
privileges
roof
were
of
the
her
envy
small
of the
stone
world,
house.
offering these
It
without
is a sound that vibrates through
fighting
the
in the
soles of her
factories and the
slippers,
foxholes,
traveling up from the
fighting in the
floorboards.
jungle, the desert, the
Juliet
frozen
places
wastes,
her cup on the
fighting
counter.
on all the
The
oceans,
ceramic clinks
fighting for
softly against the
survival,
tile.
fighting a war which
She
would
walks
be
to the
hard
front
and
door,
might be
her heart
long,
beating a little
but
faster,
which they
driven
would
by a
win.
quiet, nameless instinct. She turns the brass handle and steps out onto the front step. The air outside is cool, but it feels incredibly heavy. As she looks down the cobblestone street, she realizes she is not alone. One by one, her neighbors are stepping out of their doorways. The baker, still wearing his white apron dusted with flour, stands
There
on
were
the corner.
masses of troops.
The
and they
elderly
came
widow
down
from
in a
across
sort
the
of a
street
V
stands on
shape
her small iron
to a
balcony,
crocodile
clutching a knit shawl
semi-single
around
file
her
as they got near
shoulders.
the water's edge.
No one
Of course,
speaks.
many of these soldiers were
There are no
going
shouts of
out
alarm,
up
no
to their
panic.
necks in water
There is
and
only a
climbing into,
profound,
say,
collective
minesweepers if you
silence
get
as
in
every
nearly
face
as
turns
close as
upward.
that. Others, of
They
course,
look
on the
toward the
beach were
east,
embarking
toward the
in
rising
small
sun,
boats,
and
but
they
there
see
didn't
that the
seem to be
sky
any
has changed.
panic or worry at all.
The vast,
One
open
came across
canvas of
lots
the
of
morning,
these small
usually
boats,
painted with
many
the
of
gentle
them with
colors of dawn,
perhaps even a
is no
dozen or
longer
so
theirs.
soldiers on board,
Moving
heading
across
back
the
for
pale
England
horizon are
resolutely.
dark, heavy
One
silhouettes.
quite often offered to
They are flying
take
low,
their
moving
crews
with a
of
steady,
soldiers off them
terrifying
so they could
purpose.
go back for another load, and
They
they
look
said,
like
"No
a flock
fear,
of
we've got our
strange,
12
iron
pongos,
birds
and
stretching
we're
out
going
across
back
the
to
heavens
England
in
with them. You
endless
go and
lines.
get your own."
They blot out the warmth of the sun,
beach was,
casting
well,
long,
you could say
fleeting
thousands of men
shadows
being on
over the
Margate
rooftops,
Beach on
the
a
church
bank
spires,
holiday.
and the blossoming apple orchards.
The troops was,
It was a
in
sky
a pretty
suddenly
bad state.
devoid of
They were
stars,
in a bad
devoid
way.
of the familiar
There
clouds
was
they
one
had
man,
known
special
all
I shall
their
always
lives.
remember. He
It had
came on
become a
board.
ceiling of moving
He'd had
metal.
his teeth blown out,
In that single,
was holding a
quiet
rifle
moment of looking
with a
up,
fixed
the
bayonet.
great illusion shattered.
and we had to take all the arms
The
away from
long
him. We
months of
couldn't
the
shift this
strange
gun out
war,
of this
the
man's
comforting
this rifle out of
belief
this
that the
man's hands.
danger would simply
His-
fade
his
away,
hands was
the
actually
absolute faith
gripped
in the
this and
ancient
they was
forests and
fixture.
the deep concrete fortresses,
Our
it all
chap was on a
dissolved
beach
into the
and then he
morning
gets aboard a
mist.
ship and he thinks he's safe.
The disbelief was a
But they
physical
really
weight.
did think this.
It was the
They said,
feeling
"Whoa,
of missing
England,
a
home of
step in the
beauty, let
dark,
us get there
that
for
sudden, breathless suspension of
We were
reality
most
where the mind
impressed. They
simply
were very
cannot
tired,
process
and
what
most
the
of them
eyes
just
are seeing.
slumped down and went to sleep.
Down in the countryside, a solitary farmer stood in his field.
Our job was to
He
stop
had been out
enemy
since
aircraft
before the
getting at
dawn,
those troops.
guiding his heavy plow
Because
horse
believe
through
me,
the rich,
if enemy
dark
aircraft
earth.
had got superiority of
When the
the
sound
air
washed
Dunkirk,
over him, he
they would
pulled
have
gently on the leather
massacred themselves on
reins,
the beach.
bringing the
Nothing could
great
have been
horse to
done.
a
They had
halt.
no guns, they had no
He took off his
anti-aircraft.
wide-brimmed hat,
And German
resting his
bombers
worn
and
hands
German,
on the wooden handles of the
German
plow.
dive bombers.
He tilted his
Stukas
head
would have
back,
just
watching the
murdered
shadows of the
them, and we couldn't
machinery
have got
ripple
those troops
rapidly
off.
across his newly planted
Another
rows
thing the
of
Germans
wheat.
tried to do, of course, was
The
to
earth
sink the
beneath
ships.
his boots had
They knew
survived
that the fellows
centuries of change,
would not
of
be a good
seasons
swim
turning,
out to
of
England.
empires
Therefore,
rising
they
and
had to
falling.
try and get on the ships, and if they
But
could
as he
sink
watched
these
the
ships,
dark
then the
shapes
British
move
army would have been
relentlessly
trapped.
toward the interior of his beautiful country, a quiet tear traced its way through the deep lines of his withered face.
The
He did
RAF
not weep
tried
out
to
of
keep
fear
the
for
German
his
Air
own
Force
life.
away from the beaches.
He wept for the
But
land.
6 destroyers and over
He
200
felt a
craft
profound,
were sunk.
gentle sorrow for the peaceful rhythm of the world that was, in that very moment, being
Fighter
trampled from
command
above.
lost nearly half its strength
Further
in
down the
French
village
campaign.
road, an older postman
100
was
planes
frozen
of the
mid-step.
Dunkirk operations alone.
His leather satchel hung heavily at his side, filled with the morning's deliveries. In his hand, he held a letter. It was an ordinary letter, perhaps a note from a
Dunkirk
sister in
was a major
Paris,
defeat,
or a message from a son
but the
stationed
inspired
along the
efforts of
borders,
the Royal Navy
writing
and the
about the
little
quiet
ships
boredom of the
saved
watch.
330,000
The postman looked at the
British and
handwritten
French
name on
troops.
the envelope, and then he looked up at the
For a
darkened
week,
sky.
the weather was fine.
He realized,
the German
with a
army was
sinking,
held up.
hollow feeling in his chest,
I
that the
really
world
truly
in
don't
which
think
that letter
they
had been
thought
written
they'd
no
ever get 'em
longer
off.
existed.
That's my opinion.
The word sealed
But it was,
inside that envelope
An act
belonged
of
to
God that they
yesterday,
did. The weather was good,
and yesterday
The
was
sea was
now
like a mill
impossibly
pond.
far away.
and this was a great
This
help
was
to
the
everybody.
quiet heartbreak of that
If it
morning.
had been rough water,
It was
you'd
not
have
a
got 'em
sudden
off at Dunkirk.
explosion of terror. It was the
Because when
slow,
those rollers got their
devastating
beach, they go.
realization that the sanctuary was breached.
At any moment,
The
a
protective
breakthrough
walls
by
they had
the
believed
German
in were
army
behind
could
them,
have stopped
and the
the
sky,
whole
the
operation.
open,
I
vulnerable
don't think,
sky, offered no
despite
shelter.
the valiant endeavors
Back in
of
the small stone
British
house,
and French
Juliet
troops
stands
who
on
were
her doorstep for a
keeping the
long
Germans
time.
back, that they could have stopped
The drone of the
might
engines is
of
so
the
loud
German
now that it
armor getting
vibrates in
through
her
if
teeth.
Hitler had so wanted
She
to do
watches
it.
the baker slowly wipe his flour-covered
What
hands
was
on
left
his
of
apron,
Dunkirk
his eyes
surrendered on
wide
June
and
the
vacant.
4th.
She watches the
Thousands of
elderly widow
troops
cross
could not
herself,
be
her
rescued.
trembling hand moving in a slow, silent prayer.
A
There is a
fortnight
powerful
later,
urge
France
to deny
stopped
it,
fighting,
to close
and
her
the British
eyes
Prime
and
Minister
pretend that when
Churchill
she opens them,
broadcast
the
to the
sky will
world.
be empty and
What
blue again.
General Weygand has
But the
called
shadows
the
continue
Battle
to
of
sweep
France
over
is
her
over.
face. She
The
turns
Battle of
slowly
Britain
and
is
walks
about to
back
begin.
inside, gently closing the heavy wooden door
Hitler
behind her.
knows that he
The
will
house
have to
feels
break
different
us
now.
in this island or
The
lose
familiar
the war.
walls, the worn armchair
If we
by the
can stand
fireplace,
up to
the
him,
ticking clock on the
all Europe
mantelpiece,
may be
they
free,
all feel incredibly
and the
fragile,
life of the
like
world
beautiful
may
things
move
made of
forward
thin glass sitting on the
into
edge of a
broad,
table.
sunlit
She
upland.
walks quietly to her son's
But if we
bedroom.
fail,
She pushes
then
the
the
door
whole
open,
world
the hinges
will
protesting
sink
with a
into the
soft
abyss
squeak.
of a new
He is still
dark
asleep.
age.
The tremendous
Let us
noise in
therefore
the sky
brace
has not
ourselves
yet
to our
breached the
duty.
deep, protective slumber of his childhood.
So bear
He lies on his
ourselves
side, his cheek pressed
if
into
the
the
British
soft white
Empire
pillow, one small
and its
hand resting
Commonwealth
openly on the blanket.
lost for 1,000
Juliet
years.
sits on the edge of the mattress.
Men will still say
The springs creak slightly beneath her
This
weight.
was
She
their
reaches
fighting
out and
power.
gently brushes a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Her hand is trembling. In this small, quiet room, The grand movements of armies and the shifting of borders mean absolutely nothing. All that matters is the soft rise and fall of this child's
Britain
chest.
prepared to face immediate
She feels a
invasion.
sudden, fierce welling
A
of
new
love,
evacuation of
tangled
children began
inextricably
from
with
the
a
south
quiet,
and east coast
private
areas where
terror.
a German landing might be
She
expected.
leans down, her lips brushing against his warm temple. I am here,
Some
she
parents
whispers
sent their
into the
children
stillness of the
overseas to
room,
safety.
her voice barely a
But
breath.
this was stopped in September
I am
when
right
a
here.
U-boat sank a British liner
It is
with
a
90
promise she
children
makes
on
not
board.
just to him, but to herself. It is the only anchor she is left to hold onto in a world that has suddenly lost its gravity. All across
Guard
the
against
country,
invasion, over
millions
a
of
million
similar,
men not
quiet
required by the
moments were
regular
unfolding in the
forces volunteered to
shadows of
form
that altered
the
sky.
Home Guard.
Husbands reached out in the early dawn light to take their wives' hands, holding them tightly without saying a word. Shopkeepers stood behind their glass windows, looking out at the empty streets, feeling the heavy
They
dread
drilled with
settling into
broomsticks
their
because
bones.
there were no rifles to spare.
Teachers arrived
and
at their
rehearsed
small schoolhouses,
bloodthirsty defenses
unlocking the
against a
wooden
German
doors, wondering how they would look into the eyes of their students and explain that the world had changed overnight. There was no grand panic in these first few hours. There was only a deeply human, deeply poignant gathering of the spirit. People moved through their morning routines with a slow, deliberate care, clinging to the mundane actions of making tea, sweeping the porch, and folding the
regular army's
laundry,
training
as if
seems
these
to have
simple
impressed the
rituals could
newsreader.
somehow hold the fraying
The
edges of their
one-time
lives
foot sloggers have
together.
turned Kickstarter pushers.
But as the morning wore
Shakespeare's
on
pony has
and the
given
sun
way to a
climbed
spanking
higher,
motorbike.
the true weight of the
The
day
left-right,
began to
left-right
settle
folks
over
have
the
got both
landscape.
feet off the ground at the same
The
time.
strange, low
They're
hum in the
part of
sky
Britain's
slowly
mighty
faded as the
mobile
silhouettes
mountain.
moved
All
further
keen
west,
welcomers of
leaving
Adolf
behind a
when he
silence
dropped
that
in
was
for a
far
cup of
more
tea and a cream
terrifying
bun.
than the noise.
A battalion of
It was
infantry
an
on
empty,
wheels is an
waiting
exercise.
silence.
A swift-moving,
The
striking
illusion of
force
safety had
that
been
would
a
do the enemy
beautiful
a bit
thing.
of no good.
It had allowed
They
them
learned
to
to take the
sleep,
rough with
to
the
plant
smooth
their
under
gardens,
conditions they
and
might
to
meet
write
with
letters
on active
filled with
service.
hopeful promises.
Up and down they go, but
But like
the
all
Huns,
illusions,
they're
it was
always
made of
on the
glass,
level.
and now it lay shattered in a million invisible pieces across
The
the
army had
rolling
brought back
hills
their
and the
rifles from
cobblestone
Dunkirk.
streets.
But almost everything
The
else had
strange
been
war was
abandoned
over.
in France.
The true test of
In
their
June,
quiet resilience,
the only
of their
fully equipped
capacity for
division in
endurance
Britain
and
was
everyday
Canadian.
heroism, had only
I
just
remember
begun.
in June
The
going
people
down
of
to the
France looked
southeast
out from
corner,
their doorways, holding their
where
breath,
General
waiting
Ford
to
was
see
in
what the
command.
altered sky
That's
would
to
bring
say,
them
Kent,
next.
Surrey,
And as
Sussex,
they
that
waited,
sort of
they
area.
held
Certainly
onto each other a
possible
little
landing
tighter,
area for
finding their
Germans
only
to
remaining
attempt it.
shelter in the warmth of a shared,
And I remember sending a
trembling hand.
memorandum to Winston, which was
Water has a
his
way of
paper.
remembering everything
Tried
it
him on the
touches,
right, I said
carrying
something
the
like
quietest
this,
sorrows
the troops
gently
were
out to the
very good
open
heart
sea.
and that they were trained
If you were to
and so
stand
forth,
on the
but
banks of the
course,
Meuse River on a calm spring
there
afternoon,
is no
long before the
anti-tank
world lost its
weapon
way,
of any kind.
you would only see beauty.
no anti-tank
You
gun.
would see a wide,
and no tanks.
slow-moving ribbon of water,
That
catching the
was in
silver
area
light of the
where
sky
if the
and
Germans
reflecting
were
the
going to land,
heavy,
they might very
drooping
well be
branches
expected
of
to
the
land.
willow
That was the state
trees.
of the cupboard. It was bare.
You would hear the soft,
The king
rhythmic
practiced
lapping of the
marksmanship
current
and
against the
rejoiced
mossy
that Britain
stones,
stood
a
alone
sound
with
that
no
has
more
lulled
allies
children
to
to
pamper.
sleep for generations.
The head of fighter command,
The
Sir
river
Hugh
was a
Dowding,
companion
agreed.
to the people of
He
Sedan.
had lost too many planes.
It was a place
helping
for
the French.
Sunday picnics on the grassy slopes, a place where old men
Station
sat
names
for
and
hours with their
signposts were
fishing
removed
lines
to baffle
cast into the
invading
deep
Germans.
green ripples,
The
simply
effect
watching
was
the
to
day
baffle
pass
British
by.
travellers.
But on this particular day,
Anti-tank
the
barriers
river
made
was
sure
no
the
longer
Germans
just a
wouldn't have an
river.
easy passage if they
It had
advanced
become a
along the railroad.
threshold. It was a deep, silent boundary between the life they had always known and an
In the
unknown dark
invasion
that was
areas, the
pressing in from
countryside
the east.
disappeared under coils of
A
barbed
thick,
wire.
cool mist had settled over the
beaches,
valley,
too, were
clinging
wired
to
to
the
below
surface
low
of the
water
water
mark.
like a pale, woven blanket.
J.B. Priestley
The
remembers
air
a
was
visit to the
perfectly
seaside.
still, holding that heavy,
I went
breathless
down
quality
one
that
hot
always
summer
precedes
day.
a great storm.
Late summer.
On the western bank, hidden among the
one
tall
of the
reeds and the damp
seaside
earth, a
resorts
young man lay on his
Kent
stomach,
coast.
watching the gray water.
The last time I
His
visited,
name
it
does not
packed
matter,
out with
for he was
beach
every
and
young man who has
tram
ever been
and
asked
all
to
the
stand
fun of the
between his
fad
home
by
and the
now.
rising tide.
Then to see it
Before this spring,
The
he had been an
strange,
apprentice to a
bright,
watchmaker in a small,
empty
sleepy
day.
town.
The beach is deserted.
His hands were trained to hold delicate
Lot of barbed
tweezers,
wire
to
all
coax
over the
tiny,
place.
fragile
I
brass
felt
gears
then
into
that,
perfect,
in
rhythmic
a way,
time.
this was a kind of
He knew how to fix
symbol
broken
of
things with
people.
patience and a gentle touch.
They were ready
Now,
to
his hands
abandon
gripped the cold,
this
heavy wood
for
of a
the time
rifle.
being, in
His
order to
fingers
get
were
on
numb
with
from the
war.
chill of the morning soil. He rested his cheek against the
Churchill
damp
was
ground,
everywhere.
smelling the rich,
No longer a
familiar
suspect
scent of the
politician,
French
but
earth,
the living
a scent of
embodiment of
crushed
the British
roots and
will to
old grain.
resist.
He was
It was a situation
profoundly,
he seemed to revel
quietly
in,
terrified.
describing for colleagues
He did
a
not
vivid
feel
picture
like a
of himself
soldier.
leading a last man
He
defense
felt like
of
a boy who had
devastated
wandered
Whitehall.
too far from home.
Immediately
In the front
Churchill
pocket of
became
his heavy
Prime
wool
Minister,
coat, sitting
the
right
pace
over
in
his heart,
Whitehall
was a
changed.
folded letter from
People
his younger
started
sister.
not merely to think fast,
She had
but to
pressed a
act
dry
fast.
chamomile flower between the
Distinguished civil
pages.
servants could be seen running
Every
down
so
the
often,
passages.
he would take his hand
Churchill
off his
himself
rifle
was,
and press his
physically
palm
very
flat
energetic.
against his
He would
chest,
suddenly
just to
make
feel
the
the
most
crinkle of the
extraordinary and
paper,
energetic
just to
sorties.
remind himself
He would
that the
inspect
chamomile
troops,
still smelled like the
marching in
sunny
great
kitchen
speed
he had
down the
left
ranks and
behind.
outpacing all the younger
He
men
looked
who
to
were
his
following
left,
him.
where an older man,
remember one
a baker
evening
by
he said
trade,
that he must
was
go in
staring
and
blankly at the
inspect,
fog
some
rolling
new
off the
works.
river.
And although he was
The baker reached into his
65 years
tunic and
old,
pulled out a
he
small piece of
vaulted
stale
over a
bread,
brick
breaking
wall
it in two.
and landed feet first
Without
in
a
pool
word,
of liquid
he held
cement.
half of it out to the young
And with
watchmaker.
an impertinence
They
which
ate in
retrospect
absolute
I'm
silence,
surprised at,
the
I said
simple
to him,
act
"Well, I
of
think you
sharing a
met your
morsel of
Waterloo,"
food
because he
becoming a
was stuck
deeply
in the
sacred
cement.
communion.
And he turned to me
They
and said,
chewed
"How dare
slowly,
you?"
their eyes
Anyhow,
locked on
my
the murky
Blenheim.
water, bound together by a shared, shivering dread. And just across that
In the
water,
arms factories,
hidden in
men
the
and
shadows of
women
the
worked
ancient
long
trees
hours
on the
to fill
eastern
the
bank,
gaps in British
another young
defences.
boy sat in the damp
Production
grass.
reached a peak in June, then
He wore
fell
a
as
different
workers
colored coat,
tired.
but beneath
But the
the heavy
spurt
wool,
lasted through
his
the
heart beat
critical
with the
time.
exact same frantic, fluttering rhythm.
Production
He
of
was
fighter
far
planes
from his
doubled.
own mountains,
100
far
new
from the pine
Spitfires and
forests of
Hurricanes
his
a week
childhood.
replenished Dowding's force.
He rested his forehead on his knees,
The new Minister
closing
of
his eyes
Aircraft
against the
Production,
gray
Lord
morning.
Beaverbrook, took care to make
He was
ordinary
so
people
incredibly
feel
tired.
part of the production battle.
The march had been long,
My
the
father was a
machinery
master of
behind him was
propaganda.
loud and relentless, and he felt
there was the
entirely
pots and
swallowed up by a
pans,
momentum he could not
where
control.
everyone was asked to give up pots.
He did
and
not
pans
want to
and
cross this
railings,
river.
and, Stanley Baldwin didn't
He did
give
not
up
want to
his
step
gates,
into the
but
cold
most
water
people
and
gave
bring
up
the storm to the
everything they
quiet
could in the
town
way of
across the
metal.
way.
The pilots
If the
and we
world
all
were
knew
different,
that,
if the
you
lines
couldn't
on the
make
maps
aircraft
had not
out of
been
pots and
drawn with
pans,
such
but
heavy,
it was good stuff.
unforgiving
It brought
ink,
the
he might have
people to
crossed the
realize
bridge
that it
simply
was a
to buy a
desperate
loaf of
situation.
bread from the
The
man on
response
the other
to pots
side.
and pans was tremendous.
They might have
had
sat in a
piles and
cafe
piles of pots and
together,
pans,
struggling
not
to
knowing what to
understand
do
each
with it.
other's language,
But he, as I say,
laughing
he was
over a
a great
spilled cup of
propaganda.
coffee. Instead,
But
he
where
was waiting for the whisper
German
to move.
invasion?
He watched a single, brown autumn leaf that had somehow survived the winter fall from a branch above him. It
June
drifted slowly
1940,
down,
Hitler had
landing
not
on the
begun to think
surface of the
about
Meuse,
invading Britain.
and began to
He was
float
busy
gently
celebrating his
downstream.
French victory and expected
He
Britain,
watched
like
it go,
France, to make
wishing
peace.
with all his soul that he could
Berlin
shrink
gave
down,
him a hero's
step onto
welcome
that
when he
leaf,
returned there on
and be
July the
carried
6th
far away
with
to the
Admiral
quiet,
Raeder and his
open
other
ocean
commanders
where
in
nothing
chief.
mattered at all.
Only the German Navy
There is a profound
seemed to have
tragedy in the
plans
shared
for an
gaze of two
invasion.
terrified
By the
souls,
time Hitler began to
separated
take
by
an
a
interest
stretch
in
of
them,
water,
the
neither
army had
wishing
its
to
own
break the
plans
peace,
and was critical
yet
of the
both
Navy.
caught in the sweeping current of history. Through the thick mist, they could
Both
not
looked
see
to
each
Goering,
other's
the Luftwaffe
faces.
chief, to win control of
But
the
they could
air,
feel each
vital
other.
for an invasion.
They were mirrors,
And Goering
reflecting
believed
the
the
same
Luftwaffe
private
on its own
tears,
could
the
knock
same
out
longing
Britain.
for a warm hearth, the
Arguments
same
between the
unspoken prayer
services
that
went
the
on
day
for
would
months.
simply end and let them go home. Behind
The
the
army at
French
first
lines,
wanted to
in the
land 40
beautiful,
divisions
ancient
on a
town
wide
of
front
Sedan,
between
the
Ramsgate and
silence was
Lyme
breaking.
Bay and press onto a
An
line
old
from
woman
Malden
stood
and
in the
Essex to
center
the
of her
Seven
small
estuary,
parlor.
sealing off London.
She had lived in this house
This
for
was
70
later
years.
scaled down to a landing by
She
9
had been married
divisions
in the
between
church down the
Folkestone and
street,
Brighton,
and she had watched
supported
her
by
children
2
take their
airborne
first
divisions,
steps on the faded
about
Persian rug
200,000 men
beneath
in
her
all.
feet.
By September,
Now, the heavy
Britain had
wooden
overcome
shutters
her
were
earlier
pulled tight
weakness
against
and
the
had 16
windows,
divisions
letting in
available
only
in the
thin,
southeast.
dusty slices of pale light. She had a single, worn leather valise open on the dining
An
table.
invasion fleet drawn from
She
all
did
parts
not
of
pack
Germany was
anything
assembled
practical.
in northern ports.
In times of profound heartbreak, the human spirit clings to the
Landing
irrational,
craft were
the
built,
beautiful, and the
boats
deeply
converted
personal.
to carry troops.
She
and
packed a
amphibious
silver-framed
tanks.
photograph of her late husband. She
The
packed a
army thought the
delicate,
fleet too
porcelain
small.
teacup painted with
The
blue
Navy thought even that
cornflowers.
size fleet difficult to
She
protect.
packed a small,
Both
embroidered
agreed that
pillow.
air supremacy was vital.
Before she closed
The
the
invasion,
valise, she
codenamed
walked into the
Operation Sea
kitchen.
Lion, was set for
Her
mid-September.
hands were shaking.
The plans did not
She
impress
poured a
the
small
Luftwaffe,
saucer of
on whom
milk and
everything
placed it
depended.
gently on the floor next to the stove for
In
the
my
stray
opinion,
tabby
the
cat that
plan
often
was not
visited her
serious.
garden. It was a
Especially
tiny,
the
beautiful act of
Navy
hope, a
didn't
quiet
want,
declaration that life must go
to have
on,
the
that someone would still still be there to drink the milk,
And
even
the
if she was
Navy
not.
has asked the Air
She
Force
touched the wooden frame
first
of her
all
front door
to
one last time,
establish
a
the
gentle,
absolute,
lingering
the
caress,
absolute
before
air
stepping out into the
superiority
street and joining the
over the
slow,
invasion
mournful procession of
area.
families walking away from the river.
And the preparation the Navy
Back at the
did, they were
water's
not
edge,
very
the moment of
convincing.
suspension finally broke.
Also, our preparation,
It did
my
not
wings
happen with a
especially,
shout.
was,
It happened with a quiet,
destinated to
rustling
be one
sound
of
on the
two
eastern bank,
wings to
like the
be
wind moving
transferred
through
to
dry
England.
leaves.
And
The
our
small,
preparations
canvas
were
and rubber boats were being
about
dragged
ridiculous.
through the wet grass.
The Air Force
The
was
boy
not,
on the eastern bank took a
trained
trembling
and
breath and
prepared
stepped into the
to
shallow water.
conduct an,
The cold seeped
independent air
instantly
war
through his
over
leather
England.
boots. He gripped the wooden oar, his knuckles turning white. As the boat slid out into the gentle current, the fog seemed to part just enough to swallow them whole. There was no turning back now.
As the invasion fleet
The threshold
assembled, the
was being
Luftwaffe's
crossed.
first targets were merchant
For the young
convoys and
watchmaker lying in the
harbors,
dirt on the
particularly
western
in the narrow
bank,
seas
the sound
the
of
Channel.
those oars dipping into the water was the loudest sound
Dover
he had ever
became known
heard.
as Hellfire Corner.
It was not a
There
violent
was always
noise,
something,
but it was the
the
sound of an
newsreel
ending.
camera or the news reporter.
It was
for
the sound of
instance,
the
Charles
old
Gardner
world
of
slipping
the
away,
BBC.
carried off by the current. He felt a hot tear slip from the corner of his eye, tracing a clean path through the dirt on his cheek.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4,
It fell
5,
from his
6,
chin
7. There's
and
one going
landed
down on his
silently on the
target now.
damp earth. It was a tear of profound sorrow,
No, missed the
a
ships. He
mourning for
hasn't
the
hit a single
peaceful
ship. There are
morning that
about
had
10
been
ships in the
lost.
convoy.
Across the water,
he hasn't hit
the
a
boy
single
holding
one.
the oar was weeping
And here
too.
they come in absolute
The
steep
cold
dive.
mist
You can
mingled
see
with
that
the
rock
wetness
next
on
to
his
the leeward
face.
machine and come into
Every
water.
silent
You can hear
stroke
our
pulling
own
him
guns
closer
going like
to the
anything
opposite
now.
shore felt like a heavy weight
There's a
pressing
fight going
down
on.
on
You
his
can hear the
chest.
little rattles of machine gun
They
bullets.
were just boys, crying in
That
the
was a
fog,
bomb,
moving
you may
toward
imagine.
each other in the gray light.
There's another bomb
The
dropping.
river did not judge them. The Muse simply
Yes, it's
continued
dropped
to
out.
flow,
It missed the convoy.
its
No, they
slow,
haven't hit the
gentle
convoy in all
ripples
this.
carrying their reflections, washing over the banks, taking their quiet
just hit a
fears and
Messerschmitt.
carrying
Oh, that
them
was
away.
beautiful. He's coming right down
The
now.
water
I
embraced the
think
wooden boats,
definitely that
it
was that
embraced
first
the heavy
contest.
boots, and it embraced the silent
Absolute
tears
deep
falling
dive.
from
Let's
both
move round
sides
so I
of
can
the
watch him a
divide.
bit more. Here
When
he
you look
comes.
back at that afternoon,
And he's going
do not
flat
think
into
of
the
the
sea, and
grand,
there he goes.
sweeping
Bang!
movements of a fallen nation.
Oh boy, I've never seen anything
Think of the
so
small,
good as this.
shivering hands
The
gripping the
RAF
wood.
fighters have really got these
Think of the
boys dead.
folded leather smelling of chamomile pressed tightly against a racing heart.
The convoy system
Think of
was
the saucer of
disrupted
milk
and harbors
left on
like
a kitchen
Dover
floor.
were badly hit.
It
But
is
while
in
the
these
town
fragile,
suffered casualties,
deeply human moments
Dowding
that
had
the
not
true
yet
weight
been
of
forced
history
to
is
commit his
felt.
full fighter strength.
It is the realization
The
that
unique
behind
thing
every
about fighting
irreversible
command
turning point in
was
the
that
world,
when war
there are
broke
simply
out in
ordinary
September
people
1939,
standing at the edge of the water,
we had
wishing for
there
nothing more
a
than the
system
comfort of a
covering the
peaceful
entire
night.
country
As
for
the
air
shadows grew
defense.
longer and the fog
that
thickened
system
over the
was
valley,
based on
the ancient river
radar,
whispered a soft,
or as we used to call it in
continuous
those
lullaby.
days, RDF.
It flowed
had
on,
this chain
steady
of
and calm,
radar
a
stations
soothing
around the
reminder
coast,
that even
and
when
they
the
were
world
looking
of
out
men
up
breaks
to
apart,
100 miles,
the earth remains,
and they were
holding us
feeding
all
on
and washing
landlines
our
all the
deepest sorrows
information to the
gently away.
headquarters of fighting command.
There is a unique and heavy silence that
Our
fills
radar
the
really
home
won
just
the
after
battle
the
of
fire in the hearth has been
Because
extinguished for the
without
very
it, we
last
would have
time.
been doing
It is
standing
a silence
patrols,
that rings in the
and
ears,
with a
a
limited number of
quiet so
aircraft,
profound
a
that it
limited
feels almost
number
like
of
an
pilots.
apology
You
from the
couldn't have
walls
done it.
themselves.
As it
For
was, we could wait on the
generations,
ground.
these homes had been sturdy
and then
vessels of
radar
safety.
would watch
They had
and
held the warmth of winter
through
stews,
the various
the echoes
controls,
of children learning
we
to
would be
walk on
told to
scarred
take
wooden
off at a
floorboards,
time when the
and the
Germans were
soft,
massing over
murmured
Calais or
conversations
over
of old
Alpes.
couples sitting by the window in the fading
And so
evening
therefore,
light.
we wasted
The
no
walls had
petrol, no
absorbed the
time,
laughter,
no
the
energy.
tears, and the simple, daily
In
rhythms
fact,
of
we
a
could
life
sleep in
lived in
between
peace.
patrols.
But now, the
and
rhythm
then
was
we'd take
broken.
off and we would be directed
The quiet
towards
sanctuary of the
German
hearth had to be left
formation,
behind.
given height, distance,
The decision to
and
leave
their
does not
numbers,
happen all
which
at
is very
once.
important.
It is not born of a sudden,
On
chaotic
August
panic.
13th, Goering changed
It is a
his
slow,
tactics.
sorrowful
He
gathering
ordered
of
an
reality.
attack against radar stations
It begins
and
with a
fighter
glance out of the
airfields which
window,
Fighter Command
seeing
was
a
bound
neighbor
to
loading a
defend.
worn leather trunk onto a wooden handcart. It continues with a
While
distant,
German bombers
low
blitzed
rumble in the
airfields
east,
that
a
defended
sound that
London and
vibrates
southeastern
ever so
England,
slightly
their
in the
escorting
glass of the window
fighters would deal
panes.
with the British fighters that
And
came up to
finally,
attack the
it
bombers.
settles in the heart, the heavy, unavoidable realization that the danger is no longer a story in a newspaper, but a shadow stretching across their own front steps. Imagine a small, dimly lit bedroom in the early hours of the morning. A woman stands before an open wardrobe, her hands resting on the smooth, polished wood. On the bed behind her lies a patchwork quilt,
Fighting over
and upon
England
that
put the
quilt
Luftwaffe
she is
at a
building a small
disadvantage.
mountain of what
It
remains
was
of her life.
expected, but not equipped
When a
to win
family
a
is forced to
decisive
flee,
battle alone.
when the space in a wooden cart is measured in inches, the practical mind often
The German
surrenders to
bombers
the
were not
aching heart.
designed to carry a heavy enough
Logic
bomber.
dictates that one
The
should
German
pack heavy
fighters
wool,
carried only
sturdy
enough fuel
boots,
to stay
and
over
sacks
England
of
for half an
flour.
hour.
But
Whereas the
human
British
beings are
fighters,
not
close
built
to their
purely on
bases,
logic.
could land and
We
refuel
are built
quickly
on
enough to
memories.
rejoin the battle.
We are anchored by love. And so, she leaves
Our
the
range
heavy
was
sack of
very,
grain
very
in the
limited,
pantry.
and we could only
Instead,
cover
she reaches
small
to the
part
top
of
shelf of the
British
wardrobe
islands,
and carefully lifts
including
down a
London.
delicate porcelain porcelain clock.
But over
It is
London, as an
painted with
example, we
tiny,
could only stay
faded
for
blue
10 minutes
cornflowers.
to come
It
back
has not
to
kept
our
the
bases.
correct time in over a decade, the hands forever frozen
So
at a
this
quarter past 3.
limited range of
But it was a
our
wedding gift from her
fighters
grandmother.
in the escort
It sat on the mantel on the
been
day her
perhaps
first child was
the,
born. To leave it behind
main
feels like leaving
point.
behind a piece of her own soul.
which
She wraps the
avoided
useless,
an
beautiful
effective
clock in a thick
air
woolen sweater and
offensive
places
against
it
Britain.
gently in the center of the pile.
Luftwaffe
Next to
intelligence
it, she
misled its
places a
pilots
small,
about the damage
tin
done
box
to British
filled with
airfields
letters
in the
tied
first
in a
assault.
pale pink
They
ribbon.
claimed 8 had been
She
virtually
packs a
destroyed.
child's worn stuffed
In
bear,
fact, none had
missing
been
one
knocked
button
out,
eye, whose
and
fur
those
is rubbed
damaged
thin
were
from
quickly
years of
patched
being
up
held
again.
in the dark.
The German pilots
She packs
faced
a
by
single silver
resistance they hadn't
spoon.
expected.
These
Became
things will
pessimistic
not
about
shelter
winning
them
the
from the
battle.
rain, nor will they
We
fill an
fighting
empty
crews
stomach.
were
But they are
convinced
the
that we
fragile,
couldn't win
precious artifacts
the
of who
battle,
they are.
and we couldn't
They are the
force
proof that they existed in a
England
world
to
that was
surrender
gentle and kind.
by attacking
Outside, in the cobblestone
without
streets and the
any
winding
operation
dirt lanes of the
from the
countryside,
part
a
of the
great,
army
slow-moving
or
river
the
was
navy.
beginning to form.
Therefore,
It was
we
a
were
river made
asking
not of water, but of
that the High
humanity.
Command should
It was an
order
exodus of
the
ordinary
invasion.
souls, stepping out of
Sea
their
line.
front doors and merging into a quiet,
A mere
shuffling tide.
1,400 British fighter
Watch a
pilots
father
and their
as he
ground
stands
crews
on his front porch.
stood between Britain and invasion.
He holds an iron key
The
in his hand.
responsibility was great.
He
Too
pulls the
great,
heavy
perhaps,
wooden
to bear
door
thinking
shut,
about.
listening to the solid,
The face they
familiar
showed the
click of the
world was
latch.
dashing and carefree.
He inserts the
I
key
think
and
they
turns it.
Took the
The sound is
situation
terribly
not
final.
the least bit seriously
For a
from the
long
point of view of
moment,
their
he
lives
simply
generally.
stands there,
Some
his
fellows
forehead
would just
resting
kick a
against the
ball
rough
around
grain of the
or
wood.
Lie around, some would
He
sleep,
breathes in the smell of the varnish,
read
committing it to
paperbacks,
memory.
listen to
Then he bends
radio,
down and slips the key
and
beneath a
that's
loose
all
stone by the edge of the steps. It is a profoundly hopeful, heartbreaking gesture. It is a
I
quiet
wanted to
promise
shoot an
made to the
airplane down,
house
but I didn't want
and
to
to
shoot
himself
German down.
that this is only a
I
temporary
really did
farewell.
not. We did
That one
hear
day,
stories
the
of
storm will pass, the
Germans
sky will
shooting
clear,
our
and he will
fellows
walk back
in
up these steps
parachutes.
to
We used to
unlock the
think that was
door
pretty
and relight the fire.
horrible, but we
He
weren't
turns
sure
and
whether
joins
it
his
was
family
true or
waiting
not.
by the road.
I know I had
They
an
have a wooden
experience
cart,
of,
the kind usually used for hauling
a German
apples from the
aircrew
orchard.
getting draped over my own
Now,
wing.
it
He
holds
bailed
their
out of a
blankets,
bomber
their
and,
bundled clothes,
got caught
and
on
the
my
soft,
wing with his
sleeping
parachute.
form of his youngest daughter,
And
nestled among the
I
pillows.
was jolly careful
He
to
takes
get
the
him off
long
as
wooden
easily and
handles
as
of the
quickly
cart,
as I could
adjusting his
by
grip, and
yawing the
begins to
aeroplane
pull.
and shaking him off.
I'd
The
say
road
no
stretches
chivalry
out
at all.
before
Me between
them,
the German
a
Air Force and
long,
the British,
winding
I'd say
ribbon of
absolutely
gray
none.
dust disappearing
As
over
far
the
as I was
horizon.
concerned, I hated them.
There is no
They were trying
grand,
to do something
dramatic
to us. They
music
were trying
playing
to
over this
enslave
journey.
us.
There is only the soundtrack of displacement. It is the rhythmic, repetitive crunch of thousands of leather saws against gravel. It is the squeak of dry wooden wheels turning on ungreased axles, a sound that becomes the steady, hypnotic metronome of the road. It is the soft, soothing murmurs of mothers singing half-remembered lullabies to frightened infants, their voices floating over the crowd like
The climax
dandelion
of the battle
seeds on
came
the
at the
wind.
end of August and in the first
As the
week in
sun
September.
climbs higher in the sky,
Upon the
it beats
results
down upon the
depended
moving
Hitler's
river of
decision
people.
to launch his invasion.
The millions of shuffling
But the
feet
air
kick
battle
up a
itself
fine,
was between a
powdery dust
comparative
that hangs in
handful of
the air,
individuals on
turning the
either
bright
side.
spring sunlight into a hazy, golden glow. The dust settles on the brims of hats, on the shoulders of dark wool coats, and in the deep, tired lines of the older faces.
The
It
fights
coats the
were
world in a
rather
muted,
extraordinary in a
sepia
way,
tone, making the
because
present
although there were a
moment
lot
feel
of
like an
aircraft
old,
about,
faded photograph.
Suddenly, when you were
On
fighting
this
a
road,
particular
the
man,
invisible
the sky
lines that
became
divide
empty.
society simply dissolve away. The wealthy banker from the city, wearing a dusty suit and carrying a leather valise, walks shoulder
I
to
don't think
shoulder
anyone
with the
ever
peasant
considered
farmer
that
in his heavy
he would
wooden
be
claws.
killed. Death was
A
something
local
which
baker
was
pushes
just
a wheelbarrow
put at the back
filled
of
with
your
blankets
mind.
alongside a
If
teacher
it was
carrying
not,
a stack
then
of
you'd have
beloved
just
books
got the
wrapped in
jitters about
twine.
it and been very worried.
The expensive
If a
automobiles,
fellow did
their
go
tanks
missing,
long since drained
it
of
was
fuel,
just poor
sit
old
abandoned in
so-and-so,
the
he'd
grassy
had it,
ditches like
and that was
beautiful,
that.
useless monuments to a world that is paused. Their owners have
Inwardly,
simply
of
opened the
course,
doors, taking
you'd
what
feel
they
it
could carry in their
tremendously if you
arms,
lost a
and
pound.
joined the slow,
But you
trudging
didn't,
procession on foot.
He didn't dwell on the
They are
subject
all
of death
equal
at
now.
all.
Sometimes
They
you
are
could
all
tell
simply
that a fellow was
travelers,
gonna get
adrift
killed,
on
yes,
an
you could.
ocean of pavement
He
and
sort
dirt,
of lost it, you know.
navigating by the slow, painful putting of one
My
foot in
greatest
front
friend
of
was
the other.
killed. He was shooting
In the
down,
midst
or
of this
shooting at a
overwhelming,
Messerschmitt, and there
collective
was another
sorrow,
Messerschmitt
small,
hit him from behind,
beautiful
and that
acts
was
of quiet
shouting at him,
heroism
and you
bloom
couldn't
like
do anything.
wild
And
chamomile
you saw
by the
him go in.
roadside.
That
Picture an
affected
elderly
you, but you
woman
had to get
walking
on with it.
alone. Her
Your
steps are
friends affect you
incredibly
deeply.
slow, leaning
Terrible.
heavily on a
But you
carved
couldn't
wooden
help it.
cane. She wears a thick, black shawl wrapped tightly around her
The
shoulders,
last week of
despite
August
the
and the
warmth of
first
the
week of
day.
September,
A young man
103
walking
of
past
Fighter
her,
Command's
a stranger
pilots
pushing a
died.
bicycle weighed down with canvas
128
bags,
were
slows his
seriously
pace to
wounded.
match hers. He does not ask if she
6
needs
key
help.
airfields
He
in the
simply rests
southeast were
his
put
free
out of
hand
action for
gently on
days
her
at a
elbow,
time.
offering a
Against
silent,
the fire of
steadying
German
support.
fighters and bombers, Britain
They
was
walk
now
together
losing
in the
fighters
golden
even
dust,
faster than
a
Germany,
temporary family
nearly
born of
500
shared
in 2
endurance.
weeks.
Further down the line, the caravan pauses as the road narrows.
Week in September. Those 2
People
weeks
sit by the grassy banks to
were
massage
the
their aching
worst
feet and
for
drink
us
from
because
tin
by
canteens.
that last week in
A small
August,
boy, perhaps
Germans
5
had been
years old,
pounding the
sits in the
airfields
dirt,
mercilessly.
crying softly.
and
He has
the
lost his wooden
31st
toy
of
train
August
somewhere
was
miles back.
probably our worst day.
The tears leave clean,
Fighting
wet
man
streaks through
was
the dust on
very
his
nearly on
cheeks.
its knees.
An
And
older
Darling was very
girl, a
conscious of
teenager
that.
with tired, hollow
This
eyes
was what
sitting
was
on a
worrying
nearby
him, this
cart,
constant
watches him.
pounding of the airfields, and he was
She
wondering
reaches
how
into the
much
deep pocket of
longer
her apron and
he could
pulls
hold
out a
on.
single, slightly
When I
crushed
say
piece
he,
of peppermint
I mean
candy.
Feitman, because he was
She
still
climbs down
having
from her
to face
cart,
that big
walks
problem
over
of
to the boy,
denying the
and
Germans
presses the sweet into his small,
their superiority,
dirty
and
palm.
yet here they were knocking the airfields
She
to
offers him a
pieces
soft,
with the threat of knocking
reassuring
on Fighting
smile,
Man.
brushing a tear from
On the
his
6th
face.
of September,
For a brief
King
moment,
and Queen
the
visited
overwhelming
Fighting
weight
Man.
of the world vanishes,
There were quite a few
replaced by the
people
sharp,
who
bright taste of
commented
peppermint and the
on
profound
how
warmth of a
tired
stranger's
Dowdy appeared to
kindness.
be. The
These are the
day
moments that
after,
hold the human spirit
7th of
together when the
September,
world falls
when
apart.
an invasion alert
In the absence of walls and
was
roofs, they
issued,
become each other's shelter.
invasion imminent,
As
and
the
all that
afternoon
day,
light
things
begins
were
to stretch
remarkably
into
quiet.
long, violet shadows,
and all
a
of
deep
us were
exhaustion
beginning to
settles
wonder
over
what
the
devil was
endless
going to
road.
happen next. Then
The
late
pace
afternoon,
slows even
the
further.
Germans launched.
The squeaking wheels seem
What
to
many of
groan under the weight of
pilots
the
who
miles.
in the air having to
The
face
horizon
this
offers no
onslaught
destination,
found
only
to be
more
just
road,
about the
more
heaviest
dust,
attack they'd
more
ever known.
unknown.
And then
They do
came
not
what
know where they are going.
Dowding later described as
They
the
only know
miracle.
that they must keep moving
The
away
attack
from the sun,
didn't go
toward the
to the
west,
airfields.
toward the
It went
faint,
to London.
whispered rumors
And
of
the
safety.
airfields were spared.
It is an
Right,
endless
Mr.
road to
Clive.
nowhere, a journey with no map and
sardines
no and
went.
waiting at the end of the day.
Walking out onto the
When the
veranda.
night finally
Right,
falls, it
Looking
falls
down the
heavily,
river.
bringing a sudden, biting
Sky was full
chill
of
to the
planes.
spring air.
Within
The great river of people slowly
couple of
grinds
minutes,
to a
the bombs
halt.
started dropping in the
They
middle
pull
of
their
the
carts into the tall grass of
watch
the
'em.
meadows and huddle beneath the vast,
And that's how it
ancient
went on with
branches of the
considerable
oak trees
time.
lining the
On
road.
that first Saturday,
The darkness
they
is
practically
absolute.
obliterated
There are
from the
no street
Silvertown
lamps
Way
here, no glowing windows from cozy
Silvertown.
living rooms.
As a matter of fact, the
Yet,
whole of
if you look
Tidal
closely,
Basin
the
Custom
darkness
House
is pierced
right
by a
up to
thousand
Silvertown
tiny,
was
fragile
obliterated.
stars on
Make
the
no
ground.
mistake about it.
They are the glowing embers of
If you'd have
small,
continued
hidden
that type of
campfires,
bombing,
shielded by overturned
daylight,
wheelbarrows and heavy
We're
coats.
getting everything of consequence.
Around one of these tiny fires, the father who
Shipyards,
left his key beneath the stone sits with
gasworks,
his family.
Oil farms.
He has draped a heavy wool blanket over
Everything
a
of
low
consequence.
branch to create a makeshift
Nearly all the
tent.
bombs are dropping in the...
Beneath it,
in the
his
proper
youngest
target
daughter
area.
is finally asleep, her head resting
That
on his
night,
lap, her hands
250
clutching the
bombers
worn
returned.
stuffed bear
The
missing
burning
its button
docks and
eye.
warehouses an
The
unmistakable
father
marker.
stares into the dim,
But
orange
Goering's
glow
change
of
of
the
tactics
embers.
relieved the pressure.
His legs ache with a deep, throbbing pain, and his heart is heavy with the immense, unspoken fear of what
Fighter
tomorrow will
command
bring.
regrouped.
He gently
London,
strokes his daughter's hair, untangling a small knot filled with road dust. He looks around at the faint outlines of the other families resting in the grass. He hears the soft, rhythmic breathing of strangers sleeping shoulder to shoulder in the cold night. He listens to the wind sighing through the branches above, a lonely, wandering sound in the vast dark. He realizes then that home is no longer a building made of stone and wood.
After the raid on September the
Home
7th,
is not
many
a hearth,
rescue
or
workers
a
and
locked
firemen
door,
worked
or a
40
porcelain
hours
clock
non-stop.
upon a mantle.
Most of us had the wind
Home
up
has
to start
become the
with,
people
one of
he
them
holds
said.
in his arms.
But you looked around and saw
Home
the
is
rest
the
doing
shared
their
blanket,
job.
the divided piece of bread, the whispered word of comfort in the dark. They have left everything behind, and yet they carry everything that truly matters within them. The road stretches on into the invisible night, endless and uncertain. But as the embers slowly fade, leaving only the quiet starlight to watch over the sleeping
On
thousands,
September the
there is a
15th, the
profound,
Luftwaffe mounted
lingering
another
peace.
major daylight attack,
They are resting.
expecting no opposition.
They are
But this
together.
time, the Spitfires
And
and
tomorrow,
Harlequins were
when
waiting.
the sun rises again to light the dust, they will find the quiet strength to wait, to take each other's hands, and to continue walking gently into the unknown.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There is a
This
strange,
mine.
breathless
No,
beauty to
over
a
the
field
next
of
one and go.
sunflowers
Miss my
at the
house.
height of noon,
And
their
that
bright,
used to go on all
heavy
night.
heads all
But about
turned
10
in
to 8, I
quiet
said to my
obedience
wife
toward
and
the
my
light.
in-laws,
It
well,
was the very
I'll be
edge
off
of summer,
now.
a
And I
time when
just
the
walked out.
countryside
There
is
were
usually
lovely
wrapped in a warm,
three
golden
floor
slumber.
houses they were.
The
And I
earth,
just walked
in
up
her
Approach
infinite
Road
and
about
ancient wisdom,
20
does
yards
not
from the
read the
church,
news.
which was our post.
She does not care for
And
the
so there was
shifting of borders or the heavy ink dried upon treaties.
Nothing. I heard nothing.
She only knows
And
the reliable,
I've talked to
rhythmic
this to
promises
people
of the
afterwards.
seasons.
And the bomb that
The
hit
soil
them,
was
they
rich
never
and dark,
heard. Now,
yielding
I wonder
green
if the
shoots of
people who
wheat
sit
that
here
swayed
now
like a
had that
soft,
same experience.
inland ocean
The
under the
bomb that
passing
hit you, you
breezes.
never heard.
The fruit
And I
trees
felt
were
flat
heavy
on
with
my
the
face.
promise of a sweet
I
harvest,
picked myself
and
up,
the air was
I
thick
turned
with the
around, all I could
drowsy,
see was
comforting hum
just
of
a grey
honeybees
curtain
moving
hanging down the
lazily
middle
from
of a
blossom to
wide
blossom.
road. About
For the
twice
people
as
who
wide
lived
as this
upon
pub.
this land, life was
It
a
was just a
deeply measured song.
brownish grey curtain hanging
It was a
down.
life governed by the rising and setting of the sun, by the need for rain, and by the strength of their own two hands. But on this surreal, sunlit afternoon, a new and entirely unfamiliar rhythm was about to pull itself across the gentle curves of the landscape. It did not begin with a shout or a sudden clap of thunder. It began as a slow, deep vibration in the soles of the feet. It was a tremor that frightened the field mice deep within their burrows, sending them scurrying deeper into the dark. Then came the
No
dust.
matter what shelter you
It
went
rose
in,
above the
there was
distant
always
tree line,
someone
a thick,
there
pale ribbon
who
that
would
clouded the
provide
brilliant blue of the sky.
entertainment to sort of take
And
away the
then,
strain.
moving with a heavy, grinding inevitability,
The underground
mechanized
stations,
world
it was
arrived in the
decided,
pastoral
must
heart
not
of the
be
country.
used as shelters.
Imagine
But
an old
people
peasant
simply
farmer
took them
standing
over.
in the center
The
of his
authorities
vast,
had to
yellow
accept the
field.
fact.
His
Well, we
face
was
is a
all
map of deep,
singing, we
sun-baked
was all
wrinkles,
happy, just like
testaments
there
to
was no
7
war at
decades
all.
of looking
There was
up
a
at the sky
canteen there,
and
and I
praying
used
for
to
good
sing as
weather.
well for the people and cheer all
He
the
wears a
people up when the
faded
bombs
blue
was
work
going.
shirt, rolled to the
Until one
elbows,
night it was very
and a
bad, and I
wide-brimmed
was just
straw
under the
hat to
seat and
shield
praying
his
for the big
eyes.
guns to start.
He has spent the morning exactly as his father did, and his grandfather before him, coaxing life from the quiet dirt.
Who had actually been
He
stationed
leans the wooden handle
in
of his
Hyde
hoe against
Park.
his shoulder
And he
and
told us
turns
about
toward the country
an
lane that
hesitation,
borders his
and
property.
he cried when he told us.
He does not
said,
run.
Believe me, he said, when we were
He
sent
does
into
not
London,
hide.
we simply
He simply
elevated our
stands there,
guns to
rooted
its
to the earth
maximum
he
and
loves,
fired.
and
we
watches
knew that
the
every
impossible
shell we was
unfold.
pumping up had no chance
A
of hitting the
procession of
plane.
heavy,
But he
dark
said, by
metal
God, he said,
machines
don't tell me
begins
it
to
didn't give
roll
you
down the
courage.
narrow dirt
And
road,
there's not a person
dwarfing
sitting
the
around
stone
this
fences
table,
and the
I
delicate
think,
cherry
can
trees.
say that he didn't. Once they
They are
heard those
clumsy
guns
and
firing,
enormous,
good, we've
moving
got
with a
them now.
loud,
But they
mechanical clatter
only
that
knew
drowns
that it
out the
was the
song of the
morale.
larks.
And that's all it did to
They do
them.
not belong
But the
here.
bombs themselves, I mean, they just
They
had
look
to
like
come down.
strange,
There's nothing
iron
to stop
beasts that have wandered out of a nightmare and into the bright, waking light of a summer day. The road is too narrow for all of them. To make way, the great metal tracks drift off the path and press into the
The
edge of the
76
farmer's field.
mornings rescue squads dug
The old
through
man
rubble
watches
searching
as
for
the heavy
survivors.
iron treads roll over his
A bomb
sunflowers.
dropped on a block of
There is
flats.
a soft,
about
wet
4
snap of thick
stories,
green stalks
and it
breaking.
took the whole front out.
The bright, yellow
And
petals
they
are
said
pressed
there's an
down
old
into
chap
the
up
dark
there, he
soil,
won't go in this
instantly
shelter.
swallowed by the
So we go
immense,
up,
rolling
when we
weight.
got up there, there's an old chap
A
there snoring
strange,
his head
jarring
off.
perfume
About
rises
20
into
empty
the hot
bottles
air,
round his
the
bed,
sweet,
and the
summery
bed's
scent of
nearly
crushed
out in
pollen and
street.
bruised leaves,
And he never
violently
woke up
mixed with the
then.
bitter, burning odor of engine oil and diesel exhaust. The farmer does not feel anger in this
We
moment.
saw this dear old lady sort of
Anger
staggering
requires
around
an
and we
enemy
said,
you
"Come
can
on, you'll have to
understand."
come out.
Instead,
And she
he
came
feels
out
a
and all she done
profound,
was just
quiet
half
heartbreak.
of a, what should have
It
been
is the sorrow of a
night dress.
caretaker watching something
And I
beautiful
said,
and
no, you'll
innocent
have
be
to put
carelessly
something
broken.
on, make yourself a bit decent.
slowly walks
She was
to the
about
edge of the
80 odd, and
flattened
she was
dirt.
completely in the daze.
He kneels down,
And
his
she said,
old
"Oh,
joints
I'll go in
popping
and get something."
softly,
And she came
and
out and she
reaches
got
out
that
with a
on.
calloused hand. He gently lifts one of the broken sunflowers. The stem is crushed beyond repair, the golden face smeared
People
with dark
somehow
grease.
got to work through a
He
nightmare
holds
of
it in his
upended
hands
buses,
for a long
cratered
time,
roads,
letting his thumb
bombed
brush over
railways.
the soft, velvety center.
calling in the
It is a tiny,
Radio
private
reporters
funeral
told
for a
America
single
and the
flower,
world
a
that
quiet
London
mourning
could
for the
take
loss of a gentle
The
world
spirit
that
of
had,
Londoners won
until this
sympathy
very
and
hour,
help, but
felt
the
entirely
United
safe.
States remained neutral.
As the heavy procession continues
While
its
Britain
slow,
stood alone from
grinding journey
September
toward the
1940
horizon,
to
we
May
must look not just at the
1941,
farmer, but at the young
40,000
men trapped
people were
inside
killed
those
in
hot,
raids,
moving
half
boxes
of
of
them
steel.
Londoners.
In one of the vehicles,
Hundreds
a
of
young boy
thousands of
leans his
people were
forehead
homeless,
against the
eating,
small, narrow
living,
slit of armored
sleeping in
glass.
rest centers.
He is so far from his own home.
Clothing and everything else had
He is
vanished
covered
with
in a
their
thick
home.
layer of white road
But
dust,
not morale.
his face painted with the sweat of a
Be
long,
clean. You
exhausting
couldn't
journey.
very well say, well, I'm going to have
The
a
air
bath
inside his
today,
machine is
because
suffocating,
you was afraid
smelling
the
of hot
warning
metal
would go
and
halfway
anxious breath.
through it.
He
So
looks
you'd
out through
have
the
a
dusty
bowl of
glass
water
and sees
and have
the
a
old
wash
man
and
kneeling by the
perhaps get
ruined
your neck done and
sunflowers.
run and take all your things
For a
in the
fleeting
shelter.
second,
Finish
their
your
worlds
bath
brush
perhaps the
against
next
each
day.
other.
Never actually have a
The
bath
young boy
properly.
does not see a conquered
Step in and
land.
step out.
He sees a
Get
farm,
used to it.
much
You'll
like
get
the
used
one
to
his own
anything.
father tends miles and
It
miles
was not
away
an
in a
uncommon
different
sight to
valley.
see.
He remembers
no
the way his
windows,
mother's hands looked when she
but plenty
gathered
of
wild
spare.
daisies by the back
Or,
porch.
sorry, we've got no front
He
door.
feels a sudden,
Don't
sharp
trouble the
ache
doc,
in his
come
chest,
straight in.
a
And you
deep
see these
longing
funny
to
little
simply
notices
open the
put
heavy
up
metal
outside
hatch,
the door.
step out
You
into
see,
the
this
sunlight,
is the sort of
and
thing
breathe
that
in the
really
fresh
made you
air.
think that there was
He
something
closes
in it.
his eyes,
and
and in the
the more
quiet
you
safety
saw
of
it,
his
the
own
more you
mind,
felt
he writes a letter
encouraged
to
to be
his
able to go
family.
out, and you knew that
The sky
once
here
you'd
is so
gone out
blue,
to
he
go on
thinks,
to a
the
job,
words forming
your family
softly
were
in the
left
dark
behind,
behind
you
his
always
eyelids.
felt that somehow
The fields
all
are
right, well,
completely
the Joneses
covered
or
in
the
yellow
Smiths up the
flowers,
road, if
as
anything
far as
happens
the
to
eye
them,
can see.
they'll look after them.
It is the most beautiful place I have ever been. But we are leaving such deep, terrible scars in
Factories
the
went
earth.
on working by night as
I
well
wish
as
I
by
could
day.
walk through these fields as a
But
guest,
night workers
simply
were
to feel the
constantly
sun on my
interrupted by
face.
raids.
I am
There
so
was
tired
no
of the
real
noise.
defense against German
I hope the
bombing
crops
at
at
night.
home are growing well, and I
Fighting
hope the
command's
old dog is
helplessness
sleeping
worried
by
its
the
chief,
fire.
Dowding.
Think of me when you
I
sit
once
down
went
for
down
supper.
to Red Hill with him
He
when
opens his eyes
bombers
again,
were coming
the
over
beautiful,
London, and that
tragic
was squadron
countryside
down there,
rolling endlessly
commanded by a fellow
past his
called
small window.
Jimmy Little.
He is a
And he
captive to
said
the
to me on the
momentum
car
of the
going down, he
machine,
said, "You know,
just
Max,
as the
I
farmer is a
hold
captive to
my
the passing
head in
of
my
the storm.
hand at the horrible
They are
thought of
both
all the
simply
little
waiting
people
for the
being
gears of the
bombed,
world
and
to stop turning
I
so
cannot do anything
fiercely.
about it."
Further down
To
the
the
winding
relief of the
country road,
authorities,
a small,
Buckingham Palace
stone
was bombed
farmhouse
as well as
sits
East
nestled
London.
beneath the shade of an
Now
ancient
it could be
chestnut
seen
tree.
that king, queen,
A
and
woman
people
named
were
Elodie
all in
stands
it
by her
together.
open window. The wooden shutters are painted
King
a
George
faded,
and Queen
lovely
Elizabeth won
shade of mint
respect by
green.
their tours of the blitzed area.
She is holding her newborn
They had come to the
granddaughter,
throne in the
rocking
shattering
gently back and
circumstance of the Duke
forth,
of Windsor's
entirely
abdication.
ignoring the rumble
Now,
of
for
the
the first
engines
time,
passing
they
by her
emerged
front
as
gate.
popular figures in their own
She
right.
is seeing the dust on the horizon. She knows what is moving down the road.
Churchill, too, with
But in
bustling
her arms,
exuberance,
she
persuaded
holds something
most political
infinitely more
opponents
important
to
than the
forget his
movements of
part.
armies.
The
She
Japanese
hums a
done
low,
the-
lilting
couldn't have
lullaby,
cared tuppence
a
for
melody her
Winston
own mother
Churchill
used
as
to
a
sing.
man or politician, but
The soft
the
sound of
man
her
who
voice
filled
fills
up
the small room, a
Chamberlain's
fragile
place,
but unbreakable
he
shield
was a leader,
against the
didn't he? He
mechanical
was a
war
leader.
outside.
And I think every
Earlier
time he
that
opened
morning,
his mouth,
before
he
the convoy
inspired
arrived,
confidence into the
Elodie had
people.
walked out to the
Whether they
stone
accept
well
him
in her
as
front garden.
conservatives,
The day was
but he
already
was
growing
there.
incredibly
He was
hot.
for him, and he was against
She
the
lowered the
common
wooden
enemy.
bucket deep into the dark, cool earth, listening to the satisfying
Sometimes he
splash
got
as it
a
hit
mixed
the water.
reception.
She hauled it up,
I can
the rope
remember
rough and
just off of
familiar
Green
against her
Street,
palms.
an avenue there
She did
where
not carry
Churchill
the
came
water
down
inside.
there, and there was a devil of a great
Instead,
crate as
she
big
left
as
the
this
heavy,
pump.
sloshing bucket
And
resting
there were
on the low
crowds of
stone
women there
wall
trying
near
to
the
get
road,
out their bits
with a
and
clean
pieces
tin
out of
cup
the
placed
shattered
carefully
houses.
beside it.
And Churchill,
She did not leave it
after
there for a
having look
specific
round, he
flag
said,
or a specific
"We can take
uniform.
it." And the
She
women
left it
told him
there
what
because
they
it
could
was a
take
hot
in no
summer day,
unmistakable
and the
manner,
road
you
was
believe
long,
me.
and humanity,
And
in
they
whatever
said
shape
that
it
we're the ones
arrives,
that take
requires
it, mister,
water.
you're out of the way.
It was a blind, quiet act of grace. It was a stubborn refusal to let the harshness of the day steal away her simple, ingrained decency. And as the long afternoon wears on,
December the
a thirsty
29th,
soldier, his
1940.
face entirely gray with
German
dust,
planes
will break from the
scattering
marching
incendiary
line just
bombs
for a
set the
moment.
city of London
He
ablaze.
will see the bucket. He
There
will
were
dip the tin
1,500
cup into the
fires
cool,
in and
dark
around the
water
city.
and bring it to his cracked
St. Paul's
lips.
Cathedral was surrounded
He will
by
close
fire.
his eyes, feeling the profound, shocking relief of the cold water washing the dust from his throat.
You could see the fire of
He will
London.
look toward the house with the mint green
You could
shutters,
see
leaving
60
a
miles
silent
away.
and
You
visible
could see
blessing
the
of
fire.
gratitude in the air, before hurrying back to join the endless march. This is how the heart survives.
That night when the
It
fires were
survives in
burning,
the
I was
small,
in the shelter
quiet
and it was burning
rebellions of
above me.
kindness.
And we all had to get
It
out.
survives
and
in
we
the gentle
wasn't
rocking of a
panicking
child,
bit.
in the
We
silent
had to run
apology to a
from
broken
the middle of
flower,
the turn to
and
the
in the
top of
shared,
commercial
unspoken
road.
wish for a cup
In the
of cool
factory,
water
they
on a
had
dusty
the shelter
road.
down below in the basement.
Eventually,
And
the
as we were
shadows
running
over the
along,
sunflowers
there was
begin
all
to
fires all
lengthen.
burning all. I could feel
The sun,
hot
exhausted
on
by
the
the
floor.
heat
The
of the
puddles
day,
were hot.
starts its slow,
And when we got into the
brilliant
shelter, we
descent toward
stood
the
all
west,
night
painting
sleeping
the
on each
hazy
other's
sky in
shoulders.
soft strokes
I
of
stood
peach
all night
and
sleeping on
lavender.
somebody else's shoulder.
The endless procession of machines finally passes, leaving behind a road deeply rutted by heavy tracks, and a silence that feels
Eventually,
bruised and
we
tender.
used so much water,
The dust begins to
we run
slowly
out of
settle
it,
back down
and there
upon
we
the earth,
stood,
coating the
letting
vibrant
the
greens
forest
and
burned,
yellows in a
and we
pale,
couldn't do
ghostly
nothing about
film.
it.
The old farmer stands up. His knees ache. He brushes the dirt from his trousers. He looks
The
out
heart
over
of
the
the
scarred
city of
edge of his
London
field,
was
and then he
destroyed.
looks deeper into the center,
But St.
where the
Paul's
heavy machines did
survived.
not reach. There,
Manchester,
thousands of
Coventry,
sunflowers
Birmingham,
still stand
Swansea,
tall, their
Liverpool,
bright
and many
faces
more
now turning
shared
softly
London's
toward the
ordeal.
setting sun,
All were
bowing
within
their
reach
heads
of the
in the
German
cooling
Air Force
evening
with
air.
bases in France and the Low
The
Countries.
earth has been
It was
marked,
more
but
difficult
it
for
has
British
not been
bombers to
unmade.
reach German cities.
The farmer turns and begins
The
the slow
government
walk
looked
back to his
anxiously
small
round
stone
for some
house,
other way
the
of
broken
carrying the
sunflower
ball to the
still
enemy.
held gently in his hand.
We decided
The crickets in
only
the tall
place
grass
where we
cautiously
could
begin to
fight
chirp,
them
a tentative,
was,
rhythmic sound
the
that
desert,
slowly
North
grows in
African desert.
confidence, reclaiming the
the
quiet.
Middle East theater generally.
Night
There was
falls
nowhere
over the
else. We
bruised
couldn't
countryside.
hope to make a landing
The air
in France
cools, carrying
in
the
any
scent of dew
foreseeable
and damp
future.
soil.
Therefore
The
couldn't
surreal,
injure the
metallic
Germans that
dream
way.
of the
So there
afternoon
were two
fades into the
alternatives,
dark,
two possibles.
replaced by the
Bombing, there
enduring,
went
ancient
alternatives.
pulse
Two
of the
possibles
land.
were bombing
The world
and,
has changed, the
fighting
rhythm has been
in the
broken,
Middle East.
but
And
beneath
that
the
is
settled
why,
dust,
from
the
those
roots
very early
remain
days,
holding tightly
we
to the dark
began
earth,
to
waiting
push,
patiently,
agitate,
endlessly,
ask
for the gentle rain to wash the
armor
leaves clean
in the Middle
again.
East, and we had to
There is a
take
special
the
kind of
armor
bravery
out of the
found
line
not in the
here,
charge forward,
out of the
but in the
defense.
quiet,
That was not a way of doing
absolute
it.
stillness of choosing to stay behind. By the time
On
the late
December the
afternoon
10th,
sun began to
1940,
dip toward the
two
horizon,
Commonwealth divisions
casting
of General
long,
Wavell's
golden
command attacked
shadows
the big
across the
Italian
empty
army in North
fields,
Africa.
the great river of people had finally passed. For
Slightly
days,
to their
the
own
dirt road
surprise,
running
they
through this
advanced
small,
with great
forgotten
speed.
crossroads had been choked with the slow,
Fortress
desperate
after
procession of
fortress was
families
taken.
fleeing toward the west.
100,000 prisoners were captured.
The air had been
Now
filled
there
with the
seemed to be
squeak
a
of wooden
chance to
cartwheels,
get to the main
the crying
enemy,
of
Germany,
exhausted
through
children, and
Yugoslavia
the
and
shuffling
Greece.
rhythm of thousands of tired footsteps.
We did think that
But now,
if
the
it
road
were
was
possible
empty.
to
The
bring
dust kicked up by so many
certain
frightened souls
Balkan
was slowly
countries
settling back down upon the
into
leaves of the oak
conflict
trees and the wild lavender
with
growing by the
Hitler,
ditches.
that the
The quiet was
consequences of
returning
that
to the
might be
countryside.
really
Yet, it
unforeseeable.
was not the peaceful
Couldn't tell what
quiet
the
of a
result
summer
could be.
evening.
The
It was a
view of
heavy,
the
expectant
war
silence.
cabinet and the defense
It was
committee
the sound of a
was
world
that
holding
we
its
should,
breath, waiting for the
if
storm that
Greeks
was
were going to
inevitably
defend
following the
themselves
dust.
against the Germans, we should bring
And
them
waiting
what
in
help
that heavy
we could.
silence, hidden behind the low stone
And, Jill and
walls
I
of
were
an
sent
old
out
vineyard and the
after
sturdy
Wavell's
oak doors
victory
of a withered
to
barn
to
were a
look into
handful of men.
Well, when we got
They
that
were the
Wavell
rear
turn,
guard.
now I hope
In
you
the
won't mind
grand,
what I'm going
sweeping
to say.
accounts of history, this term
I
sounds
didn't think I
official,
ought to waste
tactical,
time.
and deliberate.
And I begun
But
the
here,
movement of
on the
troops from
ground, in the
concentration
fading
to
light of
enable
a
us to go
spring
to
day,
Greece.
it meant something
The
entirely
Commonwealth
different.
landing in Greece was meant
It
to
meant that
forestall
these
a
few
German
men,
attack.
ordinary and
To many
terrified,
Greeks, it
had been
seemed
asked to
likely
be
to
the
hasten
anchor.
it.
They had been
They had
asked to
held their
stand in
own
the
against the
doorway and
Italians,
hold
but
back
when
the
the Germans
night,
attacked
just
on
for a
April
little
the 6th,
while, so that the strangers
1941,
walking down
Greece
the
was
road could
overwhelmed
find
in
safety
3
in the
weeks.
dark.
So was
They were not
Yugoslavia,
an
which
army.
had joined their allies.
They were fragments of a
50,000
shattered mirror.
Commonwealth troops were evacuated.
There were young men whose uniforms were
One
still
has to
stiff and
admit,
new, and older men
that's
whose
so.
faces carried the deep lines of
We
previous,
didn't obtain
unspeakable
the
winters.
objectives we'd hoped for.
They did not have enough
we weren't
supplies.
able to conduct,
They did not have
with the help
impenetrable
of the
fortresses of
Yugoslavs,
concrete.
any effective campaign
They had only
in
the rough
Balkan.
stones of the village, the sheltering
Turkey,
trunks
it is
of the
true,
ancient
remained
trees,
a
and the
defensive
quiet,
pad.
unbreakable bond
We
they
lost
shared
Greece
with one another.
and lost many
Imagine
men,
one of these
brave
men sitting with his back
and
pressed
more
against the
were
warm,
captured.
sun-baked wall of the
So in
barn.
that sense, the balance sheet
Before all
was
of
much
this,
against
he was a
us.
teacher in a
And it
village
was
much
at a
like this one.
pressing time.
He had
of
spent his
crushing
days gently guiding small
By May
hands as they learned to
1941,
write their
Germany
letters
and
on
her allies
chalkboards.
controlled most of
He knew
continental
the smell
Europe.
of ink, the sound of children laughing
And
in
in
a
North
courtyard,
Africa,
the
a
soft
small
rustle of
German
book
force
pages
under
turning
Rommel
in a
had
quiet
recaptured
room.
nearly all the British gains.
Now, he sits in the
British
dirt,
tried to
his
hold
glasses
Crete
coated in a
as a
fine
naval
layer of
base.
road dust. He takes them off, carefully wiping the lenses with the hem of his shirt. His hands are
With
trembling,
complete command
just
of
a
the
little.
air, the Germans attacked
He does
Crete
not
with
try to hide it from the
16,000
man sitting next to
parachutists.
him, a baker
The
from the
first
city with
large-scale
flowers still
airborne assault
stubbornly
in the
wedged
history of
deep in the
warfare.
creases of his knuckles.
In
There is
spite
no
of
shame
heavy
in their
losses,
fear.
they gained a
It is
foothold
a
on a
deeply
vital
human
airfield,
thing,
Malimi,
a natural
which
response
meant
to
that
the
more
overwhelming
troops could be
weight of
flown
what
in.
is coming. The baker reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, slightly bruised apple. An old woman passing on a wooden cart earlier that day had pressed it into his hands, her eyes filled with a silent, weeping gratitude. He had kept it all afternoon. hand. Now, he takes a small pocket knife, slices the apple
Supported by
carefully into
intensive
2
bombing,
perfectly equal
the
halves,
Germans were able
and
to
hands one
advance
to the
against
teacher.
a bigger Commonwealth force.
They sit shoulder to shoulder,
Once
eating the
again,
sweet, crisp
air
fruit in
power
the
won
gathering
the battle.
twilight.
Commonwealth
They do not
losses,
speak of the
13,000
machinery they
killed,
know is
wounded,
moving
or
toward
captured,
them.
and another
They do
evacuation
not
to add
speak
to
of
the
the
list of
odds,
Norway,
or the dark,
France,
heavy
Greece.
truth that they will likely
The
never
British
see the
people
sun
wondered how much
rise over
more
these
they would
hills
have to
again.
take.
Instead, they talk
Churchill
of
thought
soft,
it important
beautiful
that
things to
preach
keep the
beheld at all
shadows at bay.
cost. If we lost
The baker
Crete, we
whispers
lost
about
our
the way the
base
dough
in the
rises
Eastern
in the early
Mediterranean.
hours of the
Our naval
morning,
base and
filling
our
the
air
street
base.
with the scent of yeast and home.
But he kept on telegraphing
The teacher
to
speaks of a
Weibull,
girl with a yellow
saying,
ribbon in her
"Surely you
hair,
can
who
spare
promised to wait for him by the
just a
fountain in his
dozen
hometown
tanks
square.
for the defense of
They are building a
Bellini
temporary
airfield,
shelter out of
which was the
memories, a
chief
warm
airfield
place in
in
their
Crete,
minds to retreat
against
to as the
German
evening air
paratroops.
grows cold.
And Weibull
They know
replied that he
exactly
had
why
no
they are
tanks,
staying.
that they were all having their tracks
They are not
mended
staying
or
under
having
the
their
illusion
engines
of
greased
victory.
or something in the
They are
Delta,
not staying
that
to
he
conquer.
couldn't spare even a dozen.
They are staying out of a profound,
Well,
heartbreaking
Crete was
love
lost.
for the
It was a
strangers
great
they watch
disaster.
pass by.
Upset everybody.
Every
in it.
minute they can
Us
hold this
commons, upset
crossroads,
the country.
every hour
It
they
was
can delay the
a
encroaching
low
tide,
point for us
is
in
another
war
mile
in
gained
the
by the
spring of
mother carrying her
1941.
newborn child.
I used to be up
It is another hour of head start for the old man pushing the wheelbarrow filled with blankets. They are engaged in the most sacred trade a human being can make. They are bartering their own tomorrows for the tomorrows of people whose names they will never know. As the sun finally slips below the edge of the world, the sky bruises into deep shades of violet and indigo. The first stars begin to tentatively pierce the gloom, cold and distant, offering no warmth, but standing as silent witnesses to the quiet dignity unfolding on the earth below. Then, the ground begins to vibrate. It is the same low, mechanical hum that shattered the morning days ago, but now it is closer.
On May the 10th,
It is heavier.
1941,
It
London
is the
suffered
sound
its
of an
most destructive
overwhelming
night raid of
force,
the war.
a relentless wave of
Over
steel and
3,000
momentum
people were
creeping down the
killed or
empty
injured.
road, swallowing the twilight. The men behind the
Hundreds of
stone
fires
wall
had
do
to be
not
left to
run.
burn themselves out.
They slowly
There
push
seemed
themselves
no
up
end
from
in
the
sight
dirt.
to the slaughter and
The
destruction.
teacher places his glasses
But although
carefully back
Londoners
upon his
didn't know,
nose.
it was the
The
turning
baker
point.
brushes the dust from his knees.
In April,
They take a deep,
41,
collective breath, filling their
Hitler
lungs with the
assembled
sweet
all
scent of the crushed
the
vineyard grass and the
commanders.
cool evening air. When the darkness finally reaches them, they meet it not with a
On May the
roar,
14th,
but with a
50
stubborn,
Heinkels
unyielding
attacked the port
stillness.
of Rotterdam.
To describe what happens
15
next in
minutes,
terms of
they
grand
started
battles or
fires which
violent
destroyed the
clashes
city
would be to
center
do a disservice
and
to the
struck
delicate,
terror into the
tragic
population.
poetry of their stand. Think of them instead as solitary candles burning in a
Rotterdam
long,
capitulated,
dark hallway.
And only a few hours
They know
later,
the wind is rushing in,
Holland decided to surrender
They know
to
the
save
flame
other
cannot
cities from a
last.
similar fate.
but they refuse to be blown out quietly.
At night, as
They burn
Rotterdam
as
blazed,
brightly
the
as they
Dutch people were
can,
leaderless.
casting long, defiant shadows against the walls, ensuring that the hallway remains lit
Queen
just a
with
few
her
moments
cabinet had
longer for
escaped to
those who
Britain
are
to
still
carry on the
trying to
government
find
in
the
exile.
door. They
Faced with
hold
the
their
prospect of
ground.
Nazi rule, more than
They
300
speak
Dutchmen,
their
mainly
resistance into
Jews,
the night.
preferred to commit suicide.
It is a terribly lonely
People were
thing
stunned,
to stand in the dark while the rest of the world is moving away from you. But in that loneliness, they find a profound and luminous brotherhood.
Since Napoleon.
In a shallow trench near the edge of the woods, a young boy, no older than 19, is separated from the others.
Broken.
He is entirely alone in the dark. The noise around him is deafening, a chaotic storm that threatens to drown out his very thoughts. He presses his hands over his ears, closing his eyes tight. In that terrifying darkness, he does not think of empires or borders. He thinks of his mother's kitchen. He imagines the warmth of the cast iron stove. He imagines the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. He pictures the heavy wooden door of his home, and he imagines, with all the fierce love in his trembling heart, that he is standing with his back pressed against that very door, keeping it shut so the storm cannot reach his family inside. He holds that image in his mind, protecting it like a fragile glass bird in his hands, and he finds the courage to open his eyes and look out into the night. These small, isolated pockets of resistance were scattered all across the fading map of the country. At lonely river crossings, in the shadows of abandoned farmhouses, and along the edges of ancient, silent forests, ordinary men were stepping into the breach. They were the watchmen of the twilight. They knew the tide would eventually wash over them. The river of history is too strong to be stopped by flesh and bone. But they also knew that a tide can be slowed. A wave can be broken, its momentum softened, if it strikes something deeply rooted and resolute. Down the road, miles and miles away, the families who had fled earlier in the day were resting in the tall grass. They huddled together beneath the stars, shivering in the spring chill, wrapping their arms around their
Germany
sleeping
imposed a new
children.
administration headed by
They
a
heard
Reich
the
commissioner
distant,
personally
muffled thunder
responsible to
rolling
Hitler
across the
and
horizon.
empowered to rule by decree.
A father holding his sleeping daughter looked back over his shoulder
new supreme
toward the
ruler
east,
of Holland
toward
was
the faint,
Dr.
flickering
Arthur
flashes of light
Seyss-Inquart,
painting the edge of the night
a
sky.
Viennese lawyer.
He did not
He had
know the
helped
teacher.
organize Austria's absorption
He did not
by
know the
Germany in
baker.
1938.
He did not know the young boy
In the
standing
ancient
alone
Hall
in
of
the
Knights at
woods.
The Hague, he addressed German
But as he
officials.
pulled the woolen
The 12
blanket
most
tighter
senior
around
Dutch
his
civil
child's
servants were
shoulders,
also present.
ensuring she was warm and safe in the dark, he whispered a quiet, anonymous blessing into the wind. He knew, with a deep, unspoken understanding, that someone, somewhere in the dark behind them, was paying an immeasurable price for the peaceful rhythm of his daughter's
He tried to
breathing.
reassure the Dutch by
The
declaring
night
that
deepened.
Nazi ideology would not
The
be
stars
imposed.
wheeled slowly across
Germany
the
had no
vast, in
imperialistic
different heavens.
designs on Holland.
And at the crossroads, the quiet heroism of the rearguard slowly faded into the
Dutch
earth,
laws would
becoming a
remain in
permanent
force
part of the
until
soil
further
they
notice.
loved so dearly.
Seyss-Inquart
They
made
did
it
not
clear
hold back the night
that the country
forever,
would still be administered by
No
Dutch
one
civil
can.
servants.
but
Anyone
they
who
held it
wished
back
might
long
resign.
enough. They bought the
Few
time.
were to do so.
They paid the toll. And then, when there was nothing left to give, they finally
called for
laid down in the
cooperation
tall
between
grass,
two Germanic
closed their
peoples of the
eyes,
same blood.
and let the gentle, sweeping quiet of the dark carry them home. There is a profound and heavy exhaustion that settles into the bones when you finally run out of earth. For days, the men had been walking. They had marched down winding country lanes bordered by wild hedges, through the cobblestone streets of quiet villages with shuttered windows, and across wide, rolling fields where
As
the
a
spring
conciliatory
grass had been
gesture,
trampled flat.
Hitler ordered the release of all
They had
Dutch
walked until
prisoners
their
of war.
feet were numb, until their shoulders ached from the weight of their wool coats, and until their minds could no longer
started to
process the
relax.
miles that lay behind them.
The Germans promised
They
to
moved
maintain
with a
living
slow,
standards and to
sleepwalking
cure
rhythm,
unemployment.
driven only by the instinct
The
to keep
occupation
going
might not be
westward,
so bad
always
after all.
westward, away from the thunder rolling in the east. And then, suddenly, the road simply ended. They stepped out from the final line of coastal
Reich
pines
Commissioner
and the sprawling
Seyss-Inquart
seagrass,
himself
their heavy boots
saw
sinking
off a
softly
trainload
into
of
the
children
pale,
on a free
shifting
holiday
dunes.
to his native
Before
Austria.
them lay the vast, gray expanse of the ocean. It stretched out to the horizon, a boundless, moving blanket of water that met the low-hanging clouds in a seamless blur of silver and mist. They had reached the
For
edge
the
of
Dutch
the world.
Nazi movement, the NSB,
There was nowhere left
this
to
was a
walk.
moment of jubilation as
To
they
stand
gathered
on the
to welcome
beaches of
the invasion.
Dunkirk in those quiet, waiting hours was
The
to
NSB
witness a
had been holding
surreal
rallies here
and
in
deeply
Bloomsbury
poignant
for
pause
years,
in the
but
turning
now
of
for
the
the first
world.
time, instead of protesting
The
against
grand,
the regime,
terrifying momentum
favored
of the
its
days
champion.
prior seemed to dissolve into the salt air. The men did not panic when they
the
saw the
NSB
water.
membership quadrupled to
Instead,
80,000.
a strange, overwhelming
although still
stillness
only
washed
1%
over
of the
them.
population belonged.
It was the heavy, breathless
Like
relief of
Hitler's Nazi
surrendering to a
party, the
boundary
NSB
you
was
cannot
born of the
cross.
economic depression,
The sea was
fear
an
of
impenetrable
Bolshevism,
wall, but it
and
was
the promise
also
of
a protective
revived
moat.
Europe.
It demanded nothing of them but to simply stop and to wait.
It stood for order.
All along the
discipline,
immense, flat
and an
shoreline,
authoritarian
thousands of
state.
lonely, tired silhouettes dotted the pale sand. They looked like ancient, weathered statues, draped in dark wool, heads bowed against the gentle, persistent wind blowing off
Patriotic
the
in their
channel.
fashion, the Dutch Nazis
In this quiet
extolled
place of
ancient
waiting,
tradition,
the trappings of
glorified the
conflict
fatherland,
began to slowly
and
fall
promised
away.
national self-respect.
A young man, his face smeared with the pale dust of the long road, stopped at the edge of the dunes. He unbuckled the heavy canvas webbing from his chest and let it drop softly into the sand. He unlaced his stiff, waterlogged boots, pulling them
Saluting
off
the
with a
Dutch
weary
flag and
groan,
singing the
and
national
pushed his
anthem were
bare
part of the
toes
ritual.
deep into the cool,
All
damp
references
earth.
to the royal family, the
He
House
did
of
not
Orange,
feel
were,
like a
however,
soldier anymore.
omitted.
Stripped of his heavy gear, standing with the wind running through his uncombed hair, he felt only like a boy who was incredibly far from his mother's kitchen. He walked down to the water's edge, letting the freezing, foamy surf wash over his tired feet. He was from a small, landlocked
Anton
farming
Musset, the
village, a
NSB's
place
leader,
of deep
was an engineer
valleys
with
and
an
quiet
outstanding record in
forests.
the civil service.
He had
He
never
saw
seen
this
the
as
ocean
moment of the
before.
rebirth of the Netherlands
In the
as a
midst
great
of all
power.
this profound sorrow, he simply stood there, entirely
Musset molded
captivated
himself
by the
on
rhythmic,
Mussolini.
breathing motion of the
Hitler
sea,
was the Messiah,
feeling a tiny spark
sent
of
to save Europe.
childlike wonder beneath the heavy blanket of his exhaustion. He looked out across the gray water, his eyes straining against the mist. This was the shared gaze of the beach. Everyone, from the youngest boys to the oldest, gray-haired officers, spent their hours looking out toward the invisible horizon. Just over there, hidden perfectly behind the curtain of fog and distance, was home. It was impossibly close, yet entirely out of reach. The longing to cross that water was a physical ache in the chest. It was a yearning so deep and quiet that it bonded every stranger on the sand together. They were all holding onto the exact same fragile thread of hope, cast out into the dark, rolling waves. As the afternoon deepened into a gloomy, muted evening, the coastal wind began to bite. The damp cold of the sea air seeped through their wool uniforms, settling deep into their joints. It is in these moments of profound physical discomfort, when the world offers no shelter, that humanity builds its own warmth. Tucked into a hollowed-out crater in the dunes, seeking refuge from the wind, two men sat side by side. They had never met before this day. One was a young baker from the French countryside, the other a quiet clerk from a busy English city. They did not share a single word of the same language. Yet, as the wind howled softly over the lip of their sandy shelter, they understood each other perfectly. The English boy was shivering violently, his hands tucked beneath his armpits. The French baker, observing this, reached into his canvas satchel.
But there was another Holland.
He pulled out a thick, slightly damp woolen blanket, a parting gift from a kind stranger many miles back.
Thousands of ordinary Dutchmen
Without a word, he unfolded it
and
and draped half of it over the English boy's trembling shoulders, pulling the other half tightly around himself. The English boy looked at him, his eyes wide and bright with unshed tears of gratitude. He reached into his own pocket with stiff, numb fingers and pulled out a small, crumpled pack of cigarettes. There was only one left. He placed it between his lips, struck a match, and shielded the tiny, beautiful yellow flame with his cupped hands. He took a short draw, the paper glowing bright red in the gathering twilight, and then gently handed it to the baker. They sat shoulder to shoulder in the hollow of the dune, wrapped in a single blanket, passing the cigarette back and forth in absolute, reverent silence. They watched the smoke curl upward, instantly snatched away by the sea breeze. In that small, sandy depression, there were no nations, no borders, and no grand historical narratives. There were only two freezing boys, sharing their meager comforts, keeping each other alive through the simple, profound magic of their shivering camaraderie. Further down the beach, the fading light painted the wet sand in shades of deep violet and slate. A man sat alone on a piece of smooth, silver driftwood. He held a small, withered stick in his hand, idly dragging it through the wet sand at his feet. He was tracing the letters of his wife's name. He drew the curves of the letters slowly, deliberately, pouring all of his anxious love into the damp earth. He knew the tide was coming in. He knew that within the hour, the gentle, creeping waves would wash the letters away, smoothing the sand back into a blank, untouched canvas. But there was a deep comfort in the act of writing it, and seeing her name etched into the edge of the world. It was a way of calling out to her across the impossible distance. When he finished, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The paper was soft and frayed at the edges from being read 100 times. He did not need to see the words to know what they said. He had memorized every loop of her handwriting, every sweet, mundane detail about the garden and the neighborhood cat. He held the letter to his nose, closing his eyes, trying to find the faint, lingering scent of lavender soap beneath the overwhelming smell of salt and wet wool. He leaned back against the driftwood, holding the paper over his heart, and listened to the rhythmic, hypnotic crashing of the waves. The sound of the ocean is a timeless lullaby. It is the steady, ancient breathing of the earth. For the thousands of exhausted men stranded on the shore, the relentless, rolling hiss of the water pulling back over the pebbles became a deeply soothing metronome. It slowed their racing hearts. It softened the sharp edges of their fear. It told them that no matter what happens in the fleeting world of men, the tide will always come in, and the tide will always go out. As the night finally settled over the coast, a thick, protective fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the beach entirely. It wrapped the stranded thousands in a soft, gray cocoon, hiding them from the sky, isolating them in a quiet, private world of damp sand and whispered voices. They lay down right there on the open beach, huddling together for warmth like a great, resting flock. Men used their heavy canvas
As a
packs as
reprisal, the
pillows.
Germans snatched 400
They
young
pressed
Jews
their
at random
backs
off the
against the
street,
backs of
beat them up,
strangers, their breathing
and
slowly
sent them off to
synchronizing in the
Mauthausen,
dark.
already known to be a death camp.
Small, stray dogs that had followed the retreating columns from the ruined villages
A
curled up
communist
in the
street
laps of
cleaner,
sleeping
Piet
soldiers,
Mack, following
offering
his
their
party's
quiet,
instructions,
unconditional
stood up in the
warmth
street
and the simple
and
comfort
urged
of a
Amsterdammers
heartbeat
to
against the
protest.
palm.
No, but
If you were to walk along that shoreline in the deep, misty hours of the night, you would see a beautiful and tragic tapestry etched into the earth. You would see the footprints in the sand. There were tens of thousands of them, overlapping, crossing, and merging into a vast, textured mosaic.
There were no exceptions.
There were the deep, heavy indentations of marching boots, and the soft, barefoot tracks of boys seeking the relief of the water. There were the parallel lines of two friends walking side by side, and the solitary, wandering paths of those lost in thought. These footprints were not marks of defeat. They were the gentle, physical impressions of endurance. They were the silent testimonies of men who had walked until they could walk no more, and who had then found the quiet strength to simply stand at the edge of the sea and hold on to hope. The sand held their stories. It held the weight of their private fears, the imprint of their quiet resilience, and the memory of their shared, trembling kindness. And as the long night stretched on, and the exhausted men slept their deep, dreamless sleep upon the cold earth, the ocean continued its gentle work. The waves crept closer, soft and forgiving, ready to wash the shore clean by morning, keeping the secrets of the stranded entirely safe within the deep, gray waters of the waiting sea. There is a specific kind of miracle that does not fall from the heavens, but instead comes drifting slowly across the dark and freezing water. On the long, pale crescent of the beach, the morning had arrived wrapped in a shroud of thick, gray mist. The thousands of stranded men had spent the night huddled together in the shallow dunes, their bodies shivering beneath damp wool coats, their ears attuned only to the rhythmic and different sigh of the ocean. They were entirely exhausted, trapped in that heavy, liminal space between the land they could no longer hold and the sea they could not cross. They looked out into the impenetrable fog, their eyes tired and hollow, waiting for an answer from a world that seemed to have gone terribly quiet. They did not know that the answer was already on its way. They did not know that salvation would not arrive in the form of grand, steel warships or sweeping military armadas. It would arrive in the shape of ordinary life. Across the channel, hidden behind the curtain of distance and sea spray, the morning was breaking over a different shore. In the sleepy coastal villages and the bustling riverfronts of England, a quiet and extraordinary gathering was taking place. The call had gone out, carried over crackling radio wires, and passed from neighbor to neighbor in the early hours of the dawn. It was a simple, desperate plea. The boys are trapped on the sand, and the water is too shallow for the great ships to reach them. We need anything that can float. We need you. Imagine a weathered, older man standing on a wooden pier in a small fishing village. His hands are thick and calloused, deeply mapped with the scars of a lifetime spent hauling wet hemp ropes and mending torn nets. The sea is his oldest companion, a beautifully unpredictable neighbor he has learned to respect. He wears a heavy knit sweater that smells faintly of salt and pipe tobacco. He stands next to his boat. It is not a warship. It is a small, stout fishing vessel, its wooden hull painted a faded, peeling blue. It was built for catching herring, for rising early on quiet Tuesdays and bringing home a modest catch to sell at the local market. It was never meant to cross the deep, treacherous currents of the open channel, let alone sail into the shadow of a falling nation. But the fisherman does not hesitate. He steps aboard, the wooden deck creaking familiarly beneath his rubber boots. He goes down into the small, cramped cabin and takes a stub of a pencil from his pocket. On the back of an old receipt, he writes a note to his wife. "I have taken the boat," he writes, his handwriting slow and deliberate. "I am going to fetch our boys. Keep the fire warm. I will be back before Sunday." He leaves the note on the small galley table, anchoring it beneath a chipped ceramic mug. He climbs back to the wheelhouse, starts the sputtering, unreliable diesel engine, and unties the heavy mooring lines. As the small blue boat
Another
pulls
Dutch
away from the
Nazi,
safety of the
Valkenburg,
pier,
was put in
he
charge
is
of
not
the trade
thinking of
union.
history.
My father,
He is thinking of his own son, who used to sit on this very deck with his legs dangling over the side, a boy who might now be sitting on that distant, sandy shore, waiting for someone to come.
Religion's name.
He was not alone.
My father was
From
a
every
well-known
harbor,
man, he was a
estuary,
hated
and river
man.
mouth, they came.
And there was a
There
possibility
were bakers
for
who
me
left their dough to
go
rise,
Germany
wiping the
to
flour
this
from their hands
National
before stepping
Socialistic
into small
Educative
wooden dinghies.
Institute. It was a school
There were bank clerks and
in,
school teachers
like
who untied their
a
weekend
school or
pleasure yachts,
something like that.
vessels
We
usually
were
reserved for gentle Sunday
uniform,
picnics with their families on the calm waters of the
We
Thames.
had the feeling that we were
There were
a
fathers
selected
and
group,
grandfathers
better than
wearing
the others.
civilian tweed jackets and soft caps,
you
steering
feel happy
old
when
ferry
you have
boats,
that feeling.
paddle steamers, and shallow
in
draft
a very
barges.
short time, I
They
was,
were an armada of the
educated
deeply
in this
ordinary.
SS thinking.
They brought with
The
them
great
whatever they could find.
Germanistic empire.
They loaded their
And
small
there was no
cabins with
reason
thick
for me
woolen
to
blankets stripped
think
from their
about
own beds.
Early
They
in
brought canvas
41,
sacks
we
filled
decided
with
to
fresh
start
loaves
a
of bread.
political cabaret. We,
They filled metal
looked
thermoses to
in
the
all
brim with
the,
hot, sweet tea,
gramophone
knowing
shops
that
in
against the
London for
biting
old
chill of the
Dutch
sea,
records,
a warm cup of
because
tea
we,
is a profound
used
and
the
comforting
tunes of
medicine.
these records and put
As they
new
navigated
words
out
to
into the
tune,
open
so that,
water, the
every
magnitude
Dutchman
of what
could
they were
whistle the
doing
tune,
settled
and
over
then
them.
every other Dutchman knew,
The
oh,
channel
we
is a
have
vast,
heard that
moody
from Radio
expanse.
Orange.
Out there, away from the coast, the waves grew steep and dark. The small boats pitched and rolled, their tiny engines whining as they climbed the swells and crashed into the troughs. In the cabin of a small, polished mahogany motorboat, a middle-aged father grips the wooden steering wheel. His knuckles are white. The spray from the ocean lashes against his glass windshield. He is terrified. He is a man who loves his garden, who loves reading the newspaper in his favorite armchair, and who has never willingly sought out danger in his life. The sheer size of the gray water surrounding his fragile wooden boat makes his breath catch in his throat. But then he looks down at the seat beside him. Resting there is a stack of dry towels and a large tin of biscuits his wife had packed just an hour before. He remembers the quiet, trembling way she kissed his cheek before he left the house. He remembers the unspoken understanding between them that some things must simply be done, no matter how frightened you are. He takes a slow, deep breath, tasting the sharp salt in the air. He adjusts his grip on the wheel, fixes his eyes on the small, wavering needle of his compass, and pushes the throttle forward into the mist. He chooses to keep going. That is the quietest, most beautiful kind of heroism, the heroism of a frightened heart that refuses to turn back. By the time this strange, patchwork fleet neared the French coast, the day was beginning to
On the
fade.
surface, life in Holland seemed to
The
go on
heavy
as usual.
fog that had covered the beach all morning had
patronage
crept
of
out over the
sightseeing
water,
clubs, Holland's
mixing with the
most famous
gathering dusk
conductor,
to create a
Willem
deeply
Goldberg, still
disorienting
gave
twilight.
dazzling performances
To
at
guide
the
each other through the
Concertgebouw.
gloom, the civilians on the boats began to light their lanterns. They were simple, brass oil lamps, the kind used to light a dark porch or a lonely path. They hung them from their small masts, tied them to the bows of their
But all the
dinghies,
time,
and set them on the
Germans
roofs of
were
their
steadily
wheelhouses.
tightening their grip.
On the beach at Dunkirk,
By
the stranded
1942,
men
the
were huddled
invaders began
against
to
the
fortify
evening
the
chill,
coast.
listening
They
to the
evacuated
dark
resorts
waves
where
lap
people had
against the
holidays only
sand.
2 years before.
They were enveloped in a
The
profound,
Germans
heavy
conscripted
silence.
more and more workers
And
for forced
then,
labor.
faintly, a new sound began to weave itself into the rhythm of the
Those who
ocean.
resisted,
It was not the
imprisoned
roar of
and
airplane
shot.
engines, nor the heavy thunder of artillery. It was a strange, uneven chorus of mechanical
There
puttering.
was no sign of an Allied
It was the
victory.
sound of 100 small engines,
No sign
coughing and
of when
humming,
Holland would
coughing
again
and
defeat.
humming, echoing softly through the dense fog. A young soldier, sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees, lifted his head. He strained his eyes toward the dark water.
German promises
Beside
not to
him,
impose their
an older
ideology
man
were
stood
now
up
forgotten.
slowly, brushing the wet
All
sand from his
performing
coat.
artists, writers, and
The men
painters
along the shoreline
had to
began
join
to stand,
Nazi-controlled
a silent,
cultural guild.
rippling movement of
Only
thousands of
music
tired
approved
bodies
by the
turning
censors
toward the
could
sea.
play.
Slowly, magically, the fog began to reveal its secrets. First came the glow. Small, soft halos of yellow light bleeding through the gray mist. And then, the shapes emerged. They were not the towering, imposing silhouettes of naval destroyers. They were tiny,
Jewish composers
bobbing
were
shadows.
and
They were
players of
fishing
Jewish
boats,
origins
and
sang.
pleasure cruisers, and wooden dinghies. The lanterns hung upon their bows swayed gently with the tide, a beautiful, scattered constellation of warm light arriving in the darkest of hours. The disbelief on the beach was a physical thing. The young soldier felt a hot tear slip down his freezing cheek. They had been waiting for the Navy, for the government, for the grand machinery of their nations to save them. Instead, looking out at the bobbing yellow lanterns, they realized that their fathers, their neighbors, and their grocers had sailed across the ocean to bring them home. The small boats drifted into the shallows, their keels softly scraping against the sandy bottom. The fisherman in the blue boat cut his engine. The sudden quiet was filled only by the sloshing of the waves. He walked to the side of his vessel and leaned over the wooden rail, reaching his thick, calloused hands out into the mist. The soldiers waded into the freezing water. It soaked through their trousers, chilling them to the bone, but they did not care. They moved toward the lanterns like moths to a flame. When the young soldier reached the side of the blue boat, he was trembling so violently he could barely lift his arms. The fisherman leaned down, grasped the boy by the thick wool of his coat, and with a grunt of exertion, hauled him up over the side and onto the wooden deck. The boy collapsed onto the wet boards, shivering and gasping for breath. The fisherman did not ask for his name or his unit. He simply knelt beside him, wrapped a thick, dry blanket tightly around the boy's shoulders, and patted his back with a gentle, heavy hand. "I've got you, lad," the fisherman whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You're safe now. I've got you." All along the dark shoreline, in the glow of 100 swaying lanterns, this deeply human communion was taking place. Men in civilian clothes were reaching down into the cold water, pulling strangers into their small boats. The father in the mahogany cruiser was pouring steaming cups of sweet tea, pressing the warm ceramic mugs into the numb, trembling hands of exhausted men. The simple act of handing someone a cup of tea, of wrapping a blanket around a shivering shoulder, became a profoundly sacred ritual. It was the restoration of their humanity, a gentle reminder that they were still loved, still valued, and still part of a world that cared for them. The boats filled up quickly. They were packed so tightly that the gunnels sat dangerously low in the water. Men sat shoulder to shoulder on the cramped decks, leaning against the wooden cabins, their eyes closed in pure, overwhelming relief. When his boat was full, the fisherman walked back to the wheelhouse. He looked out at the tired, sleeping faces illuminated by the soft light of his brass lantern. He felt a deep, aching warmth in his chest. He turned the key, the small diesel engine sputtering back to life, and slowly turned the bow toward the open sea. The journey back was long and slow and heavy. The channel was still dark, and the waves were still steep. But the fear that had gripped the small boats on their way over had been entirely replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. The stranded men slept in the cabins, on the decks, and in the small, open holds. They were cradled by the gentle rocking of the civilian armada, rocked to sleep by the rhythm of the water. They dreamed of their mothers' kitchens, of fresh bread, and of warm fires. And watching over them, steering them steadily through the dark and vast waters, were the ordinary men of the world. They sat at their wooden wheels, their eyes fixed on the distant, invisible shore, guided by the compass, the stars, and the unwavering light of their own quiet heroism. The lanterns on the tide bobbed and swayed, a long, glowing ribbon of hope carrying the weary strangers safely, finally, home. There is a rare and heavy stillness that descends upon a great city when it realizes, all at once, that its ancient stone cannot protect its fragile heart. Paris, in the late spring, is a city that has always known how to breathe. It breathes through the wide, sunlit boulevards, through the gentle, meandering curves of the Seine, and through the endless, lively chatter floating out from beneath the striped awnings of 1,000 corner cafes. It is a place constructed of light and laughter, of morning coffee taken on small, round tables, and of late-night walks beneath the golden glow of the street lamps. To walk through Paris in May is to walk through a living, breathing poem, a place where history feels not like a heavy textbook, but like a soft, familiar scarf wrapped around your shoulders. For a long time, the war had felt like a rumor belonging to another world. It was a distant, muffled thunder that surely could not cross the invisible, enchanted boundaries of the capital. The people of the city had held tightly to their daily rhythms, finding a profound comfort in the simple, unbroken routines of city life. The baker still woke before the sun to knead his dough.
In each
The
occupied
florists
country, the
still
film's
arranged
message
their
was
vibrant
sharpened by
buckets of
inserting
tulips
local
and peonies
material.
on the damp cobblestones. The city stubbornly continued to be beautiful, an act of quiet defiance against the darkening sky to the east. But there is only so long that a beautiful illusion
The
can
Germans
hold.
were now putting into effect
The
their
realization
plan to
that Paris
destroy
was no
all
longer
the
safe
Jews in
did
Europe.
not arrive with a sudden, shattering noise.
The local population
It
had
arrived
first to be won
softly,
over to
creeping in
cooperation,
like
or
a
at
chill
least to
beneath the gap of a
acquiescence.
doorway.
There were
It arrived in the
140,000
form
Jews
of an
in Holland.
accumulation of
In May
tiny,
1942,
heartbreaking
they were
absences.
ordered to wear the yellow star
It began in the
of David.
parks.
By that
The
autumn,
grand,
they
manicured
were being
gardens
rounded
where
up
old men
and on their
usually
way to
gathered to play
concentration
long,
camps.
silent games of chess were suddenly empty. The stone benches sat vacant beneath the shade of the chestnut trees, dusted only by fallen white blossoms. It moved into the markets, where the towering displays of fresh vegetables slowly dwindled, and the loud, cheerful voices of the vendors dropped into hushed, anxious whispers. The rhythm of the footsteps on the pavement began to change. People were no longer strolling. They were walking with their heads down, their steps quick and purposeful, their eyes avoiding the empty sky above the rooftops. Imagine a small, timeless cafe situated on a quiet corner in the Latin Quarter. For 3 generations, the same family has polished the zinc counter and wiped down the small, woven chairs. The owner, an older man named Marcel, wears a pristine white apron over his dark trousers. Every morning of his adult life, he has turned the brass key in the door and welcomed the neighborhood into his care. But on this afternoon, the cafe is profoundly, unnervingly quiet. There are only 2 patrons left. They are an older couple, sitting at a table by the window, sharing a single pot of tea. They do not speak. They are simply holding hands across the white linen tablecloth, their fingers interlaced, watching the street outside. Marcel stands behind the counter, a crisp cotton towel in his hand. He polishes a water glass until it catches the fading afternoon light. He listens to the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, a sound that has suddenly become overwhelmingly loud in the empty room. He looks out through the large plate glass window. A family is hurrying past, pulling a wooden cart piled high with suitcases and a rolled-up mattress. The father's face is tight with worry. The children look confused, clutching their small toys against their chests. Marcel feels a heavy, aching sorrow settle deep into his chest. He knows, with a quiet certainty, that the time has come. He walks softly to the table by the window. He pours the last drops of warm tea into the couple's delicate porcelain cups, offering them a gentle, melancholy smile. Take your time, he whispers, his voice barely breaking the silence. There is no rush. When they finally finish, and the bells on the door chime their quiet departure, Marcel begins the slow, deliberate work of putting his world to sleep. He carries the woven chairs inside, stacking them neatly in the corner. He brings in the small chalkboards that list the daily specials. He wipes down the tables one last time, his hand lingering on the smooth, worn wood. Then, he walks outside to the front of his beloved cafe. He reaches up and unhooks the heavy, wooden shutters. With a slow, rattling groan, he pulls them down, covering the beautiful plate glass windows. He secures the iron latch. It is a sound that is echoing all across the city, the soft, mournful clatter of 1,000 shutters being drawn, 1,000 doors being locked, 1,000 small sanctuaries being closed to the world. Down by the edge of the river, where the water flows quietly beneath the ancient stone bridges, the booksellers are also packing away their lives. An old man, his hands frail and spotted with age, stands before his deep green wooden box mounted on the stone parapet. His box is filled with old novels, volumes of poetry, and faded maps of the world. The smell of old paper and binding glue is the sweetest perfume he has ever known. He has spent decades standing by this river, recommending verses to young lovers and debating philosophy with passing students. He cannot take the books with him. They are too heavy, and the road ahead is too long. He gently touches the spine of a leather-bound volume of romantic poetry. He brushes a speck of dust from the cover.
What could you do?
He feels a terrible, quiet grief, not for himself, but for the beautiful, fragile things that must be left behind in the dark.
I was helpless.
A young woman walks past him along the riverbank.
Can you do with 24
She is
people
carrying
who
a
are all,
small, heavy
linked
suitcase.
together in the
Her
midst
face
of
is
the day
pale,
after a shooting
and she is
party
weeping
in
softly,
a place
the tears
that's crowded
tracing
with
silent
people.
paths down her cheeks.
So you walk
The
away.
old bookseller gently lifts
And
the
that
volume of
is
poetry from his box.
absolutely terrible.
He steps into
And
her
if you
path
have
and
that
holds the book out to her.
experience, you have
She
a new
stops,
stimulus
looking at him with
to
wide,
risk
sorrowful
yourself
eyes.
for the
Take
few
this,
possibilities
my
we
dear,
had.
he whispers, his voice trembling like a dry leaf in the
Till the
wind.
last Jewish
It will not keep you warm, and it will not feed you,
stay.
but there are beautiful words inside. Keep the beauty safe for us.
The boy who
Carry it with you until you can bring it back.
Us.
She takes the book, her
leave
trembling fingers
me,
brushing
which was
against
terrible.
his.
My parents,
She
after
nods,
4
a
weeks,
silent,
but he after
profound exchange of grace,
9
and
months.
slips the book into her
We
coat
stayed
pocket
together
before
and took
continuing
care
her
of me
long
like
walk toward the train
my
station.
father should have done, or my
The old
husband.
man watches
I
her
had no
go,
husband
then
at the time,
turns
but
back to his box.
It was touching the way
He closes the heavy
tried to
green
take care
lid,
of his
securing
sister.
the
He
brass
worked in the night,
padlock.
and he's very
He
left-handed.
rests his
tried
hands on the
to
warm
soothe
metal
things
for a
for other
long time,
prisoners, just
listening to
get,
the river whisper its
a
ancient
little bit
secrets
more
against the
food
stone pillars
and
of the
dreadful
bridge.
food for his sister.
All
And
across
then
Paris,
after
these
9 months,
small,
he had to go.
heartbreaking farewells
And
were
I should
unfolding
have gone
behind
with-
closed doors and drawn
But it was
curtains.
not allowed.
In a high-ceilinged apartment overlooking a silent boulevard, the afternoon light is stretching into long, golden shadows across the parquet floor. A woman sits at a small wooden writing desk. Her home has been largely empty. The heavy velvet curtains have been taken down, and the silver candlesticks have been wrapped in cloth and hidden beneath the floorboards. She holds a fountain pen, the nib hovering over a sheet of pale blue paper. She is writing a letter to a man she loves, someone who left days ago to join the lines in the east. The city is holding its breath, she writes, her handwriting flowing smoothly across the page. I have never heard Paris so quiet. The museums are empty, the magnificent paintings rolled up and carried away into the dark. Even the pigeons seem to have stopped cooing in the eaves. It feels as though our beautiful city is falling asleep, slipping into a deep, enchanted slumber, waiting for a time when it is safe to wake. She pauses, looking around the empty room.
We failed.
She remembers the sound of his laughter echoing off these walls.
With the Jews.
She remembers the smell of the Sunday dinners they used to cook in the small
The
kitchen.
Netherlands.
I have packed my
Far too
small
late.
suitcase, she
We
continues.
have been neutral in the
I am
First
leaving the
World
brass
War.
key under the
We
mat,
thought we
just
should
as we
be
always
neutral in
joked
the
about
Second
doing
World
when we were
War. All
young
this
and
stupid
careless.
nonsense.
When
And
this
then,
storm passes, when the world is gentle
having
again, come back here.
Sense of protest
Look beneath
isn't
the mat.
Same thing as translating
Open the
it to
door
relevant
and let the
action.
light back into these rooms. I love you in the quiet, and I will love you in the noise. I will see you when the city wakes up. She folds
As
the
the war
blue
went
paper
on, the
carefully,
Germans stepped
seals
up
it in an
appeals for
envelope,
recruits to
and
fight
places
with
it
them in
squarely in
Russia.
the center of the wooden desk.
In all,
She stands
25,000
up,
Dutchmen
pulls her
volunteered.
woolen coat tightly around her
Proportion to its size,
shoulders,
the biggest
and walks to the
contingent from any
door.
occupied country.
She does not look back. She turns the
Only
lock,
half
places
returned.
the key carefully beneath the rough woven mat, and walks softly down the spiral staircase. As the sun finally begins to set, dipping below the iconic skyline, the City of Light does something it has never done before. It remains dark. There are no street lamps flickering to life. There are no warm, yellow squares of light spilling from the windows
At the
of
same time,
apartments.
German decrees
The
forced
blackout
able-bodied
curtains
men
have
to
been
report
drawn
as
tight.
conscript labor to work in
Paris
German war
surrenders to the
factories.
dusk. The grand monuments, the soaring iron lattice of the Eiffel Tower, the magnificent, carved
Rather
arch
than
of
be
the Arc de
separated from their
Triomphe,
families,
the
tens of
towering,
thousands now
protective
tried to go
spires
into
of
hiding.
Notre Dame, stand silently in the gloom. Stripped of their nighttime
Police spot
illumination,
checks on
they
papers
look
make
like
draft
ancient,
dodging
sleeping
difficult.
giants, standing guard over
Another
a kingdom
problem was
that
the
has
ration
quietly
card
emptied
system
itself
administered
of
by
its
Dutch
people.
civil servants.
The silence that settles over the city in the
One
dark
of
is
their
absolute.
tasks was to keep a vigilant
It is
lookout
an
for
eerie,
irregularities.
tragic silence,
This
heavier
was
than
because the
stone.
resistance, now bigger
It is
and
the
better
sound of
organized,
millions of heartbeats
forged
moving
stamps
away,
and stole ration
leaving
books to
behind an
feed the
empty,
growing numbers in
beautiful
hiding.
shell. But even in
We
its
had,
abandonment, the
special
city retains its
organizations
profound
providing
dignity.
people with hiding
It does not
places,
panic.
and they knew
It simply
our
waits.
address. So
The
when they had
wide,
somebody
sweeping
who had
boulevards
to,
lie empty under the
be
pale light of the
hidden,
moon.
at once,
The cobblestones, worn
they
smooth by
knew they
centuries of
could always
footsteps,
bring them to
cool
us
in the night
because
air.
We always had two
The cafes,
sleeping
with their
places
stacked chairs and drawn shutters,
reserved
rest in the
for
shadows.
Such,
Paris holds
urgency
its breath.
cases, you see.
It gathers
And most
its
of the
memories,
time there were
its
people
art,
who didn't
its
stay
millions of
long,
tiny, whispered love
sometimes for a
stories,
weekend,
and
then
folds
in the
them
meantime
tightly
they,
into its heart.
Try to find
It closes
another,
its eyes beneath the
safer
starless
place
sky,
for them when
resting
they
in the
stay.
quiet dark,
in a
enduring the
small room,
terrifying
I think,
stillness of the
well,
night,
somewhere.
and dreaming, patiently and endlessly, of the
4
beautiful
yards,
morning that
5
must
yards.
eventually return. There is a
With,
grief so
9
deep it does
people, I
not make a
think,
sound,
sometimes
settling
11.
over a city like a heavy, velvet cloak.
And
On that particular morning,
people
the sky
from,
above Paris was a brilliant, unblemished blue,
surroundings.
the kind of vibrant, joyful canvas that seemed entirely at
hadn't to
odds
do
with the
with
profound
single
sorrow
things,
resting on the streets
peanut
below.
potatoes.
The air was
That's what
warm,
kind of thing
carrying
could
the
do.
sweet, unmistakable scent of
Reading
early
books
summer, a
from
mixture
the
of
Christian
blooming
library.
chestnut trees
I
and the
played
gentle,
chess with my
damp
wife.
breath of the
I
river Seine.
studied chess.
If you were to look only at the heavens,
With
you would
the
think it was a
books
day
by
meant for
France,
picnics on the grass and
temperance.
long, leisurely boat rides.
But
But down on the ground, the city
It
of light was
was
waking up to a
horribly
shadow
like
it had
hell
never truly
itself.
believed would arrive.
the
The radios had crackled with the heavy news the night before. Paris had been declared an open city. It is a strange, beautiful, and devastating phrase. It meant that to save the ancient, carved stones of Notre Dame, to protect the sweeping, majestic
all
arches of the bridges, and to spare the millions of lives still
And,
sheltered within its apartments, the
only
city would not
one
fight.
way of escape
It would simply
was
open
to
its
sleep.
gates. It would lay down its arms, step aside, and allow the storm to wash through its beloved streets. It was a sacrifice of pride for the sake of preservation. But knowing that the monuments would survive did not make the heart ache any less.
And then at 9 or
In the early hours of the dawn, before
later.
the foreign columns
But that would
arrived, an
already be,
eerie, tragic silence held the boulevards.
uncertainty in the
The
group
great
ways.
avenues, usually
And then
pulsing with the chaotic, joyful
tried
symphony
to
of
do
bicycles, motor cars,
what was
and
the
shouting
program of the
vendors,
week.
were entirely
The
empty.
RAF dropped plastics.
The cafes
So we
remained
got,
closed,
such
their striped
a
awnings
plastic
rolled tight,
bomb.
the woven chairs stacked
and
neatly
found a
behind the
beautiful
glass.
German
The grand
lorry
wooden doors of the apartment buildings were shut
put it
tight,
in,
the
and
heavy
you-
iron knockers resting
You have
motionless.
to destroy something
Yet, the city
inside
was
that
not
bomb,
empty.
And then in half
The
an
people of
hour's
Paris
time,
were
it
slowly,
will explode.
quietly stepping out of their
We had
homes.
no training in that.
They did not gather to shout or to throw stones.
And after
They gathered to bear
it
witness.
still didn't explode.
They walked
So we
down to
ran
the
back
edges
to
of the
bureau
wide,
we
sweeping
had, and
boulevards,
made another
taking their
bomb,
places on the sidewalks
and
beneath the
pressed that a
shade of
little
the
bit
green
better.
canopy.
And it was a
They
little
stood
bit
shoulder
risky
to
put
shoulder,
it in,
a
because
vast,
if the other
silent
one
congregation of the
would trigger
broken-hearted.
off just by a little
Picture an
movement.
older man,
Well, I
a veteran
couldn't
of a
tell you the
long-ago
story then,
winter,
but it
standing
didn't.
on the curb of the
And half an hour
Champs-Élysées.
later, the two of them went
He
together
wears his
and it was
best
real
suit,
fire.
the wool brushed clean, a small,
You need
faded
some
ribbon
joy
pinned carefully to his
go on,
lapel.
because we had other days
His
also.
posture is rigidly straight,
some of the
a
friends
final,
will never come
quiet act of dignity.
waren in Nederland
He leans his weight
verschillende
onto a polished
illegale
wooden
bladen.
cane.
There were several illegal
He looks
newspapers
down the
in
long,
Holland.
magnificent
En dat
avenue
lukte ze
toward
nog
the
wel.
Arc de
Hadden ze
Triomphe,
40.
a monument
Once the
built to
Germans
celebrate
had
the
taken
glory
40
and
of our
resilience
people
of his
prisoner.
people.
They've been put in for
He remembers when he
concentration
marched
camp.
beneath that arch,
En,
young and
toen
full
hebben
of
ze
breathless
een
hope,
van die
believing
They
that the world
interrogated
had
one of
finally
them
learned
and
the
then
value
released
of
him
peace.
and sent him to us with
Now,
this
he
message.
stands in the warming
If you
sun,
close
waiting
down
for the
the
echo
paper.
of a different boot.
This was near the
Next
end
to
of
him
the war,
stands a young
probably
mother.
1944.
She is holding her little
If you
girl's
stop
hands so
producing
tightly
your
her
paper,
knuckles are white.
Then we won't shoot
The
these
little
people.
girl is wearing a yellow summer dress,
Dat
her
zal
hair
wel in
braided with a soft pink
1944
ribbon.
geweest zijn.
She is too young to understand the
Als
complex,
jullie
shifting
met,
tides of
die
empires.
krant staken,
She only
dan
knows that her
zullen wij die
mother's
mensen
hand is
niet
trembling,
doodschieten.
and that the adults around
We
her have
called a
faces
meeting
like carved
and talked it
stone.
over very carefully.
She looks up at her mother, her wide, innocent
toen
eyes
zijn we
asking
tot
a
de
question that
conclusie
has no
gekomen,
gentle
we
answer.
gaan toch.
We reached
The mother does
conclusion
not speak.
that we had to go
She
on.
simply kneels down, ignoring the dust on the pavement, and pulls her daughter into a fierce, protective embrace. She buries her face in the child's soft
As soon
hair,
as some of your
breathing in the
friends are
scent of
shot,
milk and sweet soap,
you take
anchoring
things
herself
more
to the only thing
If
in
you
the
know
world
that
that
this
still
man
makes
is
sense.
penetrating in the underground
And
force,
then,
and
the
you
silence
can
of the
shoot
morning
him
is broken.
and save so many lives.
It begins as a vibration
terrible
in the
difficult and
cobblestones,
terrible
a rhythmic,
responsible.
mechanical tremor that travels up through the soles
We
of
had
their shoes.
be ordered
It is the
kill a
sound of
couple.
thousands of boots falling in perfect,
A
unyielding
dangerous
unison.
couple. We
It
were
is a
asked to
heavy,
shoot them
great
on the
tide
streets.
rolling into the
When we
beautiful,
crossed the
sunlit
bridge,
harbor of the
shoot
city.
them there and run away.
As the vanguard of the
But we had
foreign
a
army
school
appears at the top of
very
the
near to
boulevard,
that place,
the Parisians
and
do not turn
there were so many
away.
people on the streets
They watch.
that we thought, let them,
The marching columns
let them bring
pass
them in
beneath the
that
shadow of
school
the
and
great
kill them in the
monuments.
cellar.
They pass the elegant storefronts with their
And,
darkened
as
windows.
soon as they came in that
They pass
cellar
the
and
silent
light was
statues of poets and philosophers who
on,
wrote
we
of
saw that
freedom
the
and
wife was
love.
pregnant.
The mechanized world
then
has arrived in
we
the
couldn't
capital
do
of
that.
romance, bringing
So
with it a cold, sharp geometry
We
that clashes
arranged the
terribly with the
commander of our
soft,
group and
elegant
I
curves
that
of
we
the
should
city.
threaten them.
It is in this moment,
And we
as the
did so.
reality of the
The man
occupation finally solidifies
and we
before
give
their
him an
eyes,
elephant
that the
and
boulevards
an
begin to weep.
But you just
It
threaten
is
him.
not a loud,
And
dramatic
then
wailing.
His wife also.
It is a
but,
quiet, collective shedding of
in
tears.
relationship to her situation.
All along the sidewalks,
And we took the
thousands of
risk
faces glisten in the summer sun.
of their promises.
Men who have not cried since
of
they were
stepping out
children
of their
feel the
practice
hot,
and,
stinging tracks of
waiting
tears
till
pulling
after the
down
war
their
people
withered
could do
cheeks.
with them what was necessary.
Women press delicate, lace-edged handkerchiefs to their lips,
Spring
trying to
1944.
stifle the soft, shuddering
The
sobs
second
that
front
rise in their
leading to
chests.
the longed-for liberation.
The old man with the wooden cane does
Germans
not
put out
wipe his
posters
eyes.
warning that Allied invasion
He
would mean
allows the
death and
tears to
destruction.
fall freely, a silent, honorable
Mother,
tribute
it's
to the
the
city
second
he
front
loves
father was
so
always
dearly.
talking about.
He watches the foreign flag being raised over the distant rooftops, a stark, jarring splash of color against
But
the
the
beautiful
invasion
Parisian
came.
sky.
And by the autumn of
Beside him,
1944,
the
the
young
Allies
mother
were
stands
racing
back
north.
up.
On September
A
the
single
13th,
tear
the first
escapes
Dutch
her
city,
lashes and
Maastricht,
falls,
in the extreme
landing
south, was
softly on the
liberated.
dusty toe of her leather
Resistance
shoe.
fighters arrested Nazis and
The old
punished
man
women
notices. He does not know her name. He does not know if
But
she is
while
a
the southern
seamstress,
tip of
a
Holland
baker,
rejoiced,
or a wealthy heiress.
The rest of the country impatiently
In this
waited
moment,
for their
none of
liberation.
that matters. They are simply two citizens of a grieving city.
Days later, their hopes were
Slowly,
dashed.
his trembling,
The Allies were
liver-spotted
beaten
hand
severely
reaches
at
out.
Arnhem.
He gently rests his fingers on the young mother's shoulder. It is a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture,
The
but it
Dutch
holds the
government in
weight of the
exile
entire
called for a
world.
railway strike to deny supplies
It is a
to
silent
German armies.
communication of profound empathy.
Railwaymen who had hesitated
I know,
before now
the
came
text
out in
says,
force, bringing all
I am
transport to a
here.
standstill.
We are still here.
Germans retaliated
The
by
young
cutting
mother
off
reaches
all
up and
supplies
places
of
her hand
fuel
over
and
his,
food to
her
cities
fingers
in Western
resting
Holland.
gently against his knuckles. They stand there together, two strangers
people were
bound by a
scavenging
shared,
along
breaking
silent.
heart, watching the endless
all
gray
25,000
procession move
Dutchmen
through the
volunteered.
center of their home.
In proportion to its size,
This was the
biggest
quiet
contingent
heroism
from
of
any
the open
occupied
city.
country.
It was the immense, breathtaking courage it took
Only
to
half
stand on the
returned.
sidewalk and simply endure the breaking of the illusion. It was the strength to swallow the bitter pill of surrender so that the bridges would not burn, so that the great cathedrals would not shatter, and so that the children in their yellow summer dresses might live to see another spring. Behind the drawn shutters of a nearby apartment, a young university student sits on the floor of his bedroom. He
At the same
cannot bear to
time,
look out the
German
window.
decrees forced
The
able-bodied men
rhythmic
to
thud
report
of the
as
boots
conscript
outside
labor to
beats
work in
against his
German war
temples like a
factories.
heavy drum. He has a notebook in his lap, the blank pages glaring up at him. He picks up a
Rather than
pencil,
be separated
seeking
from their
refuge in
families,
the
tens
only
of
place the
thousands
marching
now
cannot
tried to go
reach,
into hiding.
the quiet, boundless sanctuary of his own mind. They have taken
Police
the
spot
streets,
checks
he
on
writes,
papers made
his
draft
handwriting
dodging
hurried
difficult.
and sharp.
Another
They have
problem
taken the
was ration card
squares
system
and the parks
administered by
and the
Dutch
steps
civil
of the
servants.
opera house. The air outside my
One
window
of their
belongs to
tasks
them
was
now,
to keep a vigilant lookout
but
for
they have only
irregularities.
conquered the stone.
This was because the
They
resistance,
have only
now
captured
bigger
the
and
geography.
better organized,
He
forged
pauses,
stamps and stole
taking a
ration
deep,
books to feed
shaky
the growing
breath,
numbers in
listening to
hiding.
the relentless noise echoing off the
We
buildings.
had special
They
organizations
cannot occupy my
providing
memories,
people
he
with hiding
continues,
places,
the words
and
flowing
they
softer
knew,
now.
Our
They
address.
cannot take the memory
So
of
when
my
they had
father
somebody
teaching me
who
to
had
ride a
to,
bicycle by the river.
Be hidden,
They cannot take the
at
taste of
once.
warm bread on a Sunday morning.
They knew they could
They
always
cannot
bring
take the
them to
poetry
us
we
because
whispered in the
we always had
cafes.
two sleeping
The city of
places,
stone has fallen
in,
asleep, but the city of the
reserved
heart
for
is simply
such,
going into hiding.
urgency cases,
We will
you
carry
see.
Paris inside
And
of
most
us now,
the time,
a
there were
secret,
people who
glowing
didn't stay
ember,
long,
tucked safely away in the
sometimes
dark.
for a weekend, and then in
He
the
closes
meantime
the
they,
notebook, holding it
tried
tightly to
find
his chest.
another,
He
safer
leans
place
his
for
head
them
back
where they
against the
could stay.
wallpaper,
in
closing
a
his
small
eyes,
room,
letting
I
the
think
profound
kept well
truth of his own words settle over him like a warm blanket.
4 yards.
As the long,
5 yards.
surreal day finally begins to wane,
With,
the shadows of
9
the
people,
chestnut
I think,
trees stretch across the
sometimes 11.
boulevards, long and dark. The marching
And,
eventually slows,
people
replaced by the unfamiliar,
from,
sharp shouts of foreign
other
commands and the rumbling of heavy engines settling into the squares.
We hadn't to do with
The Parisians
single
slowly,
thing.
quietly
People
turn away from the
protected.
curbs.
That's called a
The
kind of
weeping
thing you could
boulevards
do.
begin to empty.
Reading books.
They walk back to their
from the
apartment
Christian
buildings.
Library. I played
They
chess
unlock
with
the
my
heavy
wife.
wooden doors
I
and step into
studied
the cool,
chess
shadowed courtyards.
with the
They climb the
books my
winding,
friends
carpeted
sent from
staircases,
Amsterdam.
their footsteps heavy and slow.
But
They return to their small kitchens
it
and their
was
quiet living
horribly
rooms.
like hell itself.
The city is holding its breath no longer.
Sartre
It has
puts
exhaled.
it in huis clos.
The worst has happened, and yet the earth is
Sitting
still turning.
together with
The Seine is
people
still
who
flowing,
get
a
to
dark,
dislike
shimmering ribbon slipping
more
quietly
and
toward the sea.
more every minute
Night
of
falls
the day.
over Paris. It is a strange,
With all
suffocating dark,
tensions
stripped of its sparkling streetlights and illuminated only by the pale, indifferent
Only
glow of the
one
moon.
way of escape.
The people sit in their
Good
darkened rooms, listening to the unfamiliar sounds echoing from the streets
Well,
below.
early in the morning you went to
They
the
are
bureau. We
incredibly
had a Bible
frightened,
Institute
and they are
as the bureau.
deeply, profoundly
Very good,
sad.
because we were hiding
But as they
all
pull their
explosives
woven
and
blankets
weapons
over their
behind the
shoulders, as
library
they
of the
strike a
Bible
single
Institute.
match to light a candle in the
And then
deepest
at
corner of
9
the
or
room,
9:30
they
you had to be
realize
there,
they are
and not
still
later.
alive.
For that would
The beautiful
already be,
monuments built for peace now stand as silent prisoners in the
uncertainty
dark.
in the group. Where is he?
But the true
And
monuments
then
of France, the gentle
we
hearts,
try to
the
do
shared tears, the quiet,
what was the
stubborn
program of the
resilience of a
week.
mother holding her
The
child,
RAF dropped
and the comforting
plastics.
touch of an old
So
man's
we
hand.
got,
These
such a
monuments are
plastic
entirely
bomb.
untouchable.
And found
rest
a
now.
beautiful German
They sleep a deep,
lorry
fitful sleep in a changed world.
put it in. And
But even
you-
in the deepest frost of the
you
darkest
have to
night, the
destroy
roots remain
something
safe beneath the
inside that
soil.
bomb, and then in
The city
half an
belongs
hour's
to the
time
shadows for
it will
now,
explode.
but the people close their
Well, we
eyes,
had no
holding
training
on to
in
the
that,
quiet,
and we didn't
enduring
press
promise that
too
no
fast.
night can last
And
forever,
after
and
three
that the
quarters of an
dawn,
hour, an hour, it
eventually,
still
must
didn't
always
explode.
return.
So we went back to the
There are
bureau.
places
We
on
had
this earth
and
where
made
history
another
rests
bomb.
so heavily upon the soil
And
that even the
pressed that a
wind
little bit
seems to
better,
hold its breath as
and
it
was
passes
a little
through the
bit risky
trees.
to put it in,
If
because
you were to
the
walk
other
into
one
the deep, secluded
would
forest
trigger
of
off
Compiègne
just
on
by
that
a little
warm
movement.
summer afternoon,
Well,
you
I
would have
could
found
tell
a
you the story
profound
then,
and
but
ancient
it
peace.
didn't. And half
The
an hour
tall,
later, the two of
majestic
them went
oaks and
together
elegant
and
beech
was real
trees
fire.
reached up toward a pale blue sky,
You need
their
some
leaves
joy
whispering softly in
to
the
go
gentle
on,
breeze.
because we had other days
The
also.
forest floor was dappled
some of
with
the friends
warm,
would never
golden
come back.
sunlight, and the
Er
air
waren in
smelled
Nederland
sweetly of pine
verschillende
needles, damp earth,
illegale
There
and
were several
wild
illegal
ferns.
newspapers in Holland.
It was a place designed
En
for
dat lukte
quiet
ze ook wel.
reflection,
Hadden ze
a
40
sanctuary
Once
hidden away
the
from the
Germans had
noise
taken
and the
40
breaking
of
of
our
the world
people prisoner.
outside.
They've been put in
But nestled within a
concentration
small,
camps.
sunlit clearing in the heart of these
toen hebben
quiet
ze
woods
een van die
sat a
mannen-
They
single,
interrogated
solitary
one of them
railway
and then
carriage.
released him and sent
It
him
was
to
an
us
elegant,
with this
aging
message.
thing, crafted
If
of
you
dark,
close down the
polished
paper-
wood and heavy glass.
This was near the
For
end
over
of the
2
war, probably
decades, it had rested in the quiet shadows of a museum,
stop
a silent
producing your
monument to a
paper,
different time,
then we
a
won't
different
shoot
piece.
these people.
Now, it had been pulled
Dat
from
zal
its
wel in
slumber and
1944
brought back into the
geweest
light,
zijn.
resting upon a short stretch of iron rails that
Als
led to
jullie
nowhere.
met die
To the
krant
men who were
staken,
asked to step
dan
inside this
zullen wij
carriage,
die
the
mensen
wooden
niet
steps
doodschieten.
felt impossibly steep.
We called a meeting.
There were the
and talked
delegates,
it over
men who
very
had spent
carefully.
their lives in quiet offices
En,
and bustling
toen
ministries,
zijn we tot de
men with
conclusie
silver
gekomen,
hair and deeply
we gaan
lined
toch-
We
faces.
reached the conclusion.
They wore
that we
heavy,
had to
dark
go
suits
on.
that felt too warm for the summer day. They did not carry weapons. They carried only slim leather briefcases, filled with papers that held
As
the
soon as some
agonizing,
of your friends are
inescapable
shot,
truth of their
You
nation's
take things more
exhaustion.
serious. If you
Imagine
know
one
that
of these
this
men
man
as he
is
approaches the
penetrating
door
in
of the
underground
railcar.
forces, and you can
His
shoot
name is
him
Charles.
and save so many lives.
He is a grandfather,
Terrible
a man who
difficult and
loves the
terrible
quiet hours of the morning, who tends to a small rose garden
We
behind
had
his
to
home in
be
the
ordered
provinces.
To kill a couple.
As he places his hand on the brass railing to
a
climb the
dangerous
steps, his
couple.
fingers tremble,
We were asked
just
to shoot them
slightly.
on the streets.
He feels
we
a
crossed the
terrible,
bridge,
crushing weight
shoot them
resting
there
upon
and
his
run away.
shoulders.
But we had
It
the
is not the
school
weight of wood or
very near
stone,
to
but
that
the
place,
invisible,
and
suffocating
there were
weight
so
of
many
millions
people
of
on the
hopes,
streets.
millions of
And we
fears,
thought,
and
let
the
them-
collective,
let
breaking
them
heart
bring
of the
them in
country
that
he
school
loves.
and kill them in the cellar.
He steps through the narrow door and into the carriage.
And, as soon
The
as
air
they
inside
came
is
in that
entirely
cellar
still.
and the light was
It smells of
on,
old
we
velvet,
saw that the
varnished
wife was
mahogany,
pregnant.
and the faint, dry dust of
then
enclosed
we
spaces.
couldn't do that.
The windows are large, letting in the soft,
we
filtered
arranged
light of the
the
forest,
commander of
illuminating
our
the
group
tiny
and I that
motes
we
of
should
dust dancing
threaten them.
lazily in the air.
And we did
In the
so.
center of the car
men
is a long wooden table,
first, and
polished
we
to a
give them
dull
hell
shine,
for time
surrounded by
and
heavy, upholstered
by his
chairs.
threatening.
Charles
And then
takes his seat,
his wife also.
The velvet
but,
cushion sighs softly
in
beneath him.
relationship to her
He
situation.
places his leather
And
briefcase
we
on the
took the
table.
risk
He does not look
of,
out the window
their
at the
promises.
beautiful, indifferent
of
trees.
stepping out of their practice.
He looks
and
down at his own
waiting
hands,
till
resting
after the
flat
war,
against the
people
dark
could do with
wood.
them what was necessary.
They are the hands that used to lift his granddaughter high into the
Spring
air,
1944.
the hands that pruned the delicate climbing
The
roses.
second front leading to the
Now,
longed-for
they are the
liberation.
hands that must sign away the freedom
Germans
of his
put up
homeland.
posters warning that Allied invasion
Across
would
the
mean
table
death and
sit the men in different uniforms, the architects of this terrible new reality.
Was always talking about.
But Charles does not focus on their faces. The grand, sweeping animosities of nations feel strangely distant in
invasion
this small, quiet
And
room.
by the autumn of 1944,
There is no
the
shouting
Allies
here.
were racing north.
There is
On
no
September
anger.
the 13th, the first Dutch
There is
city,
only a
Maastricht,
deep,
in the
hollow
extreme
sorrow,
south,
a
was
sorrow
liberated.
so vast and
Resistance
quiet it
fighters
fills
arrested
every
Nazis
corner
and
of the
punished women
carriage.
collaborators.
He unclasps his briefcase. The small, metallic
But
click
while the
sounds
southern
deafening
tip
in the
of Holland
silence.
rejoiced, the
He
rest
withdraws
of the
the
country
thick,
impatiently
cream-colored
waited for their
pages.
liberation.
The terms are absolute. They are heavy,
Days later,
iron
their
door
hopes were
closing
dashed.
upon the gentle world
The
he has
Allies were
always
beaten
known.
severely at Arnhem.
As he sits there in the agonizing quiet, waiting for the moment to take up the pen, his mind drifts away from the velvet and the wood.
The Dutch government in
In
exile
moments of
called for a
profound
railway
tragedy,
strike to
the
deny
human
supplies
heart
to German
often
armies.
retreats to the smallest, most
Railwaymen
beautiful
who had
comforts it
hesitated
can
before
find.
now came out in force,
Charles
bringing
thinks
all
of a letter
transport to a
folded
standstill.
softly in the breast pocket of his suit.
The Germans retaliated
It is
by
a letter
cutting
from
off
his daughter,
all supplies
written
of
just
fuel
days
and
before the
food
postal
to
routes
cities in
were
Western
severed.
Holland.
She had written to tell him that they had safely reached a small farmhouse
Soon
in the
people were
south, that
scavenging
the baby
along
was
silent
sleeping
and
well
deserted
despite
railway
the
tracks
journey,
for bits of
and
coal.
that the lavender in the fields was just beginning to bloom.
Shops
Do
ran
whatever
out
you
of
must
food.
do to let us simply live,
Prices
she had
soared
written
on the
at the
black
very
market.
bottom of the page,
People
the
kept
ink
alive by
slightly
eating
smudged
tulip
by a
bulbs.
hurried hand. We only want to wake up tomorrow. We only want the
Despite
noise to stop.
privations, the
He
strikers
presses his
held
arm
firm.
gently against his chest,
Using
feeling the
forged
faint
securities,
outline of
their
the
wages
folded
were
paper through
repaid
the
by
wool
the
of his
resistance,
suit.
which
He
was by
realizes
now
then
also
that what he is
hiding
doing in this
300,000
shadow
men
carriage
wanted by
is
the
not an
Germans
act
for
of
forced
surrender
labor.
to an enemy. It is
There
an
was
act
no
of
electricity
desperate,
or
agonizing love for his people.
Houses left vacant by
He is
Jews
yielding the
were stripped
geography,
of wood
the
for use
flags,
as fuel.
and the monuments, so that the mothers on the endless roads can finally stop walking. He is trading the pride of a nation for the simple, quiet continuation of its heartbeat. A heavy, ornate fountain pen is placed upon the table before him. The metal is cool to
As
the
the winter
touch.
got worse,
He
the
wraps his
Germans
fingers
relented
around
and
it.
allowed emergency
For a
soup
single,
kitchens.
suspended moment, the entire carriage seems to hold its breath. The leaves outside the glass fall perfectly still. The world pauses. He lowers the nib to the thick paper. The sound of the pen scratching across the page is the only noise in the room. It is a tiny, fragile
Still,
sound, a soft
it was clear that many would
SHHH of ink
starve
sinking
unless
into
Holland was
parchment.
liberated.
Yet, in the quiet of that carriage,
I did
it is the loudest
ask
sound
my
Charles
friend
has
Peter
ever
Smith
heard.
to
It
ask
echoes
the
off the
Allies,
mahogany
could
panels.
they not
It
start
echoes
a
in the
separate
deep,
action
hollow spaces
to
of his chest.
liberate,
With a
the
few
rest of
slow,
Holland,
deliberate strokes of
we've
dark
got
ink,
up to
a
the
line
Maas,
is drawn through history.
and then up
The
to
struggle is officially
Nijmegen,
laid to
and that
rest.
was it. And
The
rest
open
was
sky is
really
surrendered.
in
Charles
getting
slowly
in
lifts
west
the
and west
pen.
probably this winter.
He
But
places
that
it
time,
gently back
pretty
upon the
soon,
table. He does
almost
not weep.
simultaneously, the German
The grief is
counterattack
too profound for
came,
tears.
in the
It is a
Ardennes,
dry, aching emptiness that
which
settles
upset
into the
almost
very marrow
everything
of his
one had
bones.
hoped for.
He closes his eyes for just a moment, listening to the silence that rushes back in to
Hitler
fill
now
the room.
stripped Holland bare.
It is done.
From Rotterdam alone,
Far
in 2
away
days
from the
in
secluded
November
woods of
1944,
Compiègne, that tiny,
50,000
scratching sound of the
able-bodied
pen
men were
rippled
rounded
out
up and
across the
removed to
quiet
Germany.
country, an invisible wave washing over the hills and valleys. In a small, shuttered cafe in
When the
Paris,
doorbell
the
rang, there
owner
were
sat
two
alone in the
Germans.
dark, feeling
They
a
both came
strange,
upstairs.
sudden settling in the air,
One
a
stayed at the
finality
top of
that
the
made his
stairs,
shoulders
and the other one
slump.
came into the room.
On a dusty country
He
road,
turned the
a
room.
weary family resting
The two
beneath
men
a
who were
wagon
there
looked
had
up
to
at the
get dressed
evening
and go with
sky,
them.
not knowing
And we,
why,
being
but
women,
feeling that the great,
crying, of
chaotic
course, both
storm
of
had
us.
finally passed,
One woman with a
leaving
baby
only a
in her
cold,
arms,
heavy
the mother
stillness in
hanging
its
on the
wake.
skirt.
And in a quiet village
And I
in
can
the
still
south,
remember
a
vividly
postman stood
the
before a
one
wooden
German
gate,
who was
holding
inside
a
the
bundle
room.
of undeliverable letters.
He was crying.
He looked down
Tears
at the
were
names,
streaming down
the
his face, and he
addresses,
said,
the small,
"I am
hopeful
so
stamps,
terribly
and he
sorry
knew that the country these
that I'm
letters
not
belonged to
alone.
was gone.
I'd love to be able to
He
help
gently
you, but
placed the
can't do
bundle
anything
into his
'cause
leather
there's someone
satchel,
with me
a
and I don't
silent
know
caretaker of a million paused
He couldn't do it.
conversations. Netherlands.
He'd have tried very
Back in
hard
the
to
sunlit
leave those
clearing,
two
the
men
door of
there
the
because
railway carriage
he thought it was
opens.
terrible.
Charles steps out onto the small iron platform and slowly descends the wooden stairs. The warm summer air greets him, smelling of pine and wild earth.
He really cried.
The sun is beginning to lower, casting long, peaceful shadows across the forest floor. The birds are singing a beautiful, delicate melody in the canopy above.
16,000 Dutch men,
The natural
women, and
world
children
does not mourn the passing of
died of
nations.
cold and hunger.
It simply continues its ancient, gentle rhythm, a soothing reminder that the earth will always endure the follies of men. Charles looks back at the carriage one last time. It sits there in the dappled light, a wooden box holding the darkest echo of his life. He turns away and begins the slow walk down the dirt path, beneath the shade of the great oaks. He is walking into a different world now. It is a world of shadows, of curfews, of closed borders and whispered conversations. The long, dark night of occupation has officially fallen over the land he loves.
modern homes, for
But
automobiles
as he walks,
and for
he
railroads.
feels the letter resting softly in his pocket. He remembers the
Germans
blooming
had
lavender his
inherited a
daughter wrote
tradition
of.
of craftsmanship.
He remembers the
and none could
resilience of the
fabricate
human
better the
spirit,
precision
the quiet
apparatus
strength
and
that allows
delicate
people
tools
to
of
plant
science.
gardens, to share bread, and to hold each other even when the sky is falling. The armistice
German
had signed
research
away the light,
dominated a
but it could
worldwide
not
network
extinguish
of
the
patents
quiet,
and monopolies.
enduring embers burning within the hearts of the
Germany's
millions waiting in
position
the
at the
dark.
crossroads of the continent
Charles walks
was
softly
making
through
her
the
the
ancient
commercial
forest,
center
his
of
head
Europe.
bowed, carrying the heavy sorrow of the carriage with him, but holding fast to the fragile, beautiful hope that beneath the deepest winter snow,
In the early
roots
30s,
are always
the
waiting
capital,
for the
Berlin,
spring.
expressed
There
the
is a
vigor of
strange
a
and quiet
democratic
cruelty in
Germany,
taking a beautiful,
recovering
living
slowly
thing
but
and
steadily
drawing a
from the
heavy,
First
dark
World War.
line right across its heart. For centuries,
People lived
the
the
land
neat
had
and
been a
ordered
seamless,
life for which
flowing
Germans had
tapestry.
always been renowned.
The winding country roads bled gently into the cobblestone streets of the villages, the rivers meandered freely through the deep valleys, and the rolling fields
Some
of wheat
enjoyed
stretched
great riches.
endlessly toward the horizon,
And though there was
unbroken
serious
and
poverty,
untamed.
especially
The
as the
people who
Depression
lived
came
upon
on,
this soil were
the
connected
needs
by
of
a
the
million
frugal
invisible
poor were
threads,
somehow
by shared
satisfied.
Sunday dinners, by marriages that
casual
linked neighboring
tourists,
towns,
German
and by the
nights
simple,
seemed filled
comforting
with
rhythm
music
of traveling
and good
back
beer.
and forth without a second thought. But then, the world broke, and the map was pulled taut beneath the heavy hands of strangers. With the scratching of a pen, a new border was carved into the earth.
But in the back
It
streets
was not a
during the
border
early
created
30s,
by nature.
plain citizens
It was
were
not a
still
mountain
haunted
range or
by
a
the
vast
aftermath
ocean.
of 1918.
It was a line born
Almost
of paper
everyone
and
had a
ink,
plan
an
for better
artificial,
days.
jagged scar that
general
slashed its way
restlessness
across
often
the
flared
entire
up.
country, splitting a beloved
But the
homeland into
indulgent
two
republic
separate,
was
silenced
content
worlds.
to let things ride.
In the grand halls where these decisions were made, it
Increasingly
was simply a
appeared the
matter of
brown shirts
geography
of a
and
movement masquerading
administration.
as a political party.
But out in the
which
countryside,
in the name of
in the quiet
discipline
valleys
promoted
and the ancient,
fascism.
sleepy towns, this
To
invisible
all
line
comers,
fell
the
like a
aspiring
heavy iron
leader
curtain upon the gentle
proclaimed that
lives
the
of
last war
ordinary
had
people.
been lost by treachery at home.
Imagine a small,
That to win the
centuries-old
coming
village
war,
nestled perfectly
the
in a
German
green
worker
valley.
must be as strong as the
A
soldier.
narrow, sparkling
Those
river
who
runs
disagreed
right through
must
its
be made
center,
to conform.
spanned by a beautifully
Most
arched
did
stone
not
bridge.
agree.
For generations, this bridge was the beating heart of the town. Children ran across it laughing on their way to
But the
school.
Nazis bulled their way
The
through.
baker on the north bank
In
carried his
1934,
warm,
Adolf
crusty
Hitler
loaves
named
across it
himself
every morning to
absolute
the
leader of
grocer
the
on the
German
south
Reich.
bank. Young lovers met in the twilight, leaning
Immediately,
against the cool
German
stone
industry began
parapets
to
to watch
shift
the
from
water
peace
flow
to
beneath
war.
the moon.
One by one,
Now,
in secret,
imagine
factories were
waking up
retooled.
one morning to find a wooden barrier dragged
Workers
across
whose
the very
unions had been
center of that
destroyed
bridge.
found themselves
Imagine the
drafted into
sudden,
making weapons
breathtaking
for
shock
the
of a
army
guard in an
Hitler's
unfamiliar
Germany.
uniform standing where the children used to play.
In
The
1936,
town has
their
been
hard
cut
work
exactly
bore
in
first
half.
fruit when the
The
reconditioned
North
army
Bank
moved
belongs
into
to
the
the
Rhineland.
occupied,
No
and the South
opposition
Bank
came
belongs
from
to
a
the
world
strange,
too anxious
uncertain
for
quiet
peace.
of the free.
Then
The
Hitler
baker steps
brazenly
out of his
occupied
shop,
his weak
the smell
neighbors
of fresh
one by
yeast
one.
clinging to his
In
apron.
triumph, he rode into
He
Vienna.
looks across the bridge, only 50 yards away, and sees his own daughter standing on the opposite bank.
Back home, before the
She
workers
lives
who
just
had
down the
built
street
it,
on the other
and
side.
before alarmed observers from the
Yesterday,
outside
he
world,
could have walked over
the
and kissed
Führer
her
paraded
cheek.
his war machine.
Today, a vast, uncrossable chasm has opened up between them. They stand there in the
Startling
morning
indeed
light,
was the
separated
strength of
by
the
a
Air
few
Force,
yards of stone
which had
and a world
strained the
of
German
sorrow.
worker so that the
They cannot
Nazis
shout
could
to one
blackmail
another.
Europe.
They cannot cross. The baker simply raises a flour-dusted hand,
Using
a
the
slow,
threat of war
aching
as a
gesture
trump
of love,
card,
and his
the
daughter
Axis
presses her
partners
hand to her
ganged
heart
up on
in
the
return.
democracies and
It
dismembered
is a quiet,
Czechoslovakia.
devastating pantomime.
After
The
Munich,
bridge, built to
many
bring them
circuses
together,
spread
has become
before
the
the
very
German
thing
worker
that
the
keeps them
glory of his
apart.
handiwork.
This profound, sudden isolation swept across the countryside like a silent frost. Roads that had been
By
traveled for
following
hundreds
his
of
leader,
years
by
were suddenly
training
dead
for work
ends,
just as a
blocked by
soldier
coils
trains
of
for
sharp,
battle,
rusted
the
barbed
worker
wire
had become
and
in
wooden
6
sentry
years
posts.
the most important little man in
Farms
Europe.
were cut in two, leaving a
Those who
farmer
had
to stare
wavered could no longer
helplessly as his
dispute
own
the
apple
Führer's
orchard
policies,
withered on the wrong
for
side of
he
the
had
fence,
almost
the
doubled
ripe
the
fruit
size of the
dropping
rice.
quietly into the grass, unpicked and abandoned. But the deepest pain of this new division was not the loss of the land. It was the sudden, suffocating loss of the
Nazi
voices.
arrogance goose-stepped
When the
into
line
war.
was drawn, the invisible threads of communication were severed.
None was more
The
amazed than the
Postal
German
Service,
worker.
that simple,
When his Panzer
beautiful miracle
divisions
that allows
erased
us to send a
Poland in
piece of our
18
heart
days.
across the miles, was
None was
abruptly
more
stopped.
proud than he.
A
When
deep,
shifting to
terrible
the west,
silence fell over the separated
Blitzkrieg cut through
families.
the Low Countries and over
In a
France,
world before the
with
instant
the
connection
precision
of the
of a
modern age,
well-practiced
a letter
maneuver.
was a lifeline. It was proof of life. To be deprived of it was to be cast adrift
Paratroopers
in an
along the
ocean of
roads
dark
they had just
uncertainty.
captured greeted German
Picture
soldiers
a woman
racing
named
to
Elaine,
Dunkirk
sitting
on the
at her
Channel
small
coast.
kitchen table late
With a
at
gay
night.
tune, we
The
sail
house is
against
perfectly,
England.
painfully still. A single candle burns in a brass holder, casting a soft, flickering
Berlin rang
glow
with the
over a
same
piece
song,
of blank white paper.
For only a tiny island
Her son,
stood
her
between
only
the
child,
Hitler-crazed
had been
people
sent to stay
and
with
their
his
most
aunt in the north
extravagant
just
dreams.
before the summer arrived. He is only 10 years old. She does not know if he is safe.
At last, the
She
Luftwaffe
does
was
not
to have
know
its
if he has
day.
enough to eat, or if he is frightened by the
But the
strange
small
brutes marching
RAF
through his
stubbornly
aunt's
held
village.
its fragment of sky.
The not knowing is a
proved that
physical
an
weight,
assault on
a stone
Britain would
resting
be more
heavily
than a
upon her
sideshow.
chest. She
To
picks
get
up her
minerals,
pen,
food,
the
and
nib
oil for
hovering
his
over the
conquest
paper.
of England, Hitler
She
turned
writes
east.
a letter she knows she
His
cannot
war
mail.
machine hammered at the heart of
She
Russia.
pours every ounce of her protective, fierce love onto
So
the page.
imminent seemed victory
She tells
that
him to be
Japan
brave,
rushed into
to
the
be
Axis
kind,
game,
and to
at
remember to
Pearl
wear his
Harbor
heavy
brought
sweater
the
when
United
the evenings
States into
grow
the
cold.
war. German
She tells
workers
him that
launched
she
better
looks
than
at
a
the moon
submarine
every
a day,
night, and that
in
she
a
hopes
race
he
to
is
keep
looking at it
American
too,
products
so
from
that their
taking
eyes might
effect
meet
on the
somewhere up
battle
in the
line.
stars. When she is finished, she folds the paper into a small, tight
When a
square.
skipper spotted a convoy,
She walks to the cupboard,
he
takes
radioed
down
its
a beautifully
position to
painted tin
headquarters in
box,
Germany.
and places the letter inside. The box is already half full of
Other
folded
submarines
squares.
were ordered into the attack
It
area
is a
to form a
quiet,
wolf
hidden
pack.
archive of a mother's longing.
The packs
Every
operated
letter is a
by
prayer
secret
sent into the
tactics
dark,
shown
waiting
in
for the
this
day when the
diagram.
line will be erased and the words can finally fly free. Yet, human beings are not built to endure such profound silence. We are creatures of connection. Where a barrier is erected, the human heart will always seek a crack in the stone. And
They
so,
took so heavy
along
a
the miles
toll
of barbed
that
wire
allied
and guarded
shipping lanes
rivers,
were
a
almost
new,
severed.
desperate kind of language was
Every
born.
German boy dreamt
In the
of
open country,
becoming a
where the
submarine
invisible
hero.
line ran through the deep forests and the sprawling vineyards, neighbors found ways to
But
reach
Nazi
each other.
submarines ran afoul
Two
of the
farmers
American
whose
Navy,
lands bordered
the
the new
nation of
frontier
workers
would
behind
walk
them.
out to their fields at the exact same
And
hour
gradually
every
these
evening.
two, together with the other
They
United
could not
Nations,
speak, for the
forced
guards
the
were
Nazis
always
to give
watching,
way.
pacing slowly along the wire. But they did not need words. The older farmer, standing on the occupied soil, would simply take off his battered felt hat and slowly wipe his brow. It was a prearranged, silent code.
defeat in the
meant
Atlantic opened the
we are
sea
well.
lanes to convoys.
The
And
children are
brought the
safe.
German worker to grips
We
at
have
last
enough
with
bread
his
for the
ultimate
week.
opponent.
The
American
farmer on the other
industrial
side would
capacity
respond by resting
and
his
the
hands
American
heavily
worker.
on the wooden handle of his hoe and nodding his head once, a gesture that
A
whispered,
flood of
"Hold
steel
on."
across the Atlantic
I am
hardened the
here.
many battlefronts on which the
We are not
Wehrmacht is now at
forgetting
bay.
you. It was a beautiful,
They
heartbreaking
must hold
dance of
back the
tiny
advancing
gestures.
Russian army.
A white
In
sheet
Italy,
hung
they must
carefully
fight
on a
desperate
clothesline
delaying
in a
actions to
specific
stave
corner
off
of a
further
yard
retreat
meant a
to the
baby
homeland.
had been born safely. A single
Himmler,
candle
many
placed in a
special
darkened
divisions must
window
be
at
trained as
midnight meant a
hangmen
loved one
for the
had
rebellious
returned.
people of the continent.
They spoke in the language of shadows and symbols,
The
their
Luftwaffe
quiet
locked in
resilience
deadly
weaving a
combat with
delicate,
air forces flying
invisible
from
web of
England
love right
to lay
beneath
waste
the
the
unseeing
plants
eyes
and
of the
factories
guards.
of Germany.
But sometimes, gestures were not enough.
And while heavily
Sometimes, the
engaged
need to
on all
hold a
fronts,
piece of paper,
they must
to trace
gird
the
themselves
familiar
to
loops
meet
of a
allied
loved one's
amphibious
handwriting,
invasion.
was too powerful to be
Today, as the
denied.
Reich faces the war's
This
sixth
is where the
year,
quietest,
no
most
longer can its
extraordinary
people
acts of
enjoy the
everyday
illusion of
heroism
world
took
mastery.
place.
But the Nazis are
There were
nonetheless
those who knew the
confident
land better than
because
any
Germany
mapmaker.
is still one of the greatest
They were the
industrial
ordinary
powers the
people of the
world has ever
borderlands,
seen.
the woodcutters, the poachers, the young shepherds who knew every hidden ravine, every shallow crossing of the stream, and every dense,
In answer to
tangled
military
path through the
setbacks,
ancient forests.
War industry speeds
They
production.
became the whisperers in the dark.
In factories near Leipzig,
They became
on
the
assembly
thread that
lines
sewed
like
the
those in
broken halves
America,
of the country together.
German workers double the armor
Imagine
on
a young
Tiger
boy,
tanks for
no
the
more
Eastern
than
Front.
16, standing at the edge of
Even
the
now,
woods in
new
the dead of
diesel
night.
engines are being developed for
He wears
super
dark
bombers like the
clothing,
Junkers
his face
86P,
smudged with soot to hide
with
the
its
pale
9-mile
reflection of the
ceiling.
moonlight. His canvas rucksack is not
But
filled
such
with food
large-scale
or
production
weapons.
is using up Germany's
It is
manpower
filled with
reserves,
hundreds of small,
already
folded
drained away by the
envelopes.
Reichswehr's greed for
He
cannon
takes a
fodder.
slow, calming breath, listening to the wind
With
sighing through
Nazi
the pine
pomp, they
trees.
memorialize their hero dead.
He steps into the
who
shadow
by the
of the
million
forest.
have given their lives for
He
Germany,
moves with a breathtaking,
bound all
fluid
Germans in a
silence,
blood
a ghost
brotherhood of
slipping through
revenge.
his own homeland. He knows exactly where the patrols walk.
The bereaved
He
woman
knows
is
how to
taken
cross
from
the shallow
child breeding
creek
in
by
the
stepping
home
only on the
to dedicate
moss-covered
herself to
stones,
the fatherland
leaving
and
no
other
footprints
forms
in the
of
mud.
production.
He risks
And
absolutely
Nazi
everything.
children are made to do their
He
bit
risks his freedom,
until at
his
16
safety,
they
his
are
very
old enough
life,
for the
not
armies.
for glory, but simply so that an old man can read a letter from his wife. He is a courier of the human soul. When he finally
Today,
slips
German
beneath
leaders
the
pound
rusted
upon the
wire,
factories,
his
raw
heart pounding a
materials, and
frantic rhythm in
manpower
his
of the
chest,
conquered
he
countries
vanishes into
to
the
offset
quiet
any
streets of a
pinch in their
village on
own
the other
productive
side.
capacity.
He leaves the envelopes
More
hidden
than half
beneath a
the
loose
German
brick
labor
behind
force
the
are
bakery,
captives
or tucked
who must
quietly
work
into
or
the hollow
starve.
knot of an old oak tree, before
Czechs and the
disappearing
great
back into
Skoda
the
works
safety of the
imported
dark
Baltic
woods.
miners in the mines of the
The next
Saar
morning,
Basin.
when Elaine goes to
All
the bakery
sweat
to buy
for
her
Nazi
small
Germany.
ration of bread, the baker leans across the counter.
Shiploads
not
of skilled
speak.
workers are delivered by
He simply
Norway's
slips a
Quisling and other
small,
Nazi
crumpled
puppets
envelope into
to
the
release
folds of
young
her
Germans
apron
for the
beneath the
armies.
warm loaf. Elaine walks home as fast as her legs can carry her.
from Poland and from
She locks
betrayed
her front
Italy and
door.
Hungary have
She
been
sits at
driven
her kitchen
thousands of
table,
slaves
her
for
hands
the
trembling
roads
so
of the Reich.
violently she can barely tear the paper.
French prisoners
She
broken by
unfolds
4
the letter.
years of captivity
It is written
are
in the
thrown
messy,
back to their
hurried scrawl of a
families
10-year-old
in exchange
boy.
for able-bodied countrymen
Mama, it
condemned
reads,
to servitude in their stead.
I am safe. Auntie is kind.
To Germany's
the
own
smell of your
stockpiles
kitchen.
has been added the booty of a
I look at the
continent.
moon every night, just like you told me before I
The
left.
equipment of entire armies,
I
such
promise
as the
I am
once
wearing
proud
my
army
sweater.
of France, thought
Elaine
sufficient in
presses the
itself
paper
to hold
against
the
her
Nazis in
face.
check.
She breathes in the scent
These
of the ink,
salvaged war
mixing with the
machines are
faint,
now at work
earthy
against
smell
the
of the
United
forest
Nations.
that carried it to
With
her.
such strength at hand,
The tears that
the
fall
Germans
from
do
her
not
eyes
for a
are no
moment
longer
think of
tears of
themselves as
terrifying
beaten.
uncertainty. They
Yet
are
Germany
tears of
today
profound,
is not the
overwhelming
Germany
relief.
that set out to conquer the
In
world.
that tiny, quiet kitchen, the
They have
heavy
been
iron
compelled
line
to
drawn
shift their
across the
plans.
earth simply ceases to
Around
exist.
themselves they have built the
Her
fortress
son
Europe,
is with her
and within
again.
the security of its walls
thread
they
has
prepare
held.
to make their boldest stand.
This is the timeless truth of the
The
human
ramparts
spirit.
are studded with huge
You
guns.
can draw a line upon
Among
a
them
map.
not a few from the
You
fabulous
can string
Maginot
miles of
Line.
twisted wire
And
across
deep
the
into
beautiful,
interior,
rolling hills.
engineers have built supporting
You can place
chains of
guards upon the
fortifications.
bridges and demand silence from the valleys. But the earth
Transported
itself
from
does
the
not
bombed
care for
areas,
borders.
Vital industries have
The
been
roots of the
solely
ancient oak
designed in
trees
groups
continue
called
to grow deep
complexes
beneath the wire,
that severe bombing may
intertwining in the dark
diminish but will
soil.
not halt production.
The sparrows fly freely from the north bank of the river to the
German
south,
worker
their
now
wings
concentrates
unburdened
on
by the
weapons
heavy
of
laws
defense,
of men.
such as the new
The gentle
Focke-Wulf
rain falls
fighter.
equally upon the occupied
And
and the
also to
free,
protect Germany,
washing the dust from
he
the
builds
cobblestones
searchlights
on
and
both
anti-aircraft
sides of the
guns
divide.
like the Flak 36,
And like the
which
roots,
throws
like
a
the
curtain of
birds,
shells
and like the
7
rain,
miles high.
love cannot be contained.
At the
It seeps beneath the
Rheinmetall
fences.
16-inch,
It travels on the
50-foot
quiet nods
rifles
of
for the
old
Fortress
farmers.
Europe are being assembled.
It is carried in the dark by the brave, silent footsteps of the young. As the night deepens
Submarines
over the
are still
divided
being
country,
completed at
a profound
Stettin on
and
the
soothing
Baltic
quiet
to lie
settles
in
over the
wait for the
land.
invading armies outside
The
Fortress
invisible
Europe.
border fades into the shadows,
Once again, the
swallowed
Nazis play
completely by the
upon German
vast,
industry as an
starry
instrument
sky.
to fit their plans.
On both sides
And
of the
German
line,
industry
people are lying
responds.
down to rest. They are pulling their warm blankets up to their chins.
The life of every German worker
They are
is
closing
regimented
their
by a
eyes
master
and sending
plan
their
more
whispered
strict than
messages
ever.
of love out
No
into
matter
the
who
dark,
else in Europe
trusting that
starves, he
somehow
will eat.
the wind will
But
carry
what he
them
eats is
exactly
measured
where
by
they
what he
need to go.
produces.
They drift into a gentle sleep, cradled
This
by the
plan
comforting,
follows him
unbreakable
home,
knowledge
where there
that
is
while a
use even
homeland
for
may
the
be
garbage
carved
from
in
his
two,
one-dish
a
meal.
heart can never be divided.
His
There
clothes,
is a
though still
profound kind
neat,
of magic
are
hidden
wearing
in the
thin
crackle
and
of
keeping
invisible
presentable
waves
is a
traveling
problem
through
for
the
every
dark.
German.
When a country is quieted
For
by
his
force,
moment of
the
strutting,
silence
the little
does
man
not just
pays
settle in
dearly
the
as the
streets.
war comes
It
home.
seeps through the cracks
Yet he
in the
shows no
walls and
signs of
pools in the
panic.
corners of every
But
room.
lest his faith waver,
By the time the summer
Gestapo
faded and the
exhibits
early
the
autumn
dire
winds
things
began
that may
to strip the
befall
leaves
him.
from the chestnut trees, a heavy, suffocating isolation had
young
wrapped
as well
itself
as old
around the
can find
people.
outlet for war nerves
The borders
by
were
tormenting the
sealed.
people the Nazis have
The
banished.
postal trains no longer carried letters
They are
across the
inspired
invisible
by their
lines
top
drawn
ace,
in the earth.
Hauptmann Novotny.
The local
thanks them for
newspapers,
the equipment
once
with
filled
which
with
his fighter
loud,
group
vibrant
is
debates
said to
and
have
the
brought
chaotic
down over
poetry of a
300
free
British and
society,
American
now
planes.
printed only what they were told. To live
That's
in
a
that
red letter
time was to
day when
feel as though
Hermann
you had
Goering
been placed
himself
inside
drops
a
in on a
tightly
busy
sealed
war
jar, watching the rest of the world carry on through thick, distorted glass, unable to hear its voice.
But often,
But there was
very
one
often
thing that
now,
could not be stopped
the
by
air
wooden
raid alert
barricades,
reminds the
or
workers
iron wire,
that there
or
is a
guards
weakness
pacing
in
the
their
borders
Nazi
in the night.
paradise. Bombs
The air
leak through
above the
roof.
rooftops remained
They
entirely
take to the
free,
shelters.
and drifting through that open, star-filled sky were the delicate, invisible ripples of the night wind. In the corner of millions of dimly lit living rooms, sitting quietly upon polished wooden sideboards and laced doilies, were the radios. Before the world turned upside down, these heavy wooden cabinets had been the heart of the home. There were cheerful companions, humming with the sound of Parisian jazz, the bright laughter of comedy hours, and the comforting, mundane weather reports. Now, they had become something infinitely more precious and terribly dangerous.
Every day a
They
German
had become
factory
the
town
only
is
remaining
pounded
window
rubble.
to a world that was still breathing
But
freely.
12 Spartan years have
The act of
purposefully
turning on the
hardened them
radio
to
became a
withstand such
deeply sacred,
ordeals
deeply
without a
secretive
crack-up this
evening
time
ritual.
on the home front.
Imagine an older couple,
The bodies of
Henri and
American
Mathilde,
boys who will
in their
not fly
small,
again
stone cottage on
gratify
the
them
edge of a
less than the
provincial
mounting
town.
graveyards of fortresses in
Outside,
Wellington.
the evening curfew has fallen. The streets are entirely empty, bathed only in the pale light of the
Their
moon.
deliberate plan regards no
Inside,
sacrifice
the
of
cottage
the
is
loss
dark.
if in return it exacts
Mathilde
a high
moves
enough
quietly
price from
through the
enemy.
parlor, ensuring the heavy
same
velvet
plan
curtains are
governs
drawn
every phase
completely
of their
tight
fight
across the
today.
windows.
Even in retreat, they
She
are
takes
not
a
a
thick
beaten
wool
foe.
blanket from the back
They
of an
blast
armchair
roads and
and
bridges
pins
in
it
an
over the
orgy of
curtain rod,
destruction.
ensuring
They
not a
lay
single
minefields
sliver
in
of
the
light
path
can
of their
escape into the
pursuers.
street, and not a single whisper of sound can reach the pavement
They
outside.
drive every living thing
Henri
before them
stands
into their
before the
fortress,
radio.
leaving a
He
blasted
places his
wasteland
hand
that
on the
Allied armies
smooth,
can cross
curved wood
only
of the
slowly,
cabinet, feeling a
paying
quiet
a fearful
reverence.
toll for every yard.
He turns the small,
That
bakelite
first day,
dial until he hears the soft,
losses were heavy.
satisfying click of the power switching on. In the dark room, the radio slowly comes to life. Deep
But while
behind the
Allied
fabric
air
speaker
chiefs were
grill,
counting
a
their
row of
losses,
glass vacuum
the
tubes
Panzers
begins to
had just
warm
about
up, casting a
penetrated
faint,
the
beautiful
impenetrable
amber glow
Ardennes
into the
and
room.
were set to fall upon
It
the
looks
weak
like a
French
tiny,
garrisons along the
captured
Meuse
hearth
here at
fire,
Sedan.
glowing with the promise of warmth. They do not
The
sit in their
Panzers reached
armchairs.
Sedan late on the third
They
day
pull
of the
two wooden
offensive,
dining
although
chairs
Gamelin
close
had
to the
calculated
cabinet,
they couldn't
sitting
possibly
so
be
near
here
that their
before the
knees
ninth
nearly
day.
touch the wood. Mathilde reaches out and takes Henri's hand. They hold their breath. Henri reaches for the tuning dial. He turns
All
it
the
with
bridges over the
agonizing
Meuse
slowness,
were blown
his
up by the
fingers
French on
moving
May
with
the
the
12th.
delicate precision of a man picking a
except
fragile
one.
lock. At first,
This old weir,
there is
some
only the
40 miles
vast,
north of
echoing
Sedan,
emptiness
had
of the
been left for fear
airwaves.
of lowering the water level
It is
so
the
much
sound like the
that
rushing
the
of a
river could be
distant
forded.
ocean, a deep, hissing
The French
static that
also
fills
left
the
it
room with a
relatively
sense of
unguarded.
immense, lonely space.
As one Panzer commander,
As he turns the
Erwin
dial,
Rommel
strange noises rise and
found
fall. There are high-pitched whistles, the deep throbbing hum of foreign stations they cannot understand, and the sudden, harsh crackle of interference, like dry branches snapping in a fire. They are fishing in the
Next
dark,
morning, the
casting a
Luftwaffe's
line out
resources
across the
were
English
hurled
Channel,
into action
hoping
above
to
Sedan.
catch a single, familiar voice drifting over the water. And then, suddenly, beneath the
Gamelin
heavy
still
blanket of
refused
the
to believe
static,
the
they
Germans could
hear.
mount a full-scale crossing
It is
of the Meuse
incredibly
before
faint,
another 3 or 4
rising and
days.
falling with the atmospheric tide, washing in and out like a ship lost in the fog.
Hitler was unwilling
Henri's
to wait
hand
very
freezes
long.
on the dial.
He was working to the
He holds
timetable
it
of
perfectly
1940,
still,
not
terrified that
1914.
even the slight tremble of his
What's more,
fingers
the
might
French
lose the
generals
signal.
still had their eyes firmly
Mathilde
fixed
leans
on what was
forward,
happening
closing
in
her
Belgium and
eyes,
Holland.
pressing her ear as close to the woven fabric of the speaker as she dares. Through the hissing, popping interference, a voice emerges.
There were
It
big
is a voice
French
speaking
guns on
their
the west bank
language.
of the Meuse, but they limited
It is
their
speaking
firing
from a
for fear of
small,
running out of
crowded
ammunition
studio in
before the battle
London,
proper
carried
began.
across the churning, gray waters of the
So the
Channel,
German
through the
Panzers were able to
clouds,
pick off
over
the
the
French
occupied
pillboxes one
beaches,
by one.
and straight into their shadowed
Soon,
parlor.
thousands
I
of
see
French
Islanders,
gunners
the voice says
taking to their
softly,
heels.
fighting through the crackle. Here is London. London. To hear those words was to experience a profound, breathtaking release. It was the feeling of a heavy stone being lifted from the chest.
As suddenly as it
They were not
started,
forgotten.
the German
The world had
bombardment
not moved
stopped,
on and left them behind in the dark.
as though still performing
Across
one
the
of their
water,
winter war
in a city
games,
they had never
the
seen,
German
someone was
infantrymen
sitting in
prepared
front
to
of a
cross the
microphone,
Meuse.
speaking directly to them. The voice on the radio did not need to shout. It spoke in a calm, steady rhythm. It spoke of endurance. It spoke of the quiet strength of the human spirit. It reminded them of their own history, of the long, beautiful legacy of their culture that could never be erased by a temporary shadow. It was a voice that said, "We know you are listening. We know you are waiting."
By midnight
Hold on
on May
just a
the
little
13th,
longer.
still only day
In that
4
tiny,
of the offensive,
amber-lit room,
not
Henri
only were
and
German
Mathilde felt the
infantrymen across
overwhelming
the
comfort
Meuse
of
in force,
connection.
but German
The
sappers
suffocating
were bridging
walls
the
of their
river and
isolation
making ready
simply
for the
dissolved
panzers
into
to
the
cross.
static. They were no longer just two elderly people hiding in the dark. They were part of a vast,
That night of May the
invisible
13th,
congregation.
The British expeditionary
All across the
force, far
country,
to the north in
millions of
Belgium,
other souls were sitting
had
in
still
that
not
exact
seen
same
serious
posture.
fighting.
In a cramped,
Yet the battle
freezing
was
attic
now
apartment in
virtually
Paris,
decided.
a young student sits on her floor, a heavy wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She lives alone, her family miles away across the severed border. Her radio is tiny, a cheap, tinny thing, and she has the volume turned down so low it is merely a vibration against her skin. She rests her cheek against the cold metal casing, her eyes closed, letting the distant voice wash over her. It is the only conversation she has had all day. It is a lifeline thrown to a drowning swimmer. As the voice crackles through the dark, she feels a hot tear slip down her cheek, a tear of pure, profound relief. In a barn deep in the countryside, 3 farmers huddled around a battery-powered set hidden beneath a pile of hay. The smell of the damp earth and the sweet hay mixes with the faint scent of battery acid. They pass a single, battered tin cup of watered down wine between them, their weathered, sun-baked faces illuminated by the faint glow of the dial.
And seldom pressed home
When the
with any
familiar
persistence.
opening notes of the broadcast begin to play, they share a quiet, knowing look. They nod to one another. It is a silent reaffirmation of their brotherhood, a shared promise that the soil beneath their boots still belongs to them, no matter whose
Tank for
flag
tank,
flies
the
over the
French were
village
the match of
square.
the Germans.
The
But
broadcasts
the
were
Panzers
not
always
just
fought
news.
en masse, and what's
They
more,
were filled with
the French
strange,
tanks were
surreal
prone to
poetry.
mechanical trouble.
To
Time
bypass
after
the
time,
listening
they had to be
ears
left
of the
behind
censors
on
and the
battlefield.
patrols, the voices from London would read out cryptic, personal messages. They were nonsensical phrases to anyone who did not know the secret, but to the people listening in the dark, they were a beautiful, mysterious symphony. The moon is full of green cheese. The radio would crackle.
The massed German
The autumn
infantry
leaves are
divisions
falling
were now
slowly.
catching up with the Panzers at the
The
Meuse
baker has
crossing
lost his
point.
hat.
Everything on the
Marie's
German
garden
side
is
at
blooming.
least was going
To Henri
according
and
to plan.
Mathilde, these strange, poetic lines sounded like a beautiful lullaby. They did not need to know the hidden tactical meanings behind the words. They only needed to hear the gentle, familiar cadence of their own language being spoken freely. It was proof
But
that
the
their
Allied Air
culture,
Forces,
their
after
humor,
their almost
and their
total
art were still
inactivity on May the
alive,
13th,
dancing playfully
May the
through the
14th was
airwaves,
hectic.
out of reach of the heavy
British
boots on
and
the
French
ground.
bombers raided the pontoon
Listening
bridges
to the
across
radio
Meuse
was an
with
act of
reckless
profound,
abandon.
quiet rebellion. It was a rebellion of the mind.
Too late,
By
the
simply
French
turning the
generals had
dial and
recognized
choosing
this
to listen
sector's
to the
vital
distant
importance.
truth, they were refusing to
Despite
surrender
the
their
courage
inner
of the
world.
Allied pilots.
They were keeping the
result was
sanctuary of
disastrous.
their own thoughts entirely free. When the broadcast finally ended, usually fading away into a swell of triumphant, melancholy
Nearly half
music,
the
the
Allied
static
planes
would
did
rush
not
back in
return.
to fill the empty space.
In the words of the official RAF
Henri would
history,
reach out and turn the
no
dial with a
higher
soft
rate of
click.
loss has ever been
The
experienced
amber glow
by
of the
Royal
vacuum
Air
tubes
Force.
would slowly dim, the warm light fading
After
back
May
into
the
the dark,
14th,
leaving the room
the skies
illuminated only by the
were
faint moonlight
undeniably
leaking
German.
around the edges of the heavy blanket. The silence
that
would
day,
return
too,
to the cottage, but it was a
Holland
different kind of
surrendered.
silence now. It
Nothing
was no
short
longer
of a
the
miracle
heavy, suffocating
could
silence of
save
isolation.
France now.
It was a comfortable, settling quiet. The air in the room felt warmer. The distance
With the
between
bridgehead
them and the
secure,
rest of the world had been
Panzers were
bridged,
poised
if
to
only
break
for
out.
15 minutes, and
The
that
battle for
connection
Sedan
left a
was now
lingering,
giving way to the battle
invisible
for France.
warmth in its wake. Mathilde
The most
would reach
crucial
up and
phase of the
gently
whole
take the
German
pins out of the
plan was
blanket,
about to begin.
folding it back over the
The swing
armchair.
north to the coast
She would
that
pull
would
the
trap
heavy
Allied
velvet
armies
curtains
in
open
Belgium.
just a fraction, letting the pale silver
Soon
light
as
of the
news of
moon
the
wash
Sedan
across the
defeat
wooden
reached
floorboards. She
Panic
would look
set
out at
in.
the empty, shadowed street, feeling a renewed sense of quiet strength blooming in her chest. They would walk to their bedroom, their footsteps soft against
Those
the
who
rugs.
could left.
They would climb into their bed, pulling the thick, down comforters up to their chins. As they drifted off to sleep, the wind
French
would
High
rattle
Command,
softly
not
against
yet
the window
privy to the
panes,
German
moving
plan,
through the
assumed
eaves of the
Hitler intended
cottage
to
and out
capture
across
Paris
the open
immediately.
fields.
To protect
They
the
did not
capital,
fear the night wind
troops
anymore.
were pulled back from
They
elsewhere
knew
along
what
the
it
Meuse,
carried.
which
They
only
knew that
served
riding
to
upon
widen the
those
German
invisible
bridge.
currents, high above the sleeping, fractured world, were the faint, crackling sparks of hope. And as long as those sparks continued to fly across the dark, finding their way into the
Gamelin
quiet
refused
living
to
rooms
believe
of the
his
waiting
tactics
millions,
were at fault
the
and
people
assumed
knew
he
that
must
their
have been
hearts would
betrayed.
remain warm, and their
While
spirits would
gendarmes
never
searched
truly
for
be
fit
broken.
columnists behind the lines,
The deepest darkness
Gamelin
does not
reacted
fall from
by
the sky.
sacking 20
It
or
seeps
so
into
of
the
his front
spaces
line
where the light
commanders,
has simply grown
almost
too
at
tired
random.
to shine. But the human spirit is a remarkably stubborn flame. When the grand chandeliers
Allied
of a
troops
nation
were
are
ordered
shattered
back from
and the
Belgium.
street lamps are extinguished
And
by
on
the
May
heavy
the
hand of
17th,
curfew, the light
Brussels
does
fell.
not truly vanish. It simply moves underground. It retreats into the quiet, hidden spaces,
It was
into the
also the
cellars
end
and
for
the
Gamelin.
closed kitchens, waiting for
He was
hands
replaced
gentle
as
enough to cup
commander-in-chief
it and keep
by
it
General
safe from the
Weygand,
wind.
recalled from vertical
In the early,
retirement.
disorienting
France
days
had
of the
become
occupation,
desperate.
there were no
A
grand armies
73-year-old
marching
was
to the
replacing a
rescue,
68-year-old.
no sweeping moments of
And
cinematic
Weygand
defiance.
spent the last year in Syria.
The
and
world
was out
had
of
settled
touch.
into a cold, heavy frost.
At this time, too,
The new
Marshal
rules were pasted
Pétain,
on the
now
brick walls
84,
of the town
became deputy
squares,
prime minister.
printed in sharp,
Before leaving
unfamiliar
Spain, had he
ink that
been
demanded
France's
absolute
ambassador, Pétain
obedience.
told General Franco, "My
The air in
country
the streets
has
was
been
thick with
beaten.
silence, a
This
heavy
is the
blanket
work
woven from
of
fear
30
and the
years of
sudden,
Marxism."
aching absence of freedom.
He was
To the
completely
soldiers
outside
patrolling the
treaties.
cobblestones, the
He was a
towns and
very,
villages
very old
appeared
man,
perfectly subdued.
and he'd been
They saw shuttered
recalled
windows and
in the
bowed
hopes
heads.
that his name
They saw
would
people who had
bolster
folded
French
their
morale.
hands and accepted
They
the
did
winter.
nothing of the sort.
But they did not know how to look
Trying
beneath
in
the
their own
surface of
way
the
to
snow.
contain the German breakout.
They did not understand
The
that
French
beneath that
generals
heavy,
drew
suffocating
halt lines
blanket,
on their
a
maps,
tiny, almost
only to hear the
imperceptible
panzers have
warmth was
passed them,
beginning to stir.
even before the orders had been
It was
issued.
not the roaring fire of a sudden rebellion. It was the soft, golden glow of everyday resistance. True courage is rarely
The
loud.
dash to the coast.
Most
the German
often, it
commanders
is a
were
quiet,
always one
everyday
jump
choice
ahead
to
of the
simply remain human in a world that is asking you to become a machine. Imagine an old bakery nestled in the narrow, winding streets of a provincial town. The morning is still entirely dark, the sun hours away from breaching the horizon.
Hordes of prisoners.
The air
fell into
inside the
German
shop
hands.
is thick with the comforting,
Many
timeless scent of
columns,
toasted
10
flour,
and sometimes
warm
20,000
yeast,
strong,
and sweet
simply
wood
threw away
smoke.
their weapons and marched.
The baker is
without
an
being
older
told.
man, his shoulders
officers
rounded
of their
from
head
decades of bending over
toward
the
the
heavy
German
wooden
line.
kneading trough. His hands are
The
dusted
French
permanently white,
troops
his fingers
did not
thick and
prove
scarred from the
the
heat of the
same
ovens.
soldierly discipline
Under the new laws,
as in
his
the
life has
First
become a
World War.
rigid ledger of numbers and weights. Every sack of flour is counted. Every gram of yeast is strictly rationed. He is told exactly how many loaves to bake for the occupying garrison, and exactly how little is left to be divided among the hungry families of his own neighborhood. He stands at his wooden
Maginot
table,
spirit
his hands
and
sinking deeply
the
into the
long
warm,
formidable,
elastic dough.
so that the French
The rhythm of the
soldiers
kneading is a prayer he knows by
that
heart.
they will have no more
Push,
war.
fold, turn. Push,
It wasn't just
fold,
ordinary troops
turn.
that were falling into German hands,
As
but
he
generals
works,
too.
he thinks of the
On
woman
May
who
the
lives
19th,
3
General
doors down.
Giraud, newly appointed
Her
commander
husband
of the
was
French
taken
Ninth
away in
Army,
the
was
early
captured
days of the
by
summer.
a group of tanks, according
She
to
has
the
2
French,
young children,
by a
their
field
faces
kitchen
growing
unit,
thinner
according
and
to the
paler
Germans.
with each passing week. The baker feels a profound, heavy ache in his chest,
But
a
most
deep,
tragic of all
sorrowful love for the
was the
fragile
plight of the
lives
refugee.
resting in his town. He stops kneading. He looks toward the front window, ensuring the heavy blackout curtains are pulled
At one
completely
time,
tight.
12
He
million
looks at the
people were on
carefully
roads
measured
of
mounds
northern
of dough
France,
resting on the table.
bound for goodness
Slowly,
knows where.
deliberately, he reaches beneath the table. From a hidden, hollowed-out space beneath the floorboard, he pulls a tiny, unauthorized handful of flour he had swept from the edges of the mill the day before. He takes a small cup of water. He works quickly, quietly, his heart beating a little faster in the
All the
quiet
civilians
room.
used to come up to us.
He mixes the stolen
and to
dust,
ask us
working
what
it
they were
into
to do,
a small,
because the government had not
imperfect
told them
shape.
what to do. And we all
When he
said,
slides his
"Them
long
things
wooden
stay where
paddle
you
into
are,
the roaring
don't
heat of
get
the
all
brick
the
oven,
rings." But they
he
all
places the grand,
got in a
perfect
panic
loaves in the
and
front.
left.
But tucked away in the very back, in the deepest, darkest corner of the heart, sits the small, extra loaf.
Oh, well, lost in the
Hours
last war,
later,
I took
when the
away my
morning
key,
light
and when I
finally
came back,
washes
I had
over the
key,
street,
but now
the
house.
widow comes into the shop. The bell above the door chimes its soft, familiar greeting. She hands the baker her meager, stamped ration card. Her eyes are tired, fixed on the scuffed wooden floorboards.
My worst
The baker
memory
takes her
was
card.
Seeing
He
two
wraps
German
her allotted,
planes
tiny
coming
piece
along
of bread
at
in brown
roof
paper.
level, machine
But beneath the
gunning,
counter,
and one
hidden from the
realized
street
then
and the
how
world
awful it
outside,
was for
his
the
flour-dusted
refugees.
hand reaches into his apron. With a gentle, unseen sleight of hand, he slips the extra, warm loaf into the bottom of her canvas bag, covering it quickly with the brown paper. He hands the bag across the counter. For a fraction of a second, her eyes meet his. She feels the unexpected weight of the canvas. She feels the warmth radiating against her hip. She does not speak. To speak would be to break the fragile spell of the secret. She simply gives him a slow, almost imperceptible nod. In that single, silent exchange of warm bread, the baker has built a fortress that no army can conquer.
The Germans
He has
had
kept a
advanced
family
200
from starving
miles
for
in
one
just
more day,
7 days.
and far more importantly, he has kept
And
his
on May
own
the
soul
20th,
entirely
They
free.
reached the Channel.
He has drawn a line in the flour,
The
a
Daily
quiet
Telegraph
refusal
reported
to
that
let the
telephone
cruelty
lines
of the
between
world
Paris and
extinguish his
London had been
capacity to
cut.
care.
A
This
post office
gentle,
spokesman said he
stubborn
didn't know
refusal
when normal
began to
service
bloom
might be
quietly in
resumed.
every corner of the country. Walk away from the bakery, down the street, and into the small,
The panzers
echoing
of the
hallway
coast,
of the village
The
schoolhouse.
best of the Allied
It
armies
smells
drawn
of
into
floor
Belgium
wax, wet wool
were
coats,
now
and the
cut off
sweet,
from the
chalky
sun.
dust of learning.
Belated
In a
as the
classroom
French
at the
tried
end
to
of the
force a way
hall,
through
a
to
young
them,
teacher named Madeline
attack
is
was
standing
too
before a room of children.
but they argued the
The
British
wooden
had let
desks
them
are
down.
scarred with the carved initials of generations past.
Recriminations
On her
started
desk sits a
with
stack of brand
the
new textbooks, their
unilateral,
covers stiff and their pages crisp.
withdrawal of the British
They were
army.
delivered the week before by the
The
new
orders
authorities.
were to attack south.
They are books
southward.
filled with altered maps and
near
rewritten
us.
histories, designed to make these
And
children feel
without,
small, defeated,
warning,
and
we
disconnected
happened
from
to
the
know
deep,
that the British
beautiful
were
roots of their own
withdrawing to
heritage.
Dunkirk.
Madeline looks out at her students. They are so young, their minds like soft,
We
damp
have
clay
not the
waiting to
right
be
to
shaped.
criticize this too much,
She
because
feels a
after
fierce,
all,
protective,
we were the
maternal
bosses,
instinct
and we
rise
lost
up within
the
her,
battle.
a wall of
And
pure love
this
shielding them
gives a
from the
good
cold
excuse
winds
for the British
outside.
to be selfish.
She
But
walks
anyway,
to the
they
heavy
were
wooden
very
door of her classroom. She looks out into the empty hallway. Then, she gently pushes the door, listening for the soft, reassuring click of the iron latch falling into place. She walks back to the front of the room. She picks
May
up
the
one of the
25th,
new,
Boulogne
crisp
fell.
textbooks. She holds it up for the children to see, and then, with a quiet,
On May the
deliberate
26th,
grace, she drops it into
Calais.
the empty wastebasket beside her desk. The children
Bacon's
gasp
appointment
softly,
had given the
their
French
eyes
a
wide with
flicker
a
of
mixture of
optimism.
fear and absolute awe.
It soon faded when his
Madeline
counterattack
kneels
failed,
down, bringing her
and news
face
of
level with
Belgium's
theirs.
capitulation reached Paris
She
on May
lowers
the
her voice
28th.
to a soft, melodic whisper,
Thereafter,
a secret shared
The
among
mood became
friends.
steadily more.
Close your
and more
books, she whispers,
defeated.
her eyes shining with a gentle, fierce light.
I think
Today,
the
we are going to
defeatism
talk about the
came at
poets.
the top.
We are
There was
going to
a
talk
very
about the
strong
painters who captured the
peace
light of the
move among
sun
certain
and the kings who built the
Some of
beautiful
them were
bridges
even
across our
pro-German
rivers.
and wanted jobs
We are
with the
going to
Germans.
remember who
when
we
things
are.
went badly,
She begins to tell them
this
the true
group
stories.
got larger and
She
became more
recites
dominant.
lines of forbidden poetry from memory, the
Prime
beautiful,
Minister Reynaud
rhythmic words
fought
floating
back
through the
by
quiet air
dismissing
of the
from his
classroom
cabinet
like
some of the weaker
invisible
spirits and
birds.
bringing in fighting men like
She
de
draws
Gaulle,
the true shape of
now
their country
entering
on the
political arena
blackboard,
for the first
tracing the
time.
winding rivers and the
The war
ancient
was
mountains with the
virtually
soft
out of
white
their
chalk.
Perhaps it
She
was
is
that
not
that
teaching
prompted
them to
the
fight.
special service of prayer at
She is
Notre
teaching
Dame
them to
on
remember.
that Sunday before
She is
Dunkirk.
planting tiny, indestructible seeds in the fertile, waiting soil of their young minds. Every whispered truth, every recited poem is a shield forged of words. She is ensuring that when the winter finally breaks, the children will know exactly what kind of flowers are supposed to grow in their gardens. These were the silent rebellions, woven seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary days. It was the seamstress who, when tasked with mending the heavy wool coats of the occupying officers, would quietly, carefully sew a tiny, hidden emblem of the old, free flag deep inside the lining of the sleeve, right where it would rest against their wrists without them ever knowing. It was the postman who would look at an envelope bearing an address of someone in danger and simply, accidentally, let it slip from his satchel into the dark, rushing waters of the river below the bridge. It was the profound, beautiful insistence on remaining deeply human. It was the refusal to forget how to smile at a neighbor, the refusal to look away when passing a friend on the street, the stubborn dedication to sharing a pot of weak tea and laughing softly in the dark. And as the day would slowly fade into the deep, heavily enforced dark of the curfew, the resistance would retreat even further inward, down into the very earth itself. Imagine a cellar beneath an old farmhouse. The air down here is incredibly cool, smelling of damp stone, old potatoes, and the deep, silent earth. It is a place of shadows and secrets. A young man sits at a small, unsteady wooden table in the center of the dark. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a single wooden match. He strikes it against the rough stone wall. The sudden hiss and flare of the yellow light is shocking in the absolute blackness. He touches the flame to the wick of a single, small wax candle. The flame dances frantically for a moment, finding its breath, before settling into a soft, steady teardrop of light. It casts long, wavering, beautiful shadows across the vaulted stone ceiling.
But after 3 days of bloody
the young
fighting,
man pulls a piece of thin paper toward him.
once more overtook the French.
He uncaps a bottle of ink. He wraps his cold hands around the base of the candle for just a moment, letting the tiny, radiant warmth seep into his stiff fingers.
Another breakthrough by Rommel.
He begins to write.
In a matter of
Perhaps
hours,
he is writing a newsletter, copying out the words he heard faintly on the radio the night before, translating the crackling static into sentences of hope. Perhaps he is simply writing a letter to be slipped beneath the doors of his neighbors, a letter that says nothing more than, I am still here. You are not alone. Do not be afraid.
The panzers were
He writes in
almost
absolute
effortlessly
silence,
through the
the
heartland
only
of
sound the
France.
soft, rhythmic scratching of his pen against the paper. He is completely alone in the damp earth, surrounded by millions of tons of stone and the heavy, sleeping weight of the occupied world above him.
All roads pointed
The light
to
of his
Paris.
single candle is so incredibly small.
On June the 10th, the French
It is so
government
fragile that a sudden
left
sigh,
Paris.
a harsh breath, could extinguish
That
it
day,
entirely, plunging him
Mussolini
back into
brought
the
Italy
terrifying
into the war.
dark. And yet, in that cellar, it is the most powerful thing in the
day
world.
we left Paris,
It pushes the darkness back,
we
inch
were
by
into
delicate
this
inch.
Vincennes,
It illuminates the paper.
headquarters of
It illuminates his
Gamelin.
hands. It illuminates the
And,
unyielding, quiet courage of a heart that
we
simply
have on the
refuses to
radio
stop speaking into the
all
void.
the, songs
These were the
and music
candles in the cellar.
of the Italian war.
They were the bakers, the
John
teachers,
Finanza
the seamstresses,
all
and the
that.
dreamers holding their tiny,
And
fragile flames
so-
in the hollows of their
And
hands.
that is where I
They
heard
did not
the
have the
first
power
time
to stop the
somebody say
armies,
it can't
or to
go
tear
on
down the
like that.
borders, or to
We
banish the
must
winter
have
in a
help.
single night.
We had the
But as they
greatest
slept in their
difficulty getting out of
beds,
Paris
beneath
with
the heavy
everybody.
boots and the altered skies,
Although
they were
Paris was
already
empty,
weaving the
all
tapestry of their
roads
own return.
outside Paris were absolutely
They were
full
keeping the memory of the
cars.
warmth alive.
People even going in and out
The
of
night
trees
was long,
at the
and the
side
frost
to
was
try and
bitter,
get ahead.
but beneath the frozen earth,
But
the roots
we
were
able to
perfectly
get
safe.
off the main roads
And guarded by these
into-
quiet,
into
everyday
the
heroes
countryside.
holding their hidden
And
lights
then
in the
it was
dark,
most
the human
extraordinary
spirit
because it was
waited
beautiful
gently,
weather.
patiently,
All the
entirely
villagers
unbroken,
were very
ready to guide the
welcoming
morning
and
home.
brought out their best
There is a
cognac,
specific
their best
kind of
wine,
cold
because
that
they
does
said,
not
"What's
simply
good of
chill the
leaving it
skin,
for the
but settles
Germans?"
deep into the very wood and stone of a home, waiting quietly in the corners of every room. When the first winter of the occupation arrived, it did not announce itself with a sudden, violent blizzard. It crept in slowly, carried on a damp, gray wind that stripped the last of the golden autumn leaves from the chestnut trees. The sky lowered, losing its brilliant blue, turning into a vast, unbroken ceiling of pale slate. And as the days grew shorter, the vibrant, noisy world of the past retreated entirely, leaving behind a landscape muffled by frost and wrapped in a heavy, shivering silence. This was not a normal winter. The turning of the season brought with it a cold that was both physical and profoundly emotional. In the years before, the approach of December meant the cheerful glow of coal fires burning brightly in the grates of Parisian apartments and country cottages alike. It meant the smell of roasted chestnuts on the street corners and the thick, heavy steam rising from large copper pots of stew. But now, the coal bins were empty. The trains that once brought the black, Dusty
The new
fuel from
Prime
the
Minister,
mines were
Marshal
moving
Pétain,
eastward,
asked
carrying
the
the
Germans
warmth
for
of the
an
nation
armistice.
away to a foreign land.
Renault had been opposed
The
to a second
firewood
peace
was
and
strictly
resigned.
rationed, a luxury
In
few
most
could
of
find
France,
and fewer could
the news
afford.
of an armistice was
The
received.
people were left to face the
with
deep,
relief.
settling freeze with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the quiet,
Hitler
stubborn
insisted
resilience
on
of their
using
own
for the
hearts.
negotiations
Imagine an
Marshal Foch's old
elegant, aging
railway
apartment
carriage in the
building on a
woods of
quiet
Compiègne,
street in the city.
where the 1918
The grand
armistice had been
fireplaces,
signed.
framed in carved marble,
Was the
stand dark
supreme
and hollow,
humiliation
swept clean of
for
even the
France.
faintest memory of ash. The temperature inside the rooms is scarcely warmer than the freezing air out on the pavement. In one of these apartments lives a woman named Marguerite. She is a woman who has always taken pride in her appearance, in the neatness of her hair and the crisp press of her blouses. But the rules of the world have changed, and vanity
One
is a
must
luxury
have
that
lived
belongs to the summer.
retreat in
To
France.
survive the day,
This
Marguerite wears
enormous
2 woolen sweaters,
movement
a
of,
thick woolen skirt,
crowds
and her late husband's
is
heavy
something
tweed
which
overcoat.
you can't
She wears
understand if
knit
you haven't
gloves
seen
with the
it.
fingertips carefully
We
cut
thought
away
that
so she can
really
still
that
hold
had
a
to be
teacup or
stopped.
turn the pages of a book. She moves through her home with a slow, deliberate grace, her breath pluming in small, white clouds before her face in her own living room.
Once the
There is a
French had
quiet
signed,
dignity in her slow
Hitler
movements.
ordered the site destroyed.
The cold makes everything difficult.
Germany had had
Washing
its
her
revenge.
face in the morning with water that has a thin skim of ice over the porcelain basin requires a quiet gathering of courage. Yet, she does it. She brushes her hair. She sweeps the floor. She refuses to let the freezing air strip away
Paris
the
radio,
gentle
now under
routines of
German
her
control,
humanity.
broadcast the terms
When
of
she
the
walks to her
armistice.
tall, glass windows, she finds that the world outside has been obscured. The frost has crept across the window panes. It is a breathtaking, delicate masterpiece of nature, swirling in intricate, fern-like patterns of pale, glittering white. The glass is entirely covered in this frozen lace, a beautiful but impenetrable curtain that separates her from the street below. She reaches out with a gloved hand and presses her bare fingertip against the glass. The warmth of her skin melts a tiny, perfect circle in the frost. She peers through this small, clear keyhole into the
Paris
gray
had now to
afternoon.
adapt to a new
The street
wave
is
of
empty.
tourists.
The
Among
world
the
feels
first was Hitler
unimaginably
himself.
vast and lonely. But she
Here the
knows she
guns
is not
would
alone.
halt the Hun.
Because in a world where the
Provided
physical
the Hun
fires have
came
been
this way.
extinguished, the people learn to become the warmth for one another. Down the dark, unheated hallway of Marguerite's building lives an older man named Monsieur Bernard. He is frail, a retired clockmaker whose hands now shake too much to hold his delicate tools. The cold aches terribly in his ancient joints. Marguerite steps away from the window. She walks into her small kitchen. On her counter sits a tiny, smuggled spirit stove, no larger than a teacup, and a single, wrinkled root vegetable she had stood in line for 3 hours to obtain. She strikes a precious match, shielding the tiny flame, and lights the stove. She places a small tin pot of water over the fire, dropping the sliced vegetable into the warming water, along with a tiny pinch of hoarded salt. It is not a rich, thick stew. It is little more than hot water and memory. But as the steam begins to rise, curling beautifully into the freezing air, it carries the faint, comforting scent of earth and sustenance.
Thank
When the broth
God
is
for the
ready,
French
she does
army,
not eat
said
it all.
Winston Churchill when Hitler came to
She
power.
pours half of the hot,
But in
clear liquid into a
1933,
chipped ceramic bowl.
The French army was no longer
She
the
wraps a
superlative
thin
weapon
towel
it
around
once
the
had
bowl
been.
to protect her hands and carefully, slowly, walks
French
out of her
military
apartment
manuals
and down the
devoted
shadowed
page
hall.
after page to the tactics
She
of the
knocks
First
softly
War.
on Monsieur Bernard's door.
Although Hitler had said,
When he opens
the
it,
next war
he is
will
wrapped
be
in an
very
old
different
quilt,
from the last.
his shoulders hunched against the chill. Marguerite does not offer pity. She simply offers the bowl.
the French had helped introduce
I made
the
too
tank
much,
and the airplane.
she whispers, a gentle,
But now
beautiful
did little to
lie that they
extend
both
it.
understand.
Their
Monsieur
pioneer
Bernard
motor
takes the ceramic
transport in
bowl.
warfare.
The heat
went back
radiates through
now
the
to relying
towel,
on
seeping
railways and the
instantly
horse.
into his numb, stiff fingers.
Especially the horse.
He closes his eyes. A slow, trembling sigh escapes his lips as the warmth travels up his arms. He looks at Marguerite, his eyes shining with unshaped tears.
It was
He does
a
not have the words to
very
thank
deep
her.
decay.
He simply
Probably
nods,
caused by
a
the
profound, silent
excessive
acknowledgement of the
effort
grace she
during
has
the
just
First
handed to
World
him in
War.
the dark.
We
This was the
suffered from
currency
a
of the
illness
occupation.
which is not,
Not
peculiar to
gold
the
or
French.
paper money,
The
but the
illness
sharing of tiny,
having been
vital
victorious
comforts.
in and
It was the
believing
transferring
that
of
we were
warmth
right
from
and
one
very
pair of
clever.
hands to another. Far away
The big
from the
place,
city,
a very
out in the
dangerous,
sprawling, snow-covered countryside, the winter felt even more vast. The fields were buried beneath a heavy, unbroken blanket of white, the farmhouses sitting like lonely, isolated
France
islands
between
in
the
a frozen
walls
sea.
was deeply divided.
In a small stone cottage at the edge of a
Factions
silent
clashed,
forest, a
alliances
young woman
altered.
sits at her wooden
Cabinets
kitchen
came and
table.
went in the cascade. Some
The
lasted
fire
a
in
few
her hearth
hours,
has burned down
some
to
a
a
few
few
months.
glowing, orange
Rarely
embers,
did one
casting
last a whole
long,
year.
soft shadows across the stone floor. It is late at night. The silence outside is absolute,
very day
broken
Hitler came
only
to
by the
power,
occasional,
France was
sharp
without a
crack of a
government.
tree branch snapping under the weight of the snow.
It was again without one.
She
when he
has a
marched
single
into
candle
Austria
burning
5
on the
years
table.
later.
Beside it is a piece of thin, crinkled paper and a bottle of ink. The ink is so cold it is sluggish,
The left
clinging
in
heavily to
France
the
was
nib of her
concerned more
pen.
with hounding rogues in high
She
places
is writing
at
to
home
her husband,
than
who is
curbing
being held in a
fascism
camp
elsewhere.
hundreds of miles away, somewhere deep in the
The
frozen
right
east.
so hated the left.
Her fingers are stiff,
prepared
and her
to
handwriting is
countenance
slightly
dictatorship.
clumsy from the cold, but she writes with a fierce,
As early
quiet
as
dedication.
1934, the victor of Verdun,
She does not write about
Marshal
the empty
Pétain,
coal bin,
was
or the
proposed as
hunger that
France's
hollows her
savior from
cheeks,
communism,
or the
although he was
terrifying
then nearly
stillness
80.
of the winter nights.
These deep
She knows he
divisions
has enough cold
were
of
to
his own
fetter
to bear.
France when she faced the
Instead,
need
she
to
sends him
rearm.
warmth.
The whole of
The snow is beautiful today,
possessing
she
classes,
writes,
the
the
right,
nib scratching softly in the quiet room. It covers the garden like a thick, white
idea
quilt.
of the Germans
Do you
to their
remember
own
the summer
communists.
before you left?
You didn't have to walk
Do you
around
remember
these
how the
streets
sun
and see
felt on our
pourquoi,
shoulders when we
pourquoi,
walked down to the river?
written on them, or the hammer
I can
and
still
sickle to
feel that
realize
sun.
that nobody was going to lift a
I have
finger.
kept it entirely safe for you. When I close my eyes, I am sitting with you on the bank, and the water is warm, and the grass is green. I am sending you that sunshine, my love. Keep it in your pocket.
France in the
Look at it
30s
when the
built
wind
a series
blows.
of great forts along her
She
frontier
folds the
with
paper,
Germany.
pressing the creases flat.
And because her war minister
She
then
holds the
happened to be
letter
one
over the
André
tiny flame of the
Maginot,
candle for just a moment,
these forts
not
came to
close
be
enough
known
to burn,
as
but
the
close
Maginot
enough to
Line.
let the paper absorb a fraction of the heat.
The
She
Maginot
imagines
forts
the
were
warmth
truly
trapping itself
20th
between the
century
folded
wonders.
pages, a physical, glowing
Electric
embrace
trains
that
took the
will
troops
somehow
from barracks
survive
to
the
gun
long
turret,
journey
from
across the
arsenal to
snow,
canteen.
arriving safely in his
With
cold,
cinemas underground,
waiting hands.
sunray rooms, air conditioning.
As the night deepens,
the loft.
the true, punishing depth of the winter cold sets in.
Theirs was a vast
The
Jules
temperature
Verne type of
plummets,
world,
turning
hundreds
the
of
air
feet
inside
below
the
ground.
homes sharp and biting.
They
In
called it
these
the Shield of
darkest,
France.
coldest hours, the families
The
of
Maginot
France
Line
practiced
failed
a
to protect all
beautiful,
of France's
necessary
eastern
ritual
flank.
of survival.
It was only 87 miles
They did
long,
not try to heat their entire homes.
and it stopped.
They abandoned their parlors
250
and their
miles
formal
short of the
dining
channel.
rooms to the frost. Instead, they gathered together in a single, small room, pulling their lives into the tightest, warmest circle they could make. Imagine a family of 4, joined by an elderly aunt who lives alone down the lane.
Should the alarm
They
ever
have
have to
pulled
sound
2
in grim
mattresses
earnest,
onto the floor of the
French
small kitchen,
strategists argued
pushing them
that their
closely
troops would need
together.
to confront the Germans on
They do
Belgium,
not have
if not
pajamas of
German
fine
soil.
silk or warm flannel.
Besides,
They
to
wear their
extend the
daytime
Maginot
sweaters,
Line along
their
the
thick
Belgian
woolen
frontier
socks,
would not
and their
only be
knit caps.
expensive, but would make the
They lie
Belgians
down
think that
together,
if war came,
shoulder to
France would
shoulder,
forsake
a
them.
knot of humanity resting on the floorboards. Over them,
The
they
folly of
pile
this thinking
everything
was
they
shown
own.
up in 1936.
There is a heavy,
When
faded
without
woolen
consulting the
blanket.
French, the
There is a
Belgian King
patchwork quilt,
Leopold
soft and
opted for
worn from
neutrality
years of use.
and closed his
There is
borders.
an old, heavy
even to
tapestry
French
pulled down
military
from a
observers.
wall, and even a heavy canvas tarp usually used to cover the woodpile.
All too late.
It is a
France began
strange,
extending the
mismatched
Maginot
mountain
Line
of
to the
fabric,
sea.
heavy enough to make breathing a slow,
May
deliberate
1940,
effort.
It was
But
far
beneath
from
that heavy mountain, a profound and soothing magic takes place. The heat of their bodies, trapped beneath the thick layers, begins to mingle. Slowly, miraculously, the icy chill retreats. The small, enclosed space beneath the blankets grows deeply, comfortingly warm. The frozen toes begin to thaw. The shivering ceases.
France had suffered
Lying
a
there
terrible
in the
loss
pitch
of life
black,
in the Great
surrounded by the soft, rhythmic
Now
breathing
French
of the
military
people they
thinking
love
became
most in the
wholly
world,
defensive,
the heavy burden of the
forgetting
occupation
Napoleon's
simply
favourite
falls
maxim,
away.
The side
Under
that
the
stays within
blankets,
its
there are no
fortifications
guards,
is beaten.
no rations, and no borders. There is only the sweet, reliable warmth of family. To keep the darkness at bay, they whisper to one another. The father tells a story in a low, rumbling
Since the
voice,
French
a
spurned
gentle
any
fairy
notion
tale
of
about a
taking the
kingdom where it
offensive,
is always
The
spring.
Maginot Line ironically
The children
protected
listen,
Germany
their
better than
eyes
it
heavy,
protected France.
drifting towards sleep on the sound of his
A
comforting
German
words.
colonel, Heinz Guderian,
The
the year
elderly
Maginot
aunt
Line was
softly hums a
completed, published
lullaby
book
from her
with a
own
prophetic
childhood,
title,
a melody older than
Achtung,
the stones of
Panzer.
the house, weaving a
The book
delicate
was never
thread of
properly
peace through
studied
the
by
dark.
the French or the English
They
general
are a
staff.
single,
Yet
breathing
these pages
entity,
expound
keeping
a new
each other
kind of
alive
warfare,
through the profound
the
intimacy
concentrated
of
use
shared
tanks
warmth.
with infantry and air force
Outside,
close
the wind
support.
begins to howl, sweeping the snow across the empty roads and rattling the loose wooden shutters of the towns. The frost thickens on the window panes, drawing its beautiful,
tanks in the
icy
First
curtains
World
tighter
War. We
and
knew all
tighter,
the
sealing the
difficulties of
people
the
into
game.
their homes.
While the Germans
It is a
who
long,
didn't have
dark
them
winter.
had,
It is a
had the
season of
feeling
profound
those who
endurance,
were
a
attacked
time
by
when
tanks.
simply waking up and making a
while
cup
we
of hot
considered
water
that
is
the
an act of
tanks were
quiet,
little
beautiful
awkward
defiance.
and difficult to use,
But as the
the
millions of
Germans
souls
kept
sleep
the
huddled
new
together
weapons,
beneath their heavy
and
blankets,
appetite
sharing their
for
warmth
renewing.
and their whispered stories, they hold on to a secret that the winter can never understand. They know that the frost on the glass is fragile.
Paris.
They
July
know
the
that no
14th,
matter how deep the snow falls
1939.
or how bitter the wind blows, the
The
earth is
last
still
Bastille
turning.
Day parade of the
Beneath
Third
the frozen crust of the soil, the roots of the chestnut trees and the delicate bulbs
A
of
few
the
days
spring
earlier,
flowers are
Britain's war
simply
minister
resting.
visiting Paris had said,
They are sleeping,
France
just as
has
the
the
people are
greatest army
sleeping,
in the world.
waiting patiently for the inevitable turning of the
like the
world.
parade itself.
The
Such
cold has
statements were meant
changed their
merely to
world,
raise
but it
morale.
has not frozen their hearts. The gentle kindness of a shared bowl of broth,
Parisians
the
had hardly
warmth of
got
a
back
letter
from their
written in the
holidays
dark,
before they found
and the
themselves
comforting embrace of a
once more
family
at
huddled
war
on the floor,
with their
these are the
traditional
embers
foe.
that cannot be extinguished. They rest now in the deep, quiet night. They breathe softly in the dark. And though the frost covers the window panes, they dream beautifully,
But whereas
peacefully,
in
of the day
1914
when
the
the
cry had
gentle
been
sun
on
will
to
finally
Berlin,
return to melt the ice,
this time
to
it
warm
was,
the stones,
"Let's get it
and to
over
call
with."
the waiting blossoms back into the light. There is a profound and ancient secret kept by the winter earth, a gentle promise whispered only to those who
Ironically,
know how
French
to wait in the
mobilization
dark.
was too efficient.
When the deep snows
The call-up
finally
of
fell
skilled
over the country,
technicians brought
softening
many
the
vital
sharp
war
edges of the
industries
world
almost to
and
a
wrapping
halt.
the quiet villages in a
It was only
thick,
after weeks of
glittering blanket of
confusion
white,
that
a
these
stranger
men were
looking out
released.
over the landscape might have thought the land was defeated. The towering chestnut trees stood bare and skeletal against the pale gray sky, their branches stripped of their vibrant green leaves. The wide, meandering rivers slowed their joyful rushing, their edges creeping with fragile, jagged lace of ice.
Nor was France going
The
to war
cobblestone
united.
streets of the great cities,
The bitternesses
once
of
alive
French
with the
politics
symphony of
continued.
millions of footsteps,
Ministers
lay
looked to
muffled
their own
and hollow
futures
beneath the
instead of their
frost.
countries.
To the eyes of
many
the men
took
who
their
had
cue
marched
from
across
such
the
leadership.
borders, who had brought with them the heavy, mechanical thunder of a changing world, the silence of the snow looked like a final
Paris didn't
surrender.
alter much with the coming of
They
war,
looked at the
save in
frozen
appearance.
fields and the shuttered
The most
windows,
popular song
and
that
they
autumn of
believed they had
1939
successfully
was
quieted the
Paris
heartbeat of
will
a
always
nation.
be Paris.
But they did not understand the language of the earth. They did not know that a forest does not die simply because it sheds its leaves to the wind. Nature, in her infinite and quiet wisdom, knows that there are times when the storm above is simply too fierce to fight. She knows that when the bitter winds blow and the frost sinks its teeth into the soil, the only way to survive is to draw the life force inward, to pull it down, away from the freezing air, away from the vulnerable branches, and hide it deep within the warm, impenetrable sanctuary of the dark soil. This is the great, quiet miracle of the winter. And in that long, shadowed season of occupation, it became the miracle of the people, too. The spirit of the country did not vanish when the flags were taken down and the open sky was surrendered. It simply retreated. It slipped quietly beneath the surface of the days, sinking deep into the private, untouchable soil of the human heart. It became the
While
roots
their Polish
beneath the
allies
snow.
were being routed in the east,
Imagine an old
the French,
winemaker
like the British,
standing alone in his
did
vineyard
little
on
in
a
the west.
freezing, mist-shrouded
there was
morning.
the so-called Saar
The hills
offensive,
roll
the
away
only
from him in
French
endless
offensive, in
waves of
fact, the
pale,
war.
undisturbed white. Before him stand the long, meticulous rows of his grapevines. They look like nothing more than twisted, blackened sticks of dead protruding from the snowdrifts.
A few French
They look
divisions
broken.
advanced 5 miles.
They look entirely
but
devoid
they
of
didn't
life.
even try to penetrate the
But the
Siegfried
old man
line,
does
at that
not
time
see
still
dead wood.
unfinished. And while
He wears
Poland
thick,
fought on,
woolen
there were
gloves,
no
his
German
breath
tanks at
rising
all
in
on
soft,
the Western
white
Front.
plumes in the freezing
The
air.
newsreel commentators of the
He
day,
reaches
though,
out and gently
didn't
cups a
doubt the
gnarled,
French resolve.
frozen vine in his hands.
We have read those
He
communications from the
closes
French
his
High
eyes.
Command.
He knows that deep within the hardened, sleeping wood, far below the frost line where the icy wind cannot reach, the sap is resting. It is waiting. It holds the memory of the summer sun, the memory of the sweet, heavy fruit, and the ancient, encoded promise that when the earth eventually tilts back toward the light, it will rise again. He strokes the rough bark, leaving a silent, beautiful blessing in the cold air. He is not just tending to his vineyard, he is tending to his faith. He knows that endurance is not always allowed, triumphant roar. Most of the time, endurance is simply the quiet, stubborn refusal to stop breathing. All across the occupied land, millions of invisible roots were holding tightly to the dark earth, waiting out the winter. These roots were made of small, beautiful, everyday things. They were made of the stories whispered by grandmothers in the flickering, amber light of a single candle. When the heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight, and the unfamiliar footsteps echoed on the pavement outside, a grandmother would pull her grandchildren close around her on the faded parlor rug. She would not speak of the soldiers or the curfews. She would speak of the old days. She would tell them the legends of their region, the fairy tales of brave knights and clever peasant girls, wrapping the children in the warm, protective embrace of their own language and their own history. With every softly spoken word, she was watering the roots. She was ensuring that the children knew exactly who they were, so that when the snow finally melted, they would not have forgotten the shape of their own souls. The roots were made of the letters hidden safely beneath the loose floorboards of a country farmhouse. A young wife, her husband miles away in a silent, distant camp, would sit by the dying embers of the hearth and read his last letter until the paper was as soft as cloth. She memorized the loops of his handwriting, holding onto the mundane, beautiful details of his words. He had written about a bird he saw resting on a wire, and about how much he missed the smell of the pine trees behind their home. She folded the letter and pressed it to her heart, letting his love anchor her to the world. She was keeping their shared life safe, burying it deeply within her chest where the frost could never touch it. The roots were made of the quiet, unspoken solidarity of neighbors. They were made of the baker who saved a handful of flour to make an extra loaf for the hungry widow. They were made of the teacher who carefully locked the door of her classroom to teach her students the true, unedited history of their beautiful land. They were made of the simple, passing glances shared between strangers on a crowded tram, a brief, silent meeting of the eyes that said, "I am still here. You are still here. We are waiting together." To wait is one of the most difficult things a human being can do. It requires a monumental, silent strength. It requires the heart to function like a slow, steady metronome, ticking away the days, the weeks, and the months in the dark. As the long winter of the occupation stretched on, time began to feel different. It grew heavy and thick, like the ice forming over the village ponds. The days blurred into one another, a continuous, muted gray holding pattern. But even in the deepest, most suffocating depths of the cold, there is a profound peace to be found in the rhythm of the natural world.
Life at the front.
If you walk into a quiet forest in the very dead of winter, when the snow is piled high against the trunks of the ancient oaks, you will hear a silence so pure it feels like a physical presence. It is a restful, healing silence. The earth is asleep.
Badly paid.
It is gathering its strength. It is repairing the invisible, microscopic fibers of life, preparing for the colossal effort of the coming spring. The people of France, scattered across the shut-up cities and the isolated, snowbound farms, were sharing in this deep, restorative sleep. They were tired. They were heartbroken, but they were resting. In a small attic room overlooking the rooftops of Paris, a young poet sits wrapped in a heavy blanket. The room is freezing, but he does not notice. He is looking out the small, dormer window at the snow falling softly over the iconic, darkened skyline. He watches the millions of tiny, delicate flakes drifting down from the heavens, covering the slate roofs and the chimney pots in a soft, forgiving white. He picks up his pen. The snow falls, he writes, his hand moving slowly, peacefully across the page.
General Gamelin
It covers
rarely
the
set
monuments
foot
they have
outside his own
claimed,
headquarters.
and it covers the streets they
Already
patrol.
68 at the beginning of
It makes the whole
1940,
world soft
his
and
military
quiet
record was so
and new.
impeccable that no one dreamed of
They
asking
think
him
the
to make
winter
way
is
for a
their
younger
ally.
man.
They think the cold has
Gamelin
turned
was
us to stone.
very clever,
But they do not
but
know that beneath this snow,
with no
we are
guts at
dreaming.
all, and
We
he
are a
was
nation
liked
of
by the
seeds,
politicians
buried in the
because he
dark,
was an easy
gathering our
commander in
strength.
chief.
We are learning the
Gamelin
patience of
chose
the
for
oak
his
tree.
headquarters this chateau at
We are
Vincennes,
learning the quiet courage of the
outside
dormant
Paris.
vine. He pauses,
That choice
watching a single snowflake land
reveals
gently
what
on
the
the
man
glass
was,
of his
you know.
window pane.
The enemy were not
Let the winter
Germans,
have
it
its
was the
time,
French
he
government.
continues. Let the wind howl,
Vincennes
and let
was
the
where
frost
England's
bite.
Henry V died,
We will not fight the snow.
and where the spy
We
Mataha
will let
was
it blanket
executed.
us. We will sleep beneath it, warm in our memories,
It
safe
was
in our
described by
shared,
one
unspoken
visitor
love.
as a submarine without
And
a
while we
periscope.
sleep, our roots will grow deeper.
Almost unbelievably, it had
They will
no
intertwine
radio
in the dark,
communication,
holding
was
us
not linked by
together,
teleprint
so
with
that when
any
the
other
sun
headquarters
finally
in the field.
returns, we will not just
Instead,
bloom as single
messages were dispatched
flowers.
regularly on the hour.
We will
by
rise as an
motorcycle.
entire, unbreakable meadow. He sets his pen
Gamelin
down,
seldom
feeling a
bothered his staff
profound,
with orders,
settling calm wash over his
preferring
tired
simply to
mind.
suggest guidelines.
He blows out his small candle, leaving the room illuminated only by the pale, silver glow of the snow
His
outside.
long-term strategy
He
was to wait
lies
until
back
the
on
Allies
his
could
narrow
match the
cot,
Germans
pulls
in
the
numbers
heavy
and
wool
equipment
blanket up to
before
his
launching
chin,
any
and
major
closes his
offensive,
eyes,
even though
surrendering
that
to
would
the
mean
quiet
waiting
night.
until 1941.
This is the gentle,
Meanwhile,
enduring
he
truth
was
that
concerned to
carried
keep
them
the
through
war
the
away
dark.
from French soil.
No winter,
Hence
no
his
matter how
interests
harsh,
in any
no
odd
matter how
stratagem
long,
pushed his
has
way.
ever lasted forever.
We had
The earth
plan
is a
to
vast,
go
ancient
to-
wheel,
to
turning
attack
slowly
Russia
but inevitably
through,
toward the light.
Norway,
The ice must
Narvik,
eventually crack.
which led to the landing
The snow
in
must
Narvik.
eventually yield to the
And we
warming
had a
soil.
plan to attack the,
You do not need to see
oil
the spring to know
plants
that it is
back
coming.
From Syria.
You only need to trust the
We
roots.
had plans to
Think of the
raise
millions of souls sleeping
the
beneath that
Balkans with
heavy,
us
historical
by
frost.
landing, in
Think of the
Salonika
mothers,
and
the
joining
farmers, the
Yugoslavs
bakers,
and
the
so
soldiers,
on,
and the
But all
children.
this was dreams.
They had lost their
absolutely
beautiful illusion of
foolish.
safety.
And out
They had
the
watched the sky
reality.
darken and the
But
borders
that
close.
stemmed from the fact that we
They had
thought
walked
that
the endless,
war
dusty
couldn't be
roads of
decided
exile,
on the main
and they
front
had stood
because
weeping
of
on the sidewalks as their beloved cities were
of
quieted.
that front.
They had
Gamelin
endured
had
the breaking
100
of their
divisions on
world.
that front in May 1940,
But they had
plus
not
another
broken.
10 of the British expedition
They had
force.
simply folded themselves inward, becoming small,
40
quiet,
manned the
and
Maginot
resilient.
Line, while 5
They had hidden
guarded
their
the
light
Swiss
in the
frontier.
cellars. They had sent their
Another
love
40,
across the
the
barbed
best,
wire,
were
and
to
they
go
had
into
listened to
neutral
the
Belgium
faint,
once Germany
crackling
attacked.
whispers of hope riding on the night wind.
But when that happened,
They
the
had
pivot of
performed
Gamelin's
millions
front
of
would be
tiny,
here,
invisible
in
acts
the
of
Ardennes.
everyday heroism, keeping the fragile, beautiful flame of their humanity burning in the absolute dark.
the impenetrable
And now
Ardennes.
they rest.
But
The
was
story of the fall is not a story of an ending. It is the story of a pause. It is the story of a great, collective holding of breath. It is the story of a people learning
On
how to
maps back
survive
at
the darkest
headquarters,
night by
thick
becoming the
woods and narrow,
quiet,
winding
enduring
roads
stars for one
probably
another.
did make the Ardennes seem
As we leave them
impenetrable.
now, in the
Which
deep,
is presumably
silent heart of
why
their
Gamelin
winter,
chose to
we
guard
do
this
not need to feel
100-mile stretch
sorrow.
of front with
We can
10
feel
of
a
his weakest,
profound,
least
soothing
trained,
peace.
worst equipped
We can look
divisions.
at the snow-covered fields and the darkened,
The Ardennes
sleeping
came
cities,
to be
and know
chosen
that everything
for the
that
main
truly
thrust
matters is perfectly safe.
since they offered an
The old
opportunity
winemaker
to
is
circumvent
sleeping
the
in his
Maginot
cottage,
Line.
dreaming of the
And
heavy,
besides,
purple
we were
grapes.
conscious of the fact
The
that
grandmother
there were
is
only
sleeping by the
minor
hearth,
French
dreaming of the
troops
fairy tales she will tell
which
tomorrow.
held
The young wife is
positions
sleeping
in
with a
this
folded
section
letter resting
of
over
the
her
French
heart.
front.
The night is incredibly still. The air is cold, but the earth is holding them gently, cradling them in the dark. Listen closely to the silence. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the slow, steady, rhythmic silence of a sleeping giant. It is the sound of millions of hearts beating in quiet unison, a deep, resonant pulse vibrating just beneath the frost. Let the snow fall. Let the wind whisper through the bare branches.
And quickly.
The roots are deep.
And don't disperse
The
your
roots are
forces.
strong. And in the quiet, patient dark, the beautiful, unbreakable spirit of the people waits, resting softly, gathering its strength,
spring of
holding on to the
1940 was
gentle,
remarkably sunny.
inevitable promise of the morning.
Nowhere was it more peaceful
Sleep
than here
well
in the Ardennes,
in the quiet of the
where
winter.
generals had said the Germans would
Sleep
never
deeply,
attack.
and know that the spring is
Yet
already
reports
on
had
its
been pouring
way.
in that nearly 50